Chapter 16. Storms and Dreams. Hello, Driner here. If you'd like to become a patron and get access to these chapters earlier, just head on over to Patreon and search Driner. www.patreon.com/Driner. Only $1 a month. The following 5 chapters are already available for patrons. Chapter 17, Wabu Doctor. Chapter 18, A Promise. Chapter 19, Whiskey Peak. Chapter 20, A Dragon a Day Hero. And Chapter 21, Wild Night, are already available for patrons. We need to sail now, Nami shouted at her crew as they were running toward the ship. She didn't need to be a navigator to understand that a storm was coming, despite finding it weird that it almost felt that it came out of nowhere. While Nami was thinking of the weather, Luffy was thinking about something else. Closing his eyes, he spread his observation haki as far as possible. He could feel someone coming and another voice nearby, but what caught his attention was the third voice. But Luffy couldn't tell how strong this one was before suddenly disappeared from his observation haki. Luffy's eyes widened. The voice is gone. How is that possible? Or did the voice die? They turned around the corner only to see a woman standing against the wall, breathing heavily. They immediately recognized her marine outfit. Before Luffy could ask the woman to move away, her head raised, her eyes found her target, glaring daggers at a certain swordsman. Who is this beauty? Sanji asked, his eyes filled with heart swell drooling like a dog. The girl ignored the freak before pointing her sword at Zoro. Of all people, Luffy noticed she was alone, not sure if that was brave of her or foolishness or both. You will pay for what you did to me, Zoro. She declared with a dangerous tone, glaring daggers at Zoro, who just brushed off her threats with a shrug of his shoulders. Sanji was enraged, ready to kick the swordsman for harming such a beautiful woman. Usopp saw that coming from a mile away. What did you do, shithead? Sanji shouted while being held by Usopp, who was wondering why exactly these two just couldn't stop fighting. Zoro didn't pay him any attention. Instead, he just quirked an eyebrow at the girl in front of the pirate crew. What are you talking about? I didn't do anything to you. Zoro replied, getting bored of this girl who looked to be able to pop out of nowhere just to annoy him. Before Tashigi could say anything, Luffy took a step forward. Zoro, who is she? Is she your girlfriend? Luffy asked with a teasing tone. This caused the whole crew to snicker, except Zoro, who looked pale, and Sanji, who was crying tears of despair. Both sword users turned red like a tomato before glaring at the pirate captain. He is not my boyfriend, they both shouted in embarrassment. Nijiko burst out laughing. Nami tried to keep on herself, while Usopp was trying to help Sanji to stand up. Shuri, Luffy whispered with a small whistle that only annoyed Zoro even more. I'm here to defeat you, Zoro. Let's fight, the girl declared before unsheathing her sword. Zoro turned towards the girl before unsheathing only one of his swords. The crew immediately understood that he either wasn't taking her seriously, or she wasn't that strong yet. Defeat the shithead, Sanji shouted with hearts in his eyes, earning a facipum from Usopp. Tashigi rushed towards Zoro, but with a single move of his sword, the swordswoman was against the wall, her sword was on the ground, and Zoro was pointing his sword towards her neck. She clenched her teeth, but didn't close her eyes. She was a swordswoman, she couldn't show fear towards death. She expected the finishing blow to come, but instead, Zoro just put his sword back to his scabbard before turning around, walking towards his crew. What? Finish this, why are you not killing me? She demanded in anger. This was humiliating. Nami seriously wondered if the girl had some kind of death wish. It was one thing to challenge a swordsman who is clearly far stronger than you, but then demands to be killed. No, return to me when you're stronger. Only then will we have a rematch, Zoro declared, looking at her. Tashigi's eyes widened at his words. She wasn't sure what to say. Was she supposed to shout or feel grateful? But before the swordswoman could say anything, Luffy decided to end this. Zoro, as much as I'm enjoying this lovely date of yours, we need to return back to going merry, Luffy said with a smirk, clearly enjoying this. Zoro murmured something under his breath before leaving with his captain. Almost reaching the docks, Usopp was the first to see going merry, a wide smile spread around his face. There it is, he shouted, but before they could reach it, white smoke suddenly formed around them. It was thick enough they couldn't even see beyond it, but before anything else could happen, Luffy turned around before punching a certain marine captain in the chest, sending him crashing against concrete. The smoke around them disappeared. Zoro was about to use his swords. Sanji prepared to fight, when Luffy spread out his arm for them to stand behind him. No, everyone, return back to the ship, Luffy ordered with a firm tone, clearly showing he wasn't messing around. His voice lost all the goofing he usually had. The others nodded immediately before rushing back to the ship. The marine captain stood up from the rubble, glaring at the pirate captain, but at the same time confused as hell. Haki, how is it possible in East Blue? He wondered, his fist turned to smoke. How can you use haki? Smoker demanded, glaring at the captain, who didn't show that he was intimidated in the slightest. Actually, he looked uncaring. You're a Logi user, that's rare in East Blue. As for how I know haki, well, a pirate should not reveal his secrets, Luffy stated, the smirk not leaving his face. Smoker rushed towards the Straw Hat Captain. His body turned to smoke. The smoke spread everywhere around Luffy, trying to confuse him. Luffy couldn't see anything but the smoke around him, but he really didn't need to. The Marine Captain suddenly showed up behind Luffy, ready to strike, when Luffy suddenly turned around at last second, punching him again, sending him away. The debris flew everywhere. The front door of a shop and a part of the wall was destroyed. Luffy expected him to stand down, but Smoker slowly stood up again, blood leaking from his mouth, his nose bleeding, but still refusing to stand down. "What is your name?" Luffy asked, impressed by his courage. "My name is Smoker." "My name is Minky D. Luffy. I'm sure we will see each other again," Luffy stated before sending a wave of Conqueror's Haki, far stronger than the one at the execution platform. Smoker suddenly felt dizzy again. A weight held him down, falling to his knees. Smoker felt everything going dark. Later, Smoker opened his eyes slowly. Everything seemed blurry. His ears heard different voices shouting close to him. He was having a bad headache, and the loud voice in his ears was only making it worse. "Shut up," he roared. The soldiers immediately went silent except Tashigi, who looked relieved. "How are you, Captain Smoker?" Tashigi screamed. The captain stood up from the hole he had formed. "Peachy," he answered with a humorless chuckle as he stood up on his legs. The pirate captain had spared him. That was unusual. Smoker wanted to kick himself. He had seen nothing. At the very least, he should have been able to see it coming. But he had seen nothing, only his body slamming against the concrete. But he wasn't going to let them leave. He was Captain Smoker of the Marine. "Persist in your pursuit. They're not leaving this island." "Yes, sir." Luffy. As Luffy was rushing towards his ship, he suddenly felt a new voice close to him. Turning to face the new voice, Luffy's eyes widened. "How did he sneak up on me? And who is he?" Luffy asked himself. He couldn't help but notice how strong this one was. He felt the same level of power as his grandpa. Luffy knew if this person wanted to harm him, he had no way of winning, but he then noticed that this voice felt familiar. "Can you tell me who you are?" Luffy questioned the tall guy with the green cloak. His cowl obscured the man's face, but a burst of light showed a craggy face with a tattoo on his left side. The tattoo, which looked tribal, ran from the man's chin to his forehead. "Pirate King, huh?" As they exchanged glances, the guy laughed. "It's okay with me. If you've made up your mind, then go." "What are you talking about?" Luffy asked, still keeping his guard up. Another lightning struck the sea, and a flash from the lightning illuminated his face again. This time, Luffy was able to see his whole face. Luffy's eyes slightly widened. He remembered his grandfather had once talked to him, Ace, and Sabo about the most dangerous people alive in the world right now. He has shown posters of Whitebeard, Kaido, and a few others that weren't even pirates. One of the posters had the face in front of him. "You have a journey in front of you, so I'm going to be quick," the man stated before he started talking. "What?" Narrowing his eyes dangerously, the Straw Hat could hardly comprehend what the man just said after he proceeded with it, but before Luffy could demand what the man was talking about. "You need to leave. We will eventually meet. Our journey will lead to the same island." Luffy felt new voices coming toward them. When the cloak guy heard the Marines closing upon him, he stood between Luffy and them. Luffy knew he needed to return to his crew. Therefore, he ran towards the ship without looking behind. "Why are you here?" Smoker demanded, recognizing the man standing in front of them. "Why are you helping the Straw Hat?" When Smoker was ignored, he almost bit down his cigarette. He yanked a huge jit from his back, already losing his temper with this man. "Answer me, Dragon." Smoker pointed his weapon, knowing he was no match for a guy like him, hearing gasps from behind, but Smoker didn't pay them attention. Dragon extended his arms out to his sides instead of responding. The wind suddenly stopped, but Dragon kept smiling. Then it started up again, this time with a distinctly green hue, and blew like a storm across the island. The Marines were blown away like ants in strong wind. Many of them flew before slamming into the ground or stores. Smoker braced himself against the wind as much as he could. The wind blew into Log Town like a tornado. "Luffy." The captain reached going merry before any of his crew could greet him. "We need to leave now," Luffy ordered. They all nodded, before preparing the ship to sail away. As the ship was leaving the docks, a wind blew in their direction, helping the ship to take speed. Luffy stood at the back of the ship, Log Town slowly disappearing in the horizon, but the Straw Hat captain had many questions in his head. What the hell did he mean by that? Smoker? Smoker kept trying to hold himself together. The wind was strong, that made every marine around him fly away, his arm in front of his face, trying to open his eyes, when the wind suddenly stopped. What the hell? Smoker stood up, breathing heavily, finally being able to see, but Dragon was nowhere in sight. Smoker wasn't sure if that was for better or worse. Why is a person like him in Log Town of all places? Smoker asked himself. His head was spinning with multiple questions, but with no answers. He knew the man must have some kind of connection with the Straw Hat. Before Smoker could think of a possible answer, he heard footsteps rushing towards his position. Turning around, his eyes saw Tashigi leading several Marines. Deciding to think later about it, Smoker turned to his soldiers. "We need to chase the Straw Hat," Smoker ordered, but it seemed it was already too late. Captain Smoker, we just saw the ship sailing away. We can't follow them in this storm, Tashigi reported. After the wind had died down, a few soldiers had reported to Tashigi that the pirate ship had sailed away. What shall we do, Captain? Tashigi was waiting for instructions. At that moment, Smoker decided that his holiday in Logue Town was over. It seemed he needed to chase the Straw Hats himself. Smoker ordered them to return to the base and every pirate to be arrested. Arriving back at the base, Smoker wasted no time calling the Marine. It was time to leave. Going merry. The storm was still very much causing for the Straw Hats. Nami gave orders to everyone. Despite the waves crashing against the ship, despite the rain, Nami was not going to let Going Merry to sink, not on her watch. Eventually, the storm died down, the rain stopped, and the water calmed down. Nami breathed a sigh of relief. It was finally over, and now the whole crew looked forward, eager to see where their journey would lead them. Grand Line. Seeing the danger was over, for now, Luffy decided to sort of celebrate the beginning of their journey. Grabbing an empty barrel. What are you doing, Luffy? Usopp inquired as he saw Luffy. I believe we should have a ceremony to commemorate the event. With a smile, Luffy answered. Alright, let's do it. Nami flashed a dazzling smile. I'm going to the Grand Line in search of the All Blue. As he positioned his heel on top of the barrel, Sanji stated. The greatest swordsman in the world. As his heel was on top of the barrel, Zoro stated. I'm going to draw the map of the world. Nami grinned as she put her heel at the top of the barrel. I'm going to become the greatest female pirate in the world, Nijiko stated, grinning at her sister. To become a brave warrior of the sea. As he placed his heel on the barrel, Usopp exclaimed. I'm going to be the Pirate King. Luffy stated with a grin. To the Grand Line. The crew shouted in union. The 6 members of the crew all elevated their legs and lowered their heels at the same time. The barrel fell, and the whole crew laughed together. Later. Luffy. It had been just 6 hours since they had left Logue Town, and the storm had yet to subside. Zoro was on watch. Everyone else was asleep, save for Luffy, who was a few feet away from the fridge, Nami, who was writing something in the galley, and Nijiko, who had come to get a drink before bed. What is it, Nami? The quiet moment passed between the two of them before Nami rose from the table and made her way over to her captain. Before he could ask what was up once more, the orange tea pulled Luffy close to herself and sealed their lips together in a searing and deep kiss that conveyed so much emotion that neither of them realized that a full 2 minutes had passed before they broke apart. And Nami. Don't ever do something like that, okay, you idiot. I don't know what I'd do if I ever lost you. But you didn't, he replied with an innocent tilt of his head. You're not only the crew's keystone, you're a rock, Luffy, Nami whispered as she hugged her lover from behind. You can't leave us alone in this world. Promise me that, Luffy, the orange tea sniffed as she gripped him closer. It's a promise, Nami, Luffy pledged as he stood there and threaded his hand together with Nami's, before kissing her on the lips. Smoker. Ha. Garp laughed as he held the speaker for his Den Mushi in his hand. He had connected with Captain Smoker, who was currently pursuing his grandson and his crew. The lower-ranking Marine had spoken with him at length about what had happened in Logue Town, including his confrontation with Luffy and Dragon. So, my no-good son saw my no-good grandson off, eh? Son? Dragon the Revolutionary is your son. Smoker roared into his Den Mushi, the one on Garp's end mimicking the facial expression of the shocked captain. Luffy's father is the most wanted man in the world. Kobe cried out from his spot at the door. Holy shit. Helmeppo gasped as he froze in shock. Did I just say that? Oh, well, forget about that please, I wasn't supposed to tell anyone about that. Then don't say it in the first place. Smoker, Kobe and Helmeppo shouted as one. Anyway, Captain Smoker, it's futile to chase them up the Red Line entrance to the Grand Line. There are too many islands they could potentially head towards on the first leg of their journey down the Paradise. Do you have any suggestions then, Vice Admiral? Alabasta is a good place to lie in wait. Why there? I don't trust the Shichibukai, crocodile. The growl passed through the Den Mushi. I don't need a pirate to help me catch another pirate. Just call it a hunch, Captain Smoker. Yes sir, Smoker muttered as he ordered his men to requisition an eternal pose from Marine HQ for Alabasta. What about you, sir? Fate will allow me to meet my no-good pirate of a grandson once more. I'm not too worried about abandoning the chase for now. Garp grinned as he leaned back and looked over his shoulder at the 2 seaman recruits standing at attention. Besides, it's time that I start training my 2 new proteges seriously. So Marineford then. Well, I wish you luck, sir. The Den Mushi then fell asleep, indicating that the transmission was cut. Geez, doesn't that kid know that the superior officer is the one who hangs up? Garp asked rhetorically as he placed his speaker back on the shell of his Den Mushi. Not that I care about rank anyway. Gahaha. Helmeppo. Yeah, Kobe. It was nice knowing you, even if you act like a spoiled brat. Nice knowing you too, Crybaby. While Kobe was talking with his friend, Garp knew he wasn't exactly going to Marineford, at least not right now. It was time for him to meet someone. It had been years, after all. Going merry. Nami. Would the light go out? Luffy questioned while hanging upside from the Going Merry's figurehead by his feet. The shifts must be switching, Nichiko mused as she locked their heading for the time being as instructed by their navigator. If I weren't here, this would be the most inappropriate time for this to happen, Nami muttered under her raincoat. Luckily, you have the best navigator in the world as a crewmate, Luffy. That's our Nami, her captain praised as he pulled himself up. More importantly, though, could you please get off of there? It's dangerous. Shishishi, I'm fine. I'm fine. Nami grumbled some rather colorful and descriptive words about her lover, before turning back to the laminated sea chart in her hands. But what's really troubling right now is what lies ahead of us. I can't believe the rumors are true. Rumors? What rumors? Luffy questioned with a tilt of his head. Without even giving heed to his words, the Orange Tea beckoned her fellow Straw Hats to meet in the galley with the rest of the crew who were preparing for lunch. Once everyone was seated in the galley, the navigator stated what rumors she was talking about. The entrance to the Grand Line is a mountain. Well, yeah. How do you think pirates got to the Grand Line? Through the calm belt? Luffy asked while picking his nose with his pinky finger. It's called Reverse Mountain, and it has 5 rivers leading going through it, one for each of the blues, and one for the paradise of the Grand Line. The currents switch around for 2 days out of the week, flowing down instead of up. There you go again with paradise, Usopp muttered as he chomped on a piece of chicken leg. Why are you calling it paradise, if those of us who are former Kree pirates know it as the Pirate Graveyard? That's the name for it for those who were defeated by the first half of the Grand Line, Luffy snickered as he flickered the booger on his finger into the nearby trash can. For those who finish it, the second portion, the New World, is 1,000,000 times more terrifying. Thus, those who run away from the New World called the first portion paradise. A shiver ran up every single one of the Straw Hat pirates. Yusuf's cold shudder was worse, as he could barely fathom what horrors awaited in the New World that made the first half seem like paradise. You said for pirates anyway, what about the Marines and civilians? Generally speaking, most people never leave their home sea, unless becoming a merchant, a pirate, a marine, or they're of nobility. The thing about marine ships and ships used by nobles is that the bottoms of the hulls are lined with kermsiki, which essentially wards off sea kings, so paddles are usable in the calm belt, their captain explained as he tore into a piece of mutton. What's kermsiki? Nami asked. It's a weird stone imbued with the powers of the seas themselves. Anyone with the Kuma no Mi powers who touches the stones feel their strength begin to drain, as if they were submerged in water. Nami's eyes widened when she heard that. Welp. Nothing to worry about, shishi. Luffy suddenly stopped his boisterous laughter when he felt that the unstable waters that had been with them for the last day had suddenly stopped for no apparent reason. Luffy? What's wrong? Nami asked. We're not rocking anymore. Finally. I was getting sick of the swing to and from in my hammock, Zoro muttered. Yeah, Luffy's right. It's no longer stormy outside. Yusuf shouted as he opened his own of the galley's portholes and stuck his head out, some water clinging to the seal dripping down onto his long nose. This can't be right, we should have been blown to the entrance of Reverse Mountain by that storm, Nami muttered to herself as she checked over the map. She stepped outside with the 5 other Straw Hat pirates. That's weird. It's like there's some kind of barrier between us that's keeping the storm away from us, Nami said. That's because of the calm belt. There is literally no wind out here for some mysterious reason that not even the R division of the Marines can answer. Luffy's eyes hardened though. We need to get back into the storm on the double. Why do we need to do that? Usopp asked, and Zoro nodding their heads in agreement. Like I said before, marine and noble ships are coated with kermsiki to fool sea kings, while traversing the calm belt using oars, Luffy said as his eyes peered off into the horizon. Something had not felt right when the Going Merry entered the calm belt. Bearer of the blessings of the seas. Did you guys hear that? Luffy grumbled as his eyes scanned about. Hear what, Captain? Nichiko asked from her spot, now on full alert. Inheritor of the will of D. There it is again. What's wrong, Luffy? Zoro questioned as he hoisted 3 paddles from the main deck to the port and starboard rails. He who shall shake the very foundations of this world is speaking. Luffy, you scaring me, Nami whispered as she looked on in horror, as her lover seemed to slowly go insane. We have been waiting for you for over 800 years. Show yourself. Luffy. Be quiet, didn't you say there were sea kings out here? Usopp hissed as he did a shushing motion. Do you want them to hear us, Luffy-kun? Nichiko asked. The promise made long ago shall be fulfilled by your hands. What promise? Nichiko, what should we do? Sanji asked, looking at the doctor of the ship. Receive our blessings that will guide you, child. Why do I want a blessing? Luffy, please, you're freaking everyone out, Nichiko said as she grabbed Luffy by the shoulders and shook him slightly before slapping him twice, attempting to break him out of his funk. That seemed to have done the trick as Luffy was broken from his delirium, his eyes blinking owlishly back at the helmswoman. Now tell us what's going on, you're worrying all of us. I'm hearing voices. The blessing of the Emperors of the Seas. Blessing of the Emperors of the Seas. Soon the voice stopped. Luffy breathed a sigh of relief. The whole crew was looking at him with concern. The Straw Hats were soon looking up at the gigantic mountain that was in front of them. They were astounded to see that the current did indeed go straight up the mountain's face. The difficult ascent up the mountain was adorned with archways. They then saw that they were moving at a rapid pace and were going right towards the door. "Everyone get a grip of anything," Luffy yelled, and the others grabbed anything they could. And before long, the gang was soaring up Reverse Mountain. They could only stand there and watch the arches whiz by at unbelievable speeds. Everyone was clinging to the bars with their lives in their hands. They were soon at the summit, soaring through the air for a brief time before the spacecraft collided with the mountain and was hurled back down. Except for Luffy, who was presently laughing wildly, the crew was deafeningly quiet. The remainder of the passengers were nervous as they awaited the end of the frightening voyage, which they hoped would not be due to the ship colliding with the rocks. They saw a heavy fog blocking their vision of the mountain's foot as they rode the current down the mountain. However, through the mist, a bizarre enormous bulk could be seen. The Straw Hats were then startled by a deafeningly low howl. "What the fuck is that?" Nami shouted in fear. As they rushed down the mountain, the Straw Hats started to fear. At this moment, the fog had dissipated, and they could see the massive thing for what it was. It was a massive whale, and the frightening aspect was that its massive jaws was open and facing the downstream escape. Most likely, it was lazily catching all the fish that got trapped in the current that carried them from their home sea to the whale's waiting stomach. The whale seemed to be completely oblivious to the ship that was heading directly towards its jaws. Luffy started to laugh, but his crew remained terrified. Some attempted unsuccessfully to guide the ship away from the big whale, but the tide kept them on track. They soon found themselves sailing right through the whale's jaws and into the beast's guts. As the whale closed its jaws, they were all enveloped in darkness. The whale had gotten its fill of food this time, and was ready to resume its assault on the impenetrable mountain. He dove into the water and started swimming away from the mountain, intending to pound it with himself. The Straw Hats were still alive, much to the amazement of the crew. They were on a peculiar greenish sea, with a beautiful blue sky and clouds above them. They could see a little island ahead of them with a cottage on it. "Are we hallucinating?" Usopp was taken aback and inquired. "Are we alive, or are we dead?" Zoro was the one who responded. "Didn't we gotten eaten by a whale?" Nami had inquired. "Then we're both dead," Zoro said. A voice was heard before anybody could comprehend what was going on. "Hello there." Chapter 17. Laboon a Day Doctor. Hello, Driner here. If you'd like to become a patron and get access to these chapters earlier, just head on over to Patreon and search Driner. www.patreon.com/Driner. The following 5 chapters are already available for patrons. Chapter 18, A Promise, Chapter 19, Whiskey Peak, Chapter 20, A Dragon and a Hero, Chapter 21, Wild Night, and Chapter 22, Little Garden, are already available for patrons. The crew was still trying to figure out where they had ended up. It almost felt surreal. Nami questioned as she peered around, "Are we still alive?" "No, we are dead, Nami. It seems paradise isn't full of gold as you dreamed," Nichiko teased, earning a chuckle from Luffy and a pow from Nami. "I feel too alive to be dead," Zoro said, his eyes looking around, trying to make sense of this strange situation. "That whale devoured us, right?" Nichiko questioned the whole situation. She even thought this was some kind of strange dream. "Maybe we are dreaming, but this is an extraordinary one," Sanji thought as he took in the peaceful surroundings. "Perhaps," Zoro wondered, scratching the back of his skull. On the tiny island, there stood a home. There was even a fold-up chair put up on the grass in front of it. "How do we wake up then?" Nami said, her gaze fixed on Usopp and Zoro. "It's not a dream, Nami. If it were, you would see gold everywhere," Nichiko countered, earning another chuckle from Luffy. "Maybe an exciting adventure is awaiting us," Luffy said, grinning, not taking the situation as seriously as the others. "I'm not sure I would want to continue this adventure," Usopp commented. Having a powerful captain had its benefits, but he thought that Luffy sometimes simply forgot that not everyone was as powerful and as brave as him. "There's something wrong with the clouds," Sanji observed as he looked up at the sky. Usopp agreed. "Hey, you're correct." The water in front of them was propelled high into the air. The birds aren't moving either. Suddenly tentacles started coming out from underneath the water, a squid. "What the hell is that?" Usopp panicked. The crew prepared to attack. 3 harpoons were thrown from the house before the Straw Hats could assault. The squid was quickly killed when all 3 weapons found their target. "Now what?" Nichiko said, perplexed by the unexpected shift in the scenario. It hadn't been even an hour since they entered the Grand Line, and they were in danger all the time, from whales devouring them to squids attacking them out of nowhere. "Someone's there," Usopp said, pointing with a finger. An elderly guy emerged from the shadows of the building. He was bald on top, but he had long white hair that reached beyond his shoulders, and grew from the back of his head. On his chin was a similar white beard that seemed to point both left and right. He was dressed in a red shirt with green and yellow motifs, blue shorts, spectacles on his quite huge nose, and many bracelets on his left arm. What baffled the crew was what seemed to have flower petals sprouting out of his head, separating the bald top from the white hair underneath the petals. "Hello there." Needless to say, the crew was even more perplexed at this point. The old man made eye contact with the crew. The pirate crew immediately felt the uneasy feeling he was leaving. Luffy stood in the front of his crew, glaring daggers at the old man who walked towards a chair, their glares intensifying. Zoro moved his hand on his swords, when the old man's next move shocked them. He opened a newspaper before sitting down as if nothing had happened. This caused the crew to deadpan. "What the heck, old man?" shouted Sanji, startled by the abrupt change in attitude. The elderly guy nonchalantly cocked his head in their direction. He supported him, pointing his slingshot at him. "What the hell is your problem?" The ropes kept moving, pulling the giant squid towards the tiny island. After a few seconds of intense looking, the elderly guy said, "Put them down, or someone will die." As he talked to the group, his harsher voice was calm. Luffy wondered just who this guy was. He didn't look weak, despite being old. "Oh, and who would that be?" Sanji asked, ready to attack, if the elderly decided to attack them. "Me," the elderly guy said flatly, practically slamming the crew onto the deck with his deadpan tone. "Damn it, old guy." Sanji screamed at the elderly gentleman who was calmly reading his newspaper. "Hey, old man, who are you, and where are we exactly?" Luffy asked as he stood in front of the crew, eyeing the elderly warily. Zoro could see from how Luffy was acting that this strange old man wasn't someone to take lightly. "Don't you have manners, young pirate? You should introduce yourself first." The elderly spoke as if trying to teach manners to Luffy of all people. "Oh right, my name is Mickey D. Luffy, I'm the captain of Straw Hat Pirates, and this is my crew." Luffy introduced himself before gesturing at the crew behind him. The man's eye widened slightly at the name of the young pirate, before returning back to normal almost immediately. "My name is Crocus, and I'm the lighthouse keeper of the Twin Capes. I'm 71 years old, a Gemini, and my blood type is Ab, and I don't like strangers." This caused the crew to tense slightly except for Luffy. "As for where you are, you've barged into my private resort. How dare you ask me questions? Where do you think you are in the stomach of a mouse?" Crocus said, raising an eyebrow. "So we were actually eaten." Yusuf shivered as he gazed around. "But this doesn't seem like the interior of a whale's gut. Did someone paint everything here?" "I don't want to be eaten," Nami shouted in disgust, while Luffy was wondering if this is how food feels inside his stomach, soon coming to the conclusion that it wasn't that bad. "There's the exit," Crocus said with a bored tone, indicating to the side, "unless you'd prefer to walk out the rear end." Turning to investigate, the Straw Hat saw a massive metal door on the painted sky's side. Zoro couldn't help but wonder, why is there a door on a whale? Nami sighed deeply. What the heck is going on anymore? She had had enough of the continual changes and shocks today. Even Nijiko was quite surprised by the sudden turn of events. Issa questioned Crocus, gesturing from the entrance to the painted stomach. "Did you do all of this?" "I have a lot of free time here. It can get quite boring, so why not make it less miserable and add a little paint," Crocus said while reading the newspaper. "Let's get out of here. This place is giving me a headache," Sanji said, not exactly sure if it was the strange old man or the place they were in. The water-going Mary was sailing started to tremble and roil, shooting waves into the air. "What now?" Nami screamed as she strained to retain her balance. Crocus closed his eyes in a bit of sadness, knowing what was going outside, before grumbling, "Back at it again, eh, Laboon?" "Hey, look," said Yusa pointing at the island the old man was standing. Due to the water moving around, the strange ship the old man was standing on started moving around due to the waves showing that it was covered in the metal underneath. Zoro roared at Crocus, "Who is Laboon?" "What's going on, old man?" "This whale's name is Laboon," Crocus said calmly, not bothering with the acid waves that were way too close. Luffy wondered who this old man was. This was no ordinary old man. In a way, it reminded him of his grandpa. "He's banging his head into the red line, just like he's been doing for the past 50 years, the elderly man muttered as he gazed down. The Straw Hats were stunned and perplexed. "Those wounds," Nami said, stunned, remembering the giant scars of the whale. Its skull was full of scars. Did they all come from crashing into the red line? Is he attempting to destroy the massive wall by crushing into it? Usopp wondered, puzzled. "The whale isn't our problem," Zoro said emphatically. "We simply need to get out." As the crew tried to leave, Crocus dove into the swirling acid waves and started swimming as they conversed. "What did he just do?" Nami said, startled. "He dived straight in. He's going to get digested." Crocus scaled a ladder that went up to a vast platform with ease, dispelling Nami's fears. Miss Wednesday. Two odd-looking people stood in front of the metal doors, their backs to them. "We are doing this," said the man of the duo, his tone somewhat effeminate. He wore a golden crown on his head and had red-orange hair and green clothing. Two stylized lines were drawn just below his eyes on his face. "Miss Wednesday, behind this door is the whale's stomach. Once we get inside, it will be easy to kill it, but we need to watch out for the old man. Once you see him, shoot him." "Yes, Mr. 9, exclaimed the female, a lovely, thin, and voluptuous lady with blue hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her shirt had concentric rings on it and was spaghetti-strapped. One enormous pair was placed on her tummy, and two more were placed on each of her plump breasts. Their clothes were weird even by pirate standards. They would easily be noticed in a crowd full of people. Miss Wednesday wore a beige coat with a fuzzy collar that hung over her shoulders as well. Mr. 9 warned her, "Ready, Miss Wednesday. We'll open the door with a 3, 2, 1 baby. Don't let down your guard." She said forcefully, "Roger, Mr. 9. I'm ready at any moment." With that, they both slammed the door open before announcing with a loud voice, "This whale belongs to us now." The old man glared at them while the pirate crew was thinking from where they had come from. Sanji immediately noticed a beautiful lady with long blue hair. "You again, how many times do I have to teach you this lesson? Weird people," the old man said, ready to throw them into the acid water. Mr. 9 just brushed off his threat like a fly before both of them aimed their large guns at the old man. Luffy prepared to protect the old man just in case, but it seemed that was totally unnecessary. As both Mr. 9 and Miss Wednesday aimed their large guns at him, the old man suddenly disappeared from view, much to the shock of everyone. Not even the pirate saw him move, except Luffy. His eyes moved to look at him, standing right behind Mr. 9 and Miss Wednesday, who were still trying to see where he went, not knowing he was standing behind them. "I hope you know how to swim," a voice spoke behind them before both of them were thrown to the acid water below. Mr. 9 shrieked in panic, "Oh my, Miss Wednesday, we're going to land in the acid sea." The two dived into the stomach acid's rolling waves. "Who are those guys? How long were they inside the whale?" Luffy said inquiringly, not understanding from where they came from. Nami pondered on that, but, in the end, decided that it wasn't worth thinking. Soon both of them came out to the surface, moving their arms around like headless chickens, while shouting for someone to help them. "Please help us. Should we attempt to save those two weirdos?" Zoro wondered, pointing to the two morons. "Sure, Zoro," Usopp, Luffy ordered, and they both sighed. After being saved, the woman with blue hair was kneeling on the deck, coughing water as she tried to catch her breath. Sanji was looking at her with heart in his eyes, while the other guy was paying more attention to their surroundings, and the people who saved them. The air-shaking sound of Laboon shouting ferociously reverberated through the stomachs of all of them. The majority of people shielded their ears from the noise. Just feeling the tremors in their bones was enough. Then everything seemed to come to a halt. The acid waves ceased swirling, and the stomach settled down. The whole corrosive sea was calm and peaceful again in a matter of minutes. "It's calm now," Nami said. "Maybe we can leave now," she said, looking at the calm water. "Hopefully, but first, what do we do with these two?" Zoro said as he glanced over at the two agents, Miss Wednesday standing as she was trying to remove the water from her hair and Mr. 9 lying on the deck soaking from his plunge in the stomach acid. Miss Wednesday looked at the people around her, before noticing the pirate flag. She turned to her companion Mr. 9. "These are pirates," she murmured before noticing the blonde with strange eyebrows drooling over her like a dog. "Yes. I see it, Miss Wednesday. But maybe if we speak to them, they'll understand. You thugs are still skulking about here." Crocus screamed as he leaped from the gate and onto the Mary. "You will never hurt Laboon while I draw breath." "They tried what?" Luffy yelled out, leaving out a wave of Conqueror's Haki, causing both strangers to feel uneasy, but it was a tiny bit. The wave of Conqueror's Haki didn't go unnoticed by Crocus. His only reaction was his eyes whitening slightly before going back to normal. Mr. 9 fired back at Crocus, "Taking down this whale is our objective. This time, we will not let you get in the way of our whaling mission." Luffy cocked his head. "What are we supposed to do?" "Maybe we should have just left them where they were," he said, looking over at Zoro. "Maybe you're right, Captain," Zoro shrugged, his right hand reaching for his blades. "You should tie them up," Luffy shrugged. Mr. 9 was about to protest when he felt the blade of his sword on his shoulder. Looking behind him, he saw the swordsman almost daring him to move. Mr. 9 broke into a flop sweat as he shakily placed his hands behind his back to be bound. The guy with the orange hair was swiftly tied up and sitting on the deck. Soon the crew and Crocus settled down. Nami told Sanji to prepare something for everyone while they were waiting. "Join us, Crocus," Luffy said with a grin. "I've got a lot of questions." The Straw Hat team, Miss Wednesday, and Crocus were all seated and enjoying Sanji's food and tea in a matter of seconds. Nami and Nijiko complimented Sanji for the hot tea and food, causing Sanji to whirl around with hard eyes. "Laboon is an island whale," Crocus explained as they all waited for the sedated Laboon to emerge from the water. "It's the world's largest whale species, and it normally only lives in West Blue. These guys here," he gestured towards the tied-up Mr. 9 and then Miss Wednesday, "come from a nearby town. They've been trying to kill Laboon for his meat. Laboon would probably feed their village for at least 2 to 3 years. So Laboon is one of the largest creatures in the world," Sanji said. Well, Usopp thought if anything was larger than Laboon. "Yes, but there are larger creatures than Laboon, sea kings. They're the size to move islands." He stopped as he let the information settle in. The crew and even the strangers were quite surprised. Luffy leaned forward, wanting to know more. "But the largest is probably an elephant that I have heard of. The largest elephant. The size is something you can't comprehend. Larger than the sky itself." He finished earning shocked looks from everyone. They couldn't understand how an animal could be that large. deciding to turn the subject back on track. But why is Laboon slamming his head on the red line? What is he trying to achieve? Nami wondered, perplexed as to why the giant whale was injuring himself. Many years ago, a group of pirates like you came down from the reverse mountain. Behind them was Laboon. They had sailed the West Blue together. The road was too dangerous. Therefore, the captain asked me if I could take care of Laboon until they returned. But it has been so many years, he said sadly, remembering the pirates. They love to sing, that was for sure, especially the tall one. He remembered how they used to ride on top of Laboon, smiling and joking. Laboon is a whale that travels with their kind in pods. But for Laboon, these pirates were his kind. The old man finished his story. Silence took over the crew. Luffy felt sad for the big whale, even if it was the said whale that ate them. Eventually, the island ship and Going Merry were sailing beyond the metal gates, leading to a long canal. This caught by surprise everyone. How did you build this? Usopp wondered out loud while inspecting the canal. He knew how to make things himself, and was quite astonished by the work. I can't heal him from outside, so I build these canals to help him. I might not look like it, but I'm a doctor. I had my own office a long time ago and even served as doctor to a pirate ship, the old man explained. A doctor? Luffy inquired, his smile broadening. Do you want to join my crew? He asked immediately without thinking. I'm too old to watch over a group of young pirates, Crocus said, and besides, who would watch after Laboon? That's a young man's adventure. Soon they came outside. The sun shining brightly in the sky was a welcome sight for the pirate crew. We are finally out, Luffy exclaimed as he was standing on top of Going Merry's figure smiling brightly. Now that they were finally outside and not in danger of becoming whale food, Zoro started before pointing at the two. What are we going to do with these idiots? Leave him tied up for now. They don't look to want to cause trouble, but I don't want them hurting the whale again, Luffy said, his eyes icy. If they try anything, cut them down, Luffy added with a voice that sent shivers to everyone's body. Zoro just shrugged his shoulders. Let's see if they have anything valuable, Nami said with a sadistic grin on her face that caused both Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday to pale at the pirate. We have nothing valuable, Miss Wednesday tried to say, but Nami checked anyway, soon only finding a weird object. It was a glass bubble with a leather ring around it. She took it in her hands and looked at it closely. Inside the glass, it resembled a compass needle hung on a thread. The crew turned to the old man, soon asking how long it had been since they left Laboon here. Soon the ship stopped in front of the lighthouse. 50 years. They've kept him waiting a long time, Luffy said as he sat on the grass beside Crocus's lighthouse. At the same time, Nami was examining the bizarre object she had borrowed from Mr. Nine. This is the Grand Line, Sanji sniffed as he smoked a cigarette. Those people said they'd be back in a few years. It's been 50. It's very obvious of what their fate was. The cook said before lighting up a cigarette, they're dead. He'll be waiting here for the rest of his life. That's terribly sad, Yusuf said, shaking his head and staring at the massive whale. I'm afraid reality is much crueler than that. I received word from a credible source a long time ago that the pirates had failed and fled the Grand Line, Crocus said regretfully, feeling his eyes swelling. What? They abandoned Laboon here. Do they not have a heart? Nami cried furiously. She herself remembered how Arlong had taken away her family. Nami, there are many things that could have happened. You shouldn't judge without knowing the details, Nijiko countered, despite herself not liking the thought of them simply abandoning Laboon. Before Nami could say anything to her sister, Nijiko continued. Wait a minute. They would have had to cross the calm belt to escape the Grand Line. Turning to the elder man. The old man simply nodded his head. But even if they're alive, they'll never come back here. The seasons, the climates, the ocean currents, even the air currents. Everything about this place is an unpredictable nightmare. Crocus confirmed with a nod. As a result, they're more concerned about their lives than the promises given, Sanji said, shaking his head. Then they abandoned Laboon. Yusa cried, clearly angry about this. And he still believes in those heartless bastards even after so many years. Even Miss Wednesday felt her eyes welling up, suddenly feeling like shit for trying to harm the whale, but her reaction wasn't noticed by anyone except Nijiko, who grew a small smile on her face. Luffy kept quiet, his eyes looking at the poor whale. Nami looked at the elderly man. Why don't you tell him? He understands human language, right? Why keep him in the dark? Her tone sounding desperate. I did tell him. I told him everything. But he won't listen. He explained, remembering the day very well, more than he wanted. Laboon, I need you to listen to me. I have something to tell you, Crocus said to the whale, now the size of a ship. The people that left you aren't going back. I'm sorry, but they're gone. They have fled the Grand Line. Crocus stopped letting Laboon understand what he was saying. I know they're your friends, but they're not coming back, Crocus finished. Laboon's eyes started welling up before he let out a loud cry. Laboon, stop, he shouted, hoping his friend would stop, but Laboon kept moving his body around, causing large waves to crash over where Crocus stood, soon rushing towards the red line, smashing against the rock. Laboon, stop, Crocus pleaded, but Laboon didn't stop. He looked up at the big wall before crying again, almost telling the red line to give him his friends back. Crocus looked down, but after all these decades, if he accepts it, he'll lose his reason for waiting for so long. He has no way home, and even if he did, he'd never be able to return. Look at those wounds on his skull. If he continues bashing his head on the red line, he'll undoubtedly die. We've been together for 50 years. I can't forsake him, even if they violated their promise to me as well. Luffy looked at the red line. That wall is separating him from his friends. Soon a grin appeared on his face. Baboon, yelled Luffy at the top of his lungs, making sure the giant whale heard him. I'm Monkey D. Luffy. I make you this promise right now. We'll return to this place once we sail around the Grand Line. If we happen to come across any of your old friends along the way, I will bring them back here to you. So, until we come back here to see you again, never hurt yourself. Whoa, Baboon's colossal eye began to tear up. This man Crocus's eyes whitened as he saw Luffy's actions. The old doctor saw someone else at that moment. Captain Roger. Luffy, Nami thought, looking at her captain with love in her eyes. He was such a good man. Nejiko felt her heart beating faster from what Luffy just said. Even Miss Wednesday was quite surprised to hear something like that from a pirate of all people. Baboon, on the other hand, flung his head back and let forth the most joyful howl Crocus had ever heard from him in years. Chapter 18, A Promise. Hello, Drainer here. If you'd like to become a patron and get access to these chapters earlier, just head on over to Patreon and search Drainer. www.patreon.com/Drainer. The following 5 chapters are already available for patrons. Chapter 19, Whiskey Peak, Chapter 20, A Dragon a Day Hero, Chapter 21, Wild Night, Chapter 22, Little Garden, and Chapter 23, Giants and Luffy's Anger, are already available for patrons. As Laboon chirped joyously and Luffy laughed with the island whale, the elderly lighthouse keeper couldn't help but shed a few tears. Luffy suddenly rushed inside the ship. The others were wondering what he was trying to do, when Luffy came out with a big brush that they used to paint the sails of Going Merry. Luffy, what are you doing? Nami asked out loud, looking at her lover, who just grinned. How else is he going to know that we are going to keep our promise? Luffy shouted at Nami, whose eyes were almost tearing up. Even Miss Wednesday was touched by what she saw, her eyes shining at the pirate doing something like this. Later. Impressive, Nami said, with Nejiko agreeing with her. Zoro noticed the odd way Miss Wednesday was looking at what Luffy did. Well, what do you think, Laboon? Luffy said as Laboon wore the straw hat Jolly Roger on his nose for the first time. Laboon was also designated as their Nakama by the symbol of their commitment. Laboon chirped cheerfully as he flapped his huge tail and sprayed ocean water into the air. Don't scuffin' up our promise, okay? Luffy chuckled, and Laboon agreed with a chirp. Nejiko chuckled. She could see why her sister loved this man, as more than her captain, as more than a friend. She glanced at Nami, who was looking at Luffy with a little blush on her cheeks. She wondered if she could ask her sister later to share Luffy. Miss Wednesday was gazing at Luffy, not trying to hide that she was impressed by what the captain of the pirate crew had just done for the whale, while Mr. Nine was desperately trying to free himself. Zoro was keeping an eye on Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine, wondering just what they were trying to do. It was calm when suddenly Nami let out a scream. Everyone nearby was startled by Nami's abrupt cry. In a burst of lightning, Luffy immediately reached her location, wondering what the problem was. Sanji emerged from his kitchen, looking around for danger. Nejiko ran from her room, calling out her sister's name, wondering what was wrong. Nami, are you okay? Luffy was the first to ask as he stood by her side. Nami was silent, only looking at the compass on her wrist. The compass is broken, she stated, pointing at the compass. The arrow kept whirling around non-stop. Most of the crew looked surprised. Despite not knowing much about compasses, they knew this wasn't something that should happen. Miss Wednesday glanced at the pirates before understanding what the problem was. Realizing it, she let out a hysterical laugh. The crew looked at her with puzzled expressions, except Nami, who narrowed her eyes at the girl for clearly laughing at her. What's so funny? Nami shrieked with sharp teeth, wanting to burn her to the crisp, only Luffy and Nejiko holding her arms. Miss Wednesday questioned Nami condescendingly, you little pirates. I thought you were grown-ups, but it seems you are only people playing pirates. Are you truly a navigator? Nami's brow twitched as her navigational abilities were doubted, while Luffy didn't like to be called a kid. Knowing things could escalate, Crocus coughed loudly to gain their attention. Usually, prisoners should keep their mouths shut, but in this case, she's right. Crocus frowned at the brunette. She has a point. Did you not do any research? A normal compass is completely useless in Grand Line. It isn't broken, but it isn't helpful. Is it the magnetic field? Yes. You see, every island on the Grand Line is rich in magnetic materials. Each island has its own unique magnetic field, Crocus explained. Every Straw Hat was listening except Luffy, who was busy eating the others' food when they weren't looking. Therefore, any conventional compass can't accurately detect the planet's natural field. He added. Nami was silent, thinking about what to do, but Crocus wasn't done. To make matters worse, none of the currents or winds follow any regular patterns. As a navigator, I'm sure you realize how dangerous it is. If you set sail without knowing any of this, you perish without a doubt. Without any direction, your journey would be doomed to fail. Crocus said with a shake of his head, Usopp only now noticing the missing food. So we're trapped here. Nami groaned, her face grew pale. How can we travel if our equipment doesn't work? Calm down, Nami, I'm sure there's a way. Otherwise, there would never be any pirates in Grand Line, Nichiko thought loudly. Indeed. You need a log pose. Crocus advised her. Nami looked at the elderly guy and said, what's that? It's a particular kind of compass, Crocus said, and navigation on the Grand Line is impossible without one. Where can we find one? It's commonly worn on the wrists with a leather strap. Crocus described how it looked when Nami remembered the item she got from Mr. 9. Do you mean one of these? Nami showed Mr. 9 the item she had borrowed earlier. Crocus affirmed, that's a log pose. The one you stole from me, Mr. 9 groaned. Nami just smirked at his face before her attention went to the log pose. Every island on the Grand Line has its own magnetic field, as I previously said. As a result, you must keep track of each magnetic field you encounter on your route to the next island. Each one is linked to the one before it in the chain. In terms of navigation, the log pose is the one thing you can count on in the Grand Line. The starting location is Reverse Mountain, where you may choose from 7 distinct pathways. But, no matter whatever route you choose, you'll eventually find yourself on a solitary island. Raftel is the name of the island. Only one man in history has led a crew on that treacherous expedition and returned safely. Gold D. Roger, Crocus stated, with a melancholy tone at the end, before eating more. You mean Gold Roger, right? Usopp asked, noticing the way he said the name. Luffy quickly noticed that D added. It made him wonder. No, his real name is Gold D. Roger. The government changed his name to Gold Roger, Crocus insisted, drinking water from his glass. The others wondered why he was called Gold Roger instead, but didn't bother to put more thought into it, except Luffy, who looked deep in thoughts. D? That's the same the mystery man told me. But what does this D mean? Luffy wondered, remembering the man's words back at Lode Town. So, the end of the road will eventually lead us to One Piece, Usopp questioned. It made sense for One Piece to be on the last island. That's the most popular belief, Crocus shrugged. However, only one individual has ever succeeded. No one else has ever made it to that island. He stated grimly, remembering that day. Soon we'll be 2 old men. Luffy smirked as the two stared each other down, a big grin on Crocus's face matching Luffy's. The 2 agents were absolutely taken aback. Soon the crew sat down to eat, but it seemed Luffy had been one step ahead of them for once. Half of the food was gone except Nami's food. Luffy hadn't touched her food, and surprisingly neither Nichiko's food. This forced Sanji to cook more food for everyone else, but Luffy seemed never to stop eating since, despite already eating, he was still trying to sneakily eat food from someone else's plate, mainly Sanji and Usopp's plate. Stop eating our food, Sanji yelled. This was getting on his nerves. You're not eating it, so I decided to help you a little. Luffy simply stated, earning a giggle from Nami and Nichiko. Help us, Usopp growled in his mind, helping them by eating their food when they weren't looking. After things calmed down, and the dinner was eaten, kind of peacefully. Thank you for the meal, Miss Wednesday said from her place on Zoro's other side, smiling as she ate the magnificent fish. It's very great. If you want anything else, just say the word. Sanji spun about gleefully, looking like a pervert as usual. We best tread carefully here, Nami remarked as she fastened the log pose to her wrist. Our whole adventure depends on this remaining safe. Everyone tightened up and glanced up in terror as they heard a peculiar clacking sound from above. Mr. 9's mouth dropped, and he broke into a flop sweat. Miss Wednesday stiffened up and looked up in fear as well. Oh no. It's the unluckies, said Mr. 9, terrified, even more than when he was drowning in acid water. Everyone in the room raised their heads to see what seemed to be a spotted otter riding a vulture wearing aviator goggles. It is just me, or is that bird carrying a bomb? Zoro wondered aloud. He had seen many weird things since joining Luffy, but witnessing a bird carrying a bomb was a first. The otter had a shell in its hand, which it was whacking on a rock, generating the clacking sound they heard. Ready to throw the bomb at the 2 agents. Nami, Luffy simply said. The navigator simply grinned before her arms and legs turned to what looked like gold. Miss Wednesday's eyes widened in disbelief. What was going on? Before Miss Wednesday could ask what was going on, Nami jumped in the air before moving her arms forward. Wind slash, sending a wind shaped like blade that cuts through everything. Nami landed back on the ground with a smile. She was getting better with her devil fruit powers. Luffy smiled before kissing her on the cheek. Nami slightly pouted that wasn't on the lips, but decided to get that and more back in their room tonight. Miss Wednesday recovered her ability to talk just as the dead otter and vulture hit the water with a splash, and the 2 agents gaped at what they just witnessed. Both the unluckies had been slain by a single gust of wind, with no effort required. The navigator also had a devil fruit. Is the rest of the crew just as terrifying as the navigator and the captain? Miss Wednesday murmured to her friend, who shrugged his shoulders, not really knowing, but he thought they must be quite something. What are we going to do, Miss Wednesday? Should we ask? Miss Wednesday then just had the brightest idea. She knew what she needed to do. "Excuse me, Strawhair Captain." Miss Wednesday smiled as she turned to Luffy. "What do you want? And what is your name?" Luffy asked, eyeing her up and down. The lady looked surprised for a moment before answering. "My name is Miss Wednesday." Miss Wednesday answered. She thought they must have already learned their names by now. "Can you tell me your true name?" Luffy gave her a cold gaze. We can't say," began the brunette. "Sorry for the inconvenience. Our task needs our secrecy. All we can tell is that our company's slogan is mystery." "Alright. What is it you wanted?" Luffy shrugged off their eccentricities unconcerned. "Could you possibly provide us a lift back to our home? With both our boat and our log post gone, we can't go back home," Miss Wednesday said, bending her head. "It's just a short distance away. It's one of the Grand Line's initial islands. On Cactus Island, well, Whiskey Peak is the name of the town. We just want to return home. We swear we'll pay you back for your difficulty," they said, bowing before them. "I wouldn't trust them. They've been up to no good since they came here," he warned the pirate crew, but he could tell, despite being a free-spirit type of kid, the captain knew when things were serious. He wasn't on this journey without any preparation. "They can come. We would never be heartless," Nami said with a sly smile. The crew noticed that, but the two prisoners seemed not to have been able to see it. "Though, thank why, for 1,000,000 berries, of course," Nami added quickly with the biggest innocent smile on her face. The prisoner's jaw hit the ground in disbelief. This woman is evil, Miss Wednesday thought, wondering how they could find a way out of this situation. "It's fine," Luffy laughed. "We are going to need to start somewhere, so let's just send these people back to their homes," Luffy stated, already deciding to talk with Zoro and Sanji later. Miss Wednesday sighed in relief, but she wasn't quite yet out of Nami's big claws. "Alright then, time to establish the log pose," Nami said, and began planning their path. "Are you sure you want to take these two? You can't alter your mind once you've decided on a path," Crocus advised Luffy. "It's alright. If we don't like this path, we'll merely sail around again," Luffy said with a broad smile. Crocus couldn't help but smile as he said, "Just be sure you establish the pose using the map. Everything is in place. The log pose is pointing to Cactus Island," Nami said, informing everyone. "Great. Let's set sail." "Crocus, thank you for everything," Luffy shouted at the old man. "Thank you very much for your assistance." Nami and Nijiko waved as they walked up the gangplank and onto the Going Merry, where Luffy jumped up onto the figurehead and took his special seat. The ship's anchor was pulled up and the sails were unfurled, and they took off without incident at the first wind. Laboon chirped out his goodbyes, and Luffy replied, "Laboon, we'll be back. Please don't tamper with our Jolly Roger." Luffy waved to the Whale Mountain as the ship sailed on the horizon. "Could that crew of pirates be the ones we've been waiting for?" Crocus wondered out loud as the vessel faded beyond the horizon. Roger, that kid has a strange vibe about him." The elderly man grinned as he considered how Luffy reminded him of his captain, already remembering his words. "Someone will come before us and surpass us. We came too early. It seems you were right, Captain." Chapter 19. Whiskey Peak. Hello, Driner here. If you'd like to become a patron and get access to these chapters earlier, just head on over to Patreon and search Driner. www.patreon.com/Driner. The following 5 chapters are already available for patrons. Chapter 20, A Dragon and a Hero, Chapter 21, Wild Night, Chapter 22, Little Garden, Chapter 23, Giants and Luffy's Anger, and Chapter 24, Drum Kingdom, are already available for patrons. It had started with a peaceful morning. Everything looked and sounded perfect and calm. Miss Wednesday was busy eating breakfast. The crew was eating as well. She studied each one closely. They looked pretty normal to her. Hell, they didn't even look like pirates. Especially the captain, who would constantly make some joke. Well, it was funny. She wondered how long they would last. Grand Line was not a place for weaklings. When suddenly all hell broke loose, it started with Luffy finishing first. His face and voice suddenly serious. Standing up, he punched his palm before grinning. "Alright, time to start training," Luffy stated. Miss Wednesday saw various reactions. The long-nosed guy flinched from what they heard. The girl Nijiko suddenly looked terrified. The navigator just rolled her eyes playfully. At the same time, the cook and the swordsman suddenly smirked, wanting to start. Soon Miss Wednesday found out that this pirate crew was actually not a pirate crew, but a crew of monsters first. The captain started electrocuting the crew. At first, she had wondered what kind of captain hurts his crew for fun, but she soon finds out that wasn't exactly the case. "What are you doing? Isn't this, dangerous?" she asked, flabbergasted. The captain was sending waves of electricity toward his crew, at every member. "Don't worry, Miss Wednesday. This doesn't hurt anyone and is important to get stronger," Nami answered while at the same time dodging Luffy's attacks. That went on for an hour. Mr. 9 seriously started questioning their sanity when the captain stated, Okay, enough with the warm-up, time to really start, he stated. Usopp was almost passing out from exhaustion. Despite Luffy not shooting electricity at him anymore, he still felt the need to look and make sure the captain wasn't going to give him any surprises. Nami, make sure we keep sailing at the right destination. Zoro and Sanji, you two start now, Luffy ordered with a commanding tone. Nami nodded despite wanting to train her devil fruit abilities, but figured that could wait for a little. Hey, you two, do you want to join us? Nezuko suddenly asked from across the ship, near the head of Going Merry. She was sitting crossing her legs, her eyes closed, but Miss Wednesday noticed immediately that Nezuko was still following her movements, as if her eyes were still open. What is this? Ah, no, thank you. She answered while walking a few steps to her right with Nezuko's head following her movement despite her eyes still being closed. As the training went on, Zoro and Sanji were trying to hit their captain, but so far, nothing was landing. Not only that, but Luffy had a blindfold, not seeing anything. Just stand still, Sanji shouted in anger before spinning his leg aiming at Luffy's torso, but he just jumped in the air with Zoro following closely. Again, Luffy kept dodging the dangerous attacks. Miss Wednesday couldn't comprehend it. What if one of them made a little mistake, that's it, and they could seriously injure one another or even kill? She escaped her thoughts, seeing the navigator carelessly looking at the sea instead of the log pose. Navigator, you should look more at your log pose, she commented, knowing the navigator was not taking this place seriously. Nami turned to look at them with an annoying look. The weather was as good as can be, and she already had checked the log pose. I just checked it, we are doing well, she replied before a smirk grew on the brunette's face. You should check again, she countered. Luffy grabbed Sanji's leg as he tried to kick him before showing him away. At that moment, Zoro appeared in front of him with all three swords ready. Luffy prepared to either dodge or block them with Haki when. What the hell? Nami shouted in panic, causing both Luffy and Zoro to stop. Luffy wanted to ask what was wrong. What is wrong with this weather? Nami shouted in confusion. Much to everyone's surprise, it had started snowing, so much snow that one would think they were in the middle of a snowstorm. Nami started shivering, and so did Miss Wednesday. They weren't wearing that many clothes. Nezuko walked inside, coming out with several coats, throwing one at Nami and Miss Wednesday, despite not trusting her yet. I did well for buying these at Lowtown, Nezuko commented, herself wearing a long coat that covered her entire body, but still showed her curves. This is what Grand Line is. In one moment, it is snowing, in the next, it is raining, and before you know, it's a storm, Miss Wednesday commented, knowing these people had never been around these waters before. Luffy and Usopp were building a snowman, with a carrot and everything. Nami calmed down. This was nothing she couldn't handle, at least that's what she thought. You should check your log pose more. You're seriously underestimating the Grand Line, Miss Wednesday said as she was trying to cover herself. Nami was really starting to get annoyed. Sure, weather could change, but she was a good navigator. I just checked. We are going. What the fuck? Nami shouted before immediately giving orders. Luffy was about to ask what was wrong. Change the direction 180 degrees. What is wrong with this place? Nami shouted orders as Usopp followed Nami's orders while Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji were removing the snow from the deck. Why is this happening? We were good just a minute ago, Nami shouted, trying to make sense of all of this. This is how the Grand Line is. You can't trust anything, not the winds, not the weather, only the log pose, Miss Wednesday said. Are you even a navigator? Mr. Nine asked with a doubtful tone, but earned a kick from Nami. Be useful and remove the snow, Nami yelled at him with sharp teeth. Sanji gave him a shovel, but the danger wasn't over yet. Nami, an iceberg at 8 o'clock, we are about to collide, Usopp shouted from the nest with binoculars in his hands. Nami's eyes widened. Before she could say anything, Luffy disappeared from the deck, appearing right at the iceberg with a fist covered in armament Haki, punching the iceberg. The whole thing was destroyed to pieces. Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine were utterly shocked. They had never seen someone being able to destroy an iceberg that large with just a fist. Thank you, Luffy, Nami said as Luffy returned back to the ship, still needing to deal with the crazy weather. Odd Luffy, can't you control the weather or something? Usopp asked from the top of the nest, struggling to follow every order Nami was spitting out. I'm not that good yet, Luffy responded from below, which went on for hours as they tried to sail through the harsh seas of Grand Line. Hours later, everyone was tired. They were lying on the ground, breathing heavily, even Miss Wednesday, who had decided to help. Nami was resting her head against the railing. They could finally have a moment of peace. Luffy was the only one still standing. The Straw Hats, on the other hand, had made it. They could see gigantic cactuses rising into the sky, towering over the little patches of land in the distance. The Going Merry had had a difficult time on the Grand Line so far, but it had persevered in the end, mostly because of Usopp's many repairs throughout their voyage. The ship approached the island with increasing speed. However, the sight was severely limited due to the dense fog that was now blanketing the island. Is this Whiskey Peak? Zoro inquired, his gaze fixed on the island. I suppose so, Luffy said, admiring the view. Considering how this island appears, it seems like it should have been called after cactuses, Nezuko said as she gazed at the towering plants. Alright, then, we're leaving right now. When the Straw Hats turned around, they were shocked to discover Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday standing on the ship's railing. "Thank you, honey, for bringing us home." The Straw Hats were informed by Miss Wednesday. "If destiny has brought us together, we'll meet again." Mr. Nine was the one who followed up. "Bye-bye, baby." As they leaped from the ship, the weird couple yelled in unison. They started swimming toward the island after that. "Ha! Who on earth were they?" Usopp wondered. "Does it matter?" Nichiko remarked. As they drew into the river that bisected the island, the other Straw Hats appeared to concur with this viewpoint. For such a little island, the river was remarkably broad. It seemed nearly like two separate islands, rather than a single one. Because of the fog, they couldn't see the beach very clearly, but they hoped there was a town upriver where they could stock up. Their supply from Lowtown was barely about half of what had been, so that restocking would be beneficial. The crew, on the other hand, started to see individuals standing on the beaches. The way they were being gazed, it seemed ominous, so they wanted to be prepared for anything. Then the fog started to lift, revealing vast groups of people. The spectators were clapping and applauding for the pirates, and it seemed like they had planned a celebration for the oncoming pirates. On one side of the ship, Luffy, Sanji, and Zoro were all standing. A large mob of ladies gathered down the shore, yelling at the three. "Ah! They're gazing in this direction. They're really attractive." To the three males, the ladies yelled and waved. "Whoa, there are a lot of lovely ladies here." Leaning over the railing, Sanji said eagerly. This was a dream come true. Luffy simply put his hand around Nami's waist, and the navigator put her arms around Luffy's neck, a clear indication that they were together. "Do they think we will actually fall for this?" Nami commented, standing close to Luffy. The captain just chuckled, before pointing at Sanji, who looked ready to pass out from happiness. "Except him," Nami added with annoyance. Luffy found it funny, but he really hoped that Sanji wasn't foolish enough to think they were really celebrating their arrival. As a result, Zoro was the only one who enjoyed the women's catcalls. He, on the other hand, was indifferent and decided it was time to go to his bed. He probably dozed off after laying down on the deck, much to the dismay of the throng. Besides, none of them was his type. Some women pouted at seeing Luffy with Nami, but that didn't stop them. From the audience on both sides of the ship, shouts of "so wonderful" could be heard. Zoro was fast asleep, Luffy was blissfully eating, and Nami was clinging to his side. They were, however, quickly escorted to a wharf where they could berth their ship. They joined the swarm of people who were staring down. Zoro was still sleeping, but the others were paying attention to the group. Well, one of the locals started but then coughed. "Mama, welcome. I'm a grab boy, and I'd want to introduce myself." "Whiskey Peaks Mayor is me." The guy stood forward and introduced himself. Sanji wondered just what kind of haircut is that. "My name is Luffy. It's great to meet you finally." Whiskey Peak is a community built on the production of bourbon and music. Grab boy went on. When Zoro realized this, he opened his eyes. Liquor. He pondered his thoughts. He climbed onto the deck with the rest of his crew and proceeded to listen to the strange-looking guy. "Our community is known for its hospitality. Our superb spirits are as plentiful as the salt water." The Straw Hats chose to go ashore at this moment. The residents of the village seemed to have a real fondness for pirates. "Would you allow us to throw you a party, so that we may hear your stories of Grab boy coughed once again. Mama, your adventures," he concluded. "We'll be delighted." Luffy, Sanji, and Usopp all yelled at the same time. Zoro and Nami kept their gaze fixed on their nakama. "Everyone, now, get ready for the celebration. Sing to keep the adventurers entertained." Grab boy yelled to his town, and the residents applauded as they prepared to throw a feast. The celebration was still going strong later that night. People were drinking and eating to their heart's delight and laughing heartily. As everyone listened in, Usopp told stories of his and Kaya's exploits. Nichiko was quickly getting many admirers. They were quick to tell her how beautiful she was. She just ignored their tries. Her eyes were set on someone else. She wondered if her sister would be alright with sharing Luffy. It had been a long time since she had taken care of herself. Not to mention she had seen that Luffy was a good man and captain. Luffy and Zoro had been pulled into a drinking contest by Nami. Luffy had been easy to persuade, but she had threatened Zoro with his debt in order to get him to join. He didn't want to be ordered to drink, even if he had wanted to drink in the first place. Nichiko joined because she didn't want to be surpassed by her sister, and Sanji joined to see just how much she could drink. As they sipped their 12th cup, Nami and Nichiko were tired. Luffy was still going strong after 11 drinks, whereas Zoro had passed out after his 10th drink. After the 9th glass, Sanji became a bit loopy and fell asleep. Grab boy chuckled as he saw the Straw Hats having a good time. "What a festy, ahem. Mama, this is going to be a fun night. It means the world to us that you are having fun." The celebration was still going strong later that night. The drinking battle was down to Nami and Inan, who were both tied at 15 drinks. Luffy had quit drinking at the 14th, while Nichiko had passed out at the 13th. The nun eventually passed out as she tried to sip her 16th drink. Nami also went out after emptying her last. All of the Straw Hats seemed to be sleeping at this moment, and members of the Baroque Works began to congregate. Mr. 8 was now meeting with Mr. 9 and Miss Wednesday outside Igarapur. "Have you dealt with those pirates?" Miss Wednesday inquired. "They're tumbling, that is, straight to hell," Mr. 8 was the one who answered. Miss Monday exited the pub at this moment and rejoined the others. She removed her nun cloak as she said, "Is it really necessary to have this welcoming party in the first place? They're just a bunch of chubby brats, right? Now, I've finished my research on this group." As he rummaged inside his jacket for the additional bounty they'd received, Mr. 8 stated. He yanked them out, revealing 5 bounties inside. It was a poster of every Straw Hat except Najiko, who still didn't have one. The other 3 were taken aback by this. Perhaps they were more dangerous than they expected, particularly the captain, who is responsible for most of the reward. Plus, even from the Grand Line, Azor was a name they'd all heard. That's quite a feat for a bounty hunter in East Blue. Minky D. Luffy was a name they had never heard before. They were perplexed about how he could have acquired such a large reward in the East Blue. To estimate a pirate's strength just on the basis of his looks, Miss Monday, is rather silly. Mr. 8 expressed his thoughts. Miss Monday expressed regret for her erroneous assumption. "Now go seize any money or valuables on their ship and imprison them all." Mr. 8 was adamant. Somewhere, the group of people with knives was slowly walking where the Straw Hats had passed. Luffy was peacefully sleeping, his head resting on a table. "The captain first," one whispered as they reached Luffy. One raised his knife at the top of Luffy's head. He brought it down, but much to everyone's shock and fear, instead of stabbing Luffy, the knife had penetrated the table, while Luffy's head had moved just in time to dodge it. They didn't move, sweat rolling down their face in fear. "Just kill him already," one said, louder this time. The man immediately tried again, but Luffy's head moved again just in time to dodge, but still looked to be sleeping. "Damn it," he shouted, this time going for his back when Luffy's hand stopped his arm. This caused the whole group of people to feel immobile immediately. They thought they couldn't move as Luffy slowly stood up from the chair, leaving out a loud yawn, before slowly opening his eyes. Looking straight at the group of people, who were sweating and shivering. But one of them got the courage. He was just one person, they could quickly deal with him. He was about to shout at his friends to attack when "Dodge Zoro, Sanji," Luffy called, causing the whole group to fear for their lives. When Sanji came out walking from a corner, lighting up a cigarette in his mouth, while Zoro was holding an unsheathed sword over his shoulder, grinning like a maniac. The group knew they were dead, super dead. "You know, I usually don't like to beat up people who give me food, but since you tried to harm my crew," Luffy stated as he was cracking his knuckles. "Nami, do you want in, or whatever treasure they have?" Luffy asked. The navigator nodded her head as her arms started turning gold color. Soon the sound of screaming was heard from inside and even outside. Miss Wednesday. To estimate a pirate's strength just on the basis of his looks, Miss Monday, is rather silly. Mr. 8 expressed his thoughts. Miss Monday expressed regret for her erroneous assumption. "Now go seize any money or valuables on their ship and imprison them all." Mr. 8 was adamant. A giggle could be heard suddenly from above. The 4 Baroque members looked for the source before being surprised to see the 2 pirates they had just discussed standing on the top of the tavern. "Wait till Nami finds out you tampered with her reward, if you think we're scary." Luffy laughed at the group's surprise. "TCCH, I wouldn't even bother with that witch when it comes to money." Zoro was taken aback by his comments. "So why don't you give our employees a little more time to sleep? They're all exhausted from their journey here." At this point, a few community members emerged from the bar. "Mr. Number 8, please." 4 members of their team had escaped. "Wasn't it only a minute ago that you 2 were passing out after all that drinking?" Mr. 8 was annoyed. Luffy laughed again. "We both made the decision to depart early. Because we didn't trust you, we just drank a little bit. So that's where this place is. This is a refuge for bounty hunters, and you're taking advantage of the overconfident newbie pirates on the Grand Line." Zoro laughed. "With just 100 of you, I'm afraid this won't be much of a match for the 2 of us." "Baroque works," Zoro commented, peering down at the bounty hunters. "Captain, why don't you sit this one out? Make things a bit more fair for the small fry." Zoro answered as he placed his sword into his lips. Luffy said, laughing, "Alright, if you're sure." Zoro nodded before descending to meet the bounty hunters. The bounty hunters down below were stunned. "How did you come up with our company's name?" Mr. 9 was surprised and said, "A certain group attempted to scout me while I was in the same line of work as you, but I respectfully rejected," Zoro stated as he wrapped his Wado Ichimonji around him. "Wow, Zoro, to think that he's my first mate now," Luffy said, laughing. This made Mr. 8 frown. "If they figure out our secret, we'll have no option except to remove them," he began. "Kill them," he said as he directed his subordinates towards the 2. Around his blade, Zoro grinned. It was going to be a lot of fun. Zoro eventually found himself among the vanquished hundreds of thousands. "Man, that wasn't much of a workout. Your organization isn't as tough as it makes itself out to be," Zoro said. The 4 remaining number agents grimaced as they looked at the man that had taken down over 100 of their men. They were surprised to see 2 more people step onto the field, though, much to the 4 agents' terror. Are you idiots just playing around? One started to say. 100 agents down, and they were all brought down by one man. The other figure laughed. Give them a break. You can't expect them to be as capable as we are. Mr. 5. Miss Valentine. The 4 agents shouted in surprise. Mr. 9 started to speak. With you two backing us up, those pirates stand no chance. Mr. 5 grimaced at that. Stop joking around, he said, glaring at Mr. 9. You think we're your backups? You honestly believe that we'd be ordered to come all the way out here at the edge of the Grand Line just to help you fight off some pirates? At that, Mr. 5 began to laugh. Then what business have you come here for? Mr. 9 said, confused. Surely you must have some hunches a crime severe enough that the boss would personally dispatch us all the way out here. The boss's direct words were, my secret has been found out. Of course, we have no idea what that secret may be, but Miss Monday followed up with, one of our agents is from a certain kingdom, and they have infiltrated Baroque works. Your boss is Crocodile, one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Luffy added in the middle of their conversation. The agents were shocked to hear that piece of information, especially Miss Wednesday. How does he know Crocodile? Well, it looks like we'll have more than just a couple to kill today if that's true, of course. Mr. 5 said. That knowledge was very dangerous. If Mr. 0 found out that they all knew his identity, they would all be killed without hesitation. How the hell had this kid known that? No one below Miss Soul Sunday ever met with the boss face to face. How does a nobody like you know that? Miss Valentine said, glaring at the pirate. Now, everyone has their own little secrets, Luffy said with a sly smirk that shocked everyone. Zoro did a double take. He had never thought of Luffy as someone who keeps secrets. It's no matter. Mr. 5 said. We will just have to kill you all now. Hopefully, the boss never has to learn that the two of us have that knowledge. That should be possible if all of you are dead. Especially you two, Vivi and Igrim. At this, Mr. 5 began digging in his nose for ammunition, while Miss Valentine launched herself in the air. Mr. 8, otherwise known as Igrim, pulled on his drawstrings to reveal his secret weapon hidden in his hair. He sent a volley at Mr. 5 as Miss Monday and Mr. 9 were unable to move due to their shock. Miss Wednesday began spinning her peacock slashers and watched as Miss Valentine floated above them. Mr. 5 was revealed to be entirely unchanged from the explosions that had happened all around him due to Igrim. Miss Valentine, however, was beginning her descent rapidly, flying straight at Vivi as she laughed. Mr. 9, not knowing entirely what was going on, decided that he would protect his partner. He pulled out his metal batons and ran straight at MR.5. Mr. 5 just smirked as he pulled 2 boogers from his nose. Nose fancy, cannon, he shouted as he launched the boogers at Mr. 9 and Igrim. They exploded with a tremendous amount of force, knocking Igrim to the ground and sending Mr. 9 flying through the air. Miss Wednesday had been too close to Igrim as she also was launched into one of the nearby buildings. Vivi was staring in shock as her Nakama were defeated in a single blow. She was temporarily too stunned to pay attention to the woman that was currently gaining mass, as she fell towards the unsuspecting Vivi. However, Luffy, who had just watched in the beginning, decided it was time to interfere. He raised his fist as white air suddenly covered his entire arm, air fist. Miss Valentine, much to her surprise, was given a strong punch that was a lot harder than she ever thought a pirate like him would have been capable of. She was sent straight towards the other island and crashed hard. Much to Mr. 5's surprise, she didn't get up. Just how hard can that kid punch? He thought to himself. Mr. 5 launched another one of his nose cannons at Luffy. He saw this coming due to his observation hockey and vanished, causing the explosion to blow up harmlessly behind him. Luffy then reformed a few feet away, grinning at Mr. 5, who looked at him in shock. He must have a devil fruit, but just what kind? Mr. 5 thought. Vivi, stunned at the power that she had just seen from the young pirate, asked, just who are you? Future king of the pirates. Luffy shouted with a grin. Vivi simply stared at that declaration. She thought it sounded foolish, but considering it was looking like he was the strongest one here, maybe he wasn't all that foolish. Zoro walked over and stood next to his captain and Vivi. Igrim had begun to regain consciousness at this point and crawled towards the 2 straw hats. Please allow me to make an unreasonable request. Igrim begged at their feet. It is beyond my power to stop him. Please protect the princess in my stead. Princess? Zoro thought to himself. Just who are these people? Luffy, however, smiled and said, okay. I'll protect you too, and he turned, raising his fists and prepared to fight the remaining Baroque member. Vivi resumed spinning her weapons, and Zoro drew all 3 of his swords. Mr. 5 looked at the 3 in his way. One had defeated his partner in the blink of an eye. The other he was unsure of, but was likely strong as well, seeing as he defeated all the underlings. Then there was Vivi and Igrim. It looked like Igrim was on death's door already, but Vivi hadn't been touched. This wasn't looking good for him. Mr. 5 decided that there was no way he could defeat all of them, and with his partner MIA it was even less likely. We will meet again, pirates, and you too, he said, pointing at Vivi and Igrim. Your days are numbered, he said and took off running. Hopefully, he would be able to find his partner, but if she fell in the water, it was, after all, a ruse. However, we were able to halt them, Zoro said firmly. When Luffy nodded, the crew became aware of the presence of 2 more people. Hey, you're the same girl from before, isn't Wednesday? Usopp remarked. Well, there's a bit more to it than that. Looking at Igaram, Vivi murmured. Miss Wednesday is the codename for the organization we were snooping on. Igaram started speaking. The group Baroque Works is seeking to take over our country. Princess Vivi is the real Miss Wednesday, Igaram informed the Straw Hats. Wait, you're a princess? Nami had inquired. What's the reward for saving a princess? As she turned to them, berry indications took over her imagination. You know, if you guys require escorting, we may be persuaded to assist for a pittance, of course. We can talk later about that, Vivi spoke, knowing the money was a bit of a problem right now. We will take you there, Luffy decided, not wanting the princess to question if they would take her there or not. Luffy received a deep bow from Igaram. Sir, thank you very much. If you get her there safely, I owe you more than I'll ever be able to repay you. Igaram stood up once again. But I have a strategy that will allow you to leave this island. By now, your log posture should have been established, and it should be directing you to the next island. I do, however, have another one that directs you to Alabasta. Well, then, why don't we use that one? Nami had inquired. If she wasn't going to make any money on this trip, she might as well make it fast. Because I feel we will be assaulted once we leave this island. It'll only be a matter of time until someone reports in and sends someone to pursue us. I can function as a decoy if I adopt the log posture and disguise myself and travel towards Alabasta. If anybody is going to be assaulted, it will be me. Igaram spoke himself gravely. You can't, exclaims Igaram. Vivi started to speak. It's the very least I can do for you, Igaram responded. I'm leaving with the decoys right now. Igaram went on. To give me a few hours head starts, you and your team should wait until the morning. After then, you'll take the more typical path to Alabasta. I can't estimate how long it will take, but I wish you all the best and hope you can safely return with the princess. Luffy nodded, and they returned aboard the Going Merry, after Vivi said her goodbyes to Igaram. They stood there watching as Igaram boarded his own ship and sailed down the canal. Are we certain this strategy will work? Usopp inquired. What if we were being observed, after all? What if they see right through our strategy from the start? Well, it's too late to worry about that now, Luffy replied to Usopp, smiling. That is not the appropriate response. Usopp pondered his thoughts. As they got to know their new crew member, the Straw Hats formed plans. They would depart the island in a few hours, with Igaram serving as a decoy. Boom. A huge explosion happened just where Igaram's boat was. The fire spread far and wide. The sky itself was illuminated from the fire. Vivi's eyes widened, and so did everyone else's. Igaram. Fun question. Which is your favorite One Piece opening? Comment down below. Chapter 20. A Dragon a Day Hero. Hello, Drainer here. If you'd like to become a patron and get access to these chapters earlier, just head on over to and search Drainer. www.patreon.com/Drainer. The following 5 chapters are already available for patrons. Chapter 21, Wild Night, Chapter 22, Little Garden, Chapter 23, Giants and Luffy's Anger, Chapter 24, Drum Kingdom, and Chapter 25, Chopper and the Crazy Lady, are already available for patrons. Igaram, Vivi screamed in horror, seeing the flames reaching the sky itself. Her legs moved on her own, wanting to jump on the water. But Luffy grabs her by the waist, and puts her on his shoulder. What are you doing? Sorry, but we don't have time to waste. Vivi tried to fight back, but it was all in vain. Luffy was much stronger than her, eventually giving up. Seeing the princess had stopped struggling against him, he put her on the wooden floor of the main deck. After a few minutes of silence except for Vivi, who was crying her eyes out, Nami thought of perhaps saying a few things to cheer her up somehow. Her duck approached the princess, leaving out a quack sound. The princess raised her head, looking at her friend, before hugging him tightly. Can someone fill us with information about who we are dealing with? Usopp asks, still not understanding the weight of the situation. Crocodile, we are going to face the warlord, Luffy answered immediately. No point in dancing around the bush. Usopp went pale, almost losing his conciseness. Vivi apologized again for putting them in such significant danger. No need to apologize, princess. Sooner or later, we were going to face them anyway, Luffy answered respectfully towards the princess. Garp had made sure to tell Luffy to respect the high ranks, unless they were pieces of shit. In that case, he had the permission to give them the fist of love. Except for the celestial dragons, Luffy, whenever you come in contact with one, you should run away, don't try to do anything, none of you are strong yet. We are ready, there's nothing to worry about, Zoro stated, looking at his swords. Nami and Sanji nodded in agreement. But right now wasn't the time for that, they were still in enemy territory. Luffy looked where their ship was sailing, a pretty thick fog right before them. We have a fog approaching, Nami. Take care of it, Luffy ordered, looking at his navigator, who winked at him before turning her arms gold. One new thing Luffy noticed was the red flames dancing around her wings. They weren't there before. Nami jumped up in the air, before sending a wind wave blowing away the fog, almost all of it. Nami looked annoyed and tried to keep flying, but was still not able to, eventually falling back to the main deck. "I'm sorry, Luffy," Nami apologized, knowing she didn't clear the whole fog. Luffy just kissed her cheek, making her blush. "Don't worry, Nami, you did very good," Luffy complimented. Vivi was quite impressed by her devil fruit abilities, not the first time seeing it, but still was something she wasn't used to yet. Nami started speaking orders since there was still danger from underwater rocks. Sanji and Usopp were listening to her orders while Zoro was checking on his swords. Nichiko was approaching the princess, thinking of ways to cheer her up. Luffy knew of the other woman on the ship. He wondered how long it would take for his crew to notice her presence. "Any second now. Be careful from the rocks. There's quite a few in front of us," a voice spoke towards Nami, who nodded her head. "Yes, thanks," she replied without thinking. Luffy eyed each of his crewmates. His irritation was growing by the second. "Any minute now. The big one to our right." Usopp moved the ship 30 degrees, Nami ordered, completely ignoring the new voice. "Okay, that's it," Luffy thought, tired of this cat and mouse game. Walking at the center of the deck, he coughed loudly, immediately gaining everyone's attention. This stopped everyone from doing whatever they were doing. "Eyes, do you feel something new in the ship?" Luffy asked with a grin, but everyone except Nichiko and Vivi could see Luffy was angry about something. They tried to think of what they were missing when surprisingly, Usopp closed his eyes and immediately turned to look at the railing, which looked at the lower deck. "Who are you?" he shouted, pointing at the woman. Zoro prepared to pull out his swords. Sanji pointed a pistol at her head, and so did Usopp, who was using a rifle. The woman crossed her arms, removing the weapons aimed at her, much to the shock of everyone. "She has a devil fruit," Nami said, being able to see the extra hands that grew out of nowhere. "Yeah, but which one?" Usopp asked out loud. "Took you long enough. I have been training you guys since you joined." Yet she was able to walk in, and none of you noticed, Luffy stated with a serious tone. The crew flinched slightly, knowing they had disappointed their captain. But Luffy's frown suddenly turned into an innocent smile that sent shivers to everyone's spine. "That means I will have to triple your training," Luffy decided with a burst of laughter. The crew paled at the thought of training that much. "Oh, so you were able to detect me," the woman said in amusement, looking at the captain of the Straw Hats. "Of course I was. I'm the captain," Luffy stated with a firm tone. The woman was sitting, but it was noticeable that she was tall, with olive skin and shoulder-length dark hair. She had blue eyes with wide dark pupils and a long thin nose. She was wearing a cowgirl outfit with a purple cleavage exposing corset and matching miniskirt, both with white hanging ornaments, and a white fur-lined coat paired with a white cowboy hat and white high-heeled boots. "Miss All Sunday." Princess Vivi shouted in anger towards the woman whose face didn't change in the slightest. "Who is she?" Usopp asked. "This beautiful lady, I mean, gorgeous enemy, was here all this time." Even worried, Sanji could see that some habits die hard. He lights a cigarette to smoke. He hoped it didn't, but things could go south really fast now. Vivi looked tense and scared. She was by Nichiko's side and behind, and none of the two seemed to be doing well. What did you do with Igaram? Why are you doing this now, if you let us discover the boss's identity?" This information came as thunder to everyone's ears, making them share confused and wary looks. "I see, that explains a lot. Who is she?" Zoro asks, a little confused by the situation. "The partner of MR.0, Crocodile. I follow her footsteps. That's how I found out about the secret organization." "If she helped you, then why did she attack the old man and is here now?" asked Nichiko with a steel staff in her hands. Vivi, however, didn't seem to have an answer to the question. "Well, it's quite simple, actually. A little princess, alone fighting an entire large organization that wants to take over her country. This was such a moving tale that I couldn't help but give her a small hand." She looked happy as she explained. "A sadistic choice." But Luffy felt, again, that is, it seemed false, but it also wasn't just that. There was something more, but he didn't know what. For the first time, he encountered a person who seemed to be able to cloud his senses, someone he couldn't quite tell how they felt. Vivi was trembling in frustration. All her effort, the lives of her people, was just a game for that woman. It really is a tragic tale. And so, the poor princess, in the act of desperation, asks the pirates for help. I'll give them credit for being able to take down the unluckiest, but honestly, if you continue following this route, you will not survive the next island. Despite her words, it didn't sound like a threat. You seem pretty sure about that. Nichiko spoke in a defiant tone that also failed to wipe the amusement off the woman's face. Miss All Sunday doesn't respond, she just keeps her gaze on her interest. At that moment, Luffy feels something on his back, together with a slight breeze that seems to take his hat in the air, towards the woman in the cowgirl outfit. MR.0's partner reached for the hat, but the object seemed to be drawn back to the owner's right hand, who put it back on his head, this time keeping his hand there holding it. "I don't like it when an enemy touches my hat." He was completely serious, and a small drop of sweat almost ran through Miss All Sunday's forehead. "I apologize then. Captain, an arm came out of your back. That's what threw the hat." Nami spoke without taking her eyes off the dark-haired one. She prepared to attack at any moment. She didn't yet if she would be able to defeat her, but it didn't matter. Got it. Hey, what you mean we that wouldn't survive the next island? Luffy's voice showed he wasn't taking her warning seriously. The next island is Little Garden. Only Vivi reacted to that name. The brunette seemed to vaguely remember that name, but not what it was referring to. Anyway, I think it would be really sad if the princess fight ended here. Saying this, she throws an object to Vivi, who instinctively takes it. It was an eternal pose, one similar to the one the princess had given Igrim. Why are you giving me this? She questions, squeezing the object with frustration. Was Miss All Sunday still playing with her really helping? More and more, her actions made less sense. It's an eternal pose for an island near Alabasta, but uninhabited. Not even Baroque Works knows this fruit so that it will be safe for you. This is coming from a very reliable source. Zoro was making fun of her, but he could feel the tension of the situation. The green-haired one was waiting for this woman to give some opening, but so far, there was absolutely nothing. While everyone had their attention completely focused on the dark-haired, Vivi had an internal debate about whether or not to accept this eternal pose. She didn't want to trust Miss All Sunday, but this might actually be a quicker ticket home. Besides being possibly safer, and she didn't feel entitled to put these people's lives in even more danger. Before she can come to any decision, the compass is taken from her hands by the captain without warning. Luffy first observes the object, then shows it to everyone and crushes it between his fingers. Only one person decides the course of this ship, me. Even though a possible ticket home had just been destroyed, Vivi felt a huge weight lifted from her shoulders. She felt safe, felt that she could trust Luffy, that he would protect her. I see that I offended you again, I apologize. Since we have nothing else to discuss, I will make my departure now. Things had once again gone out of her way. This time, however, she was in awe of this man's decision. She couldn't help but think he was very interesting. And why would we let an enemy out? The woman's eyes give away that she was having fun waiting for what was going to happen. Let her go, Luffy said, but to the surprise of everyone, he was not standing where he was a second ago, but instead right in front of the woman who looked shocked for the very first time since coming here. How is he so fast? She asked herself. The captain was standing between her and her way out of this ship. She knew if he wanted, he could have harmed her or even killed her. The crew waited in bated breath, wondering what the captain would do. Luffy just grew a smile. Before you leave, I want to know your name. Luffy asked the woman, who did a double take, wondering if she heard him right. Miss Sunday, she answered with a smirk. I meant your real name, none of that codename crap, Luffy said before walking past her, leaving the way open for her to leave. I'm afraid I can't tell you my name, but if our roads clash again, I might tell you, Robin said before sending a wink at Luffy before jumping off the Going Merry. Sanji cried tears of despair, seeing the new woman winking at the shitty captain, who burst out laughing. The giant tortoise. So cool, Usopp comments impressed. Will we see Miss All Sunday-chan again? Now that the tension had passed, Sanji went back to normal. If we do, you can go with her, and never come back, said Zoro as he put his swords in their scabbards. Shut up, Murimo. Fuck you, pervert. Once again, the two looked like they were about to fight, just to be interrupted by an angry Redeed. Not now. Nami screams, slapping them both on the head. We have other concerns now, she said, looking at Vivi with empathy. With all the shock gone, Vivi looked like she was going to burst into tears with Igrim's death. They didn't even have time to find the body, to give him a proper burial. And to top that, all the things that had changed overnight. Suddenly everything felt even more dangerous than it already was. Don't worry, just trust us, said Nijiko, putting a hand on the princess's shoulder. It made her realize that despite everything, these people, powerful people, were willing to help her. Thank you. She takes a deep breath. The problems weren't forgotten, and she still had a lot on her mind, but it wasn't time now. Above all, she should be strong for her country. What is this little garden that woman was talking about? Why wouldn't we survive there? Usopp asked, terrified as he remembered these words. I don't know much about it. I just heard that most of those who go there never leave. They say that even for the Grand Line, that island has a completely different climate, completely isolated and without even civilization. Vivi explained everything she had ever heard about the place, which only increased Usopp's fear. And what's so bad there? If there are no survivors, there are no people telling stories. There was a certain funereal tone in Zoro's words, making almost all of them feel a chill down their spines. Zoro lies down in any corner, appearing unaffected by recent events. Sanji goes to cook, while declaring his love to all the women present. Nijiko raises the idea of a betting game, cheering Usopp for entertainment and Nami for the chance to win money. She was also fully focused on navigation, but she could do both at the same time. With the unluckies out, I think communication at Baroque Works will be down for a while. The only problem is that since Miss All Sunday found us, she should be reporting us to the crocodile by now. At least, it will be more troublesome for other agents, especially the lower-ranking ones. The other two nodded, agreeing with her logic. Can they set an ambush? Nami wondered, crossing her arms. It's something we can expect from Crocodile. Now, whether they're going to attack us, at sea or in Little Garden, I don't know. There's also the unlikely possibility that they'll actually leave us to Little Garden, but I wouldn't count on that. Vivi explains, making Nemu sigh. They were able to give a small hit on the giant that was Baroque works, but the troubles hadn't even started yet. Out at sea, far from the going merry, was Miss All Sunday on top of her giant transport turtle Banshee. The animal had a dark brown hoof, a grayish-green belly, and a dull look. He smoked a cigar and wore a horizontal white striped cowboy hat with a pink cloth that tied his head. On top of the bark was a shawl that would fit on top of the animal. Inside there was only a purple rug, a couch of the same color, 2 windows on opposite sides, a door in front of the couch, and a desk next to it. The dark-haired woman was sitting cross-legged and holding a den mushy in her right hand. So we lost the unluckies, Miss Valentine and Mr.5. To a bunch whose captain is worth only, what, 70 million berry. The voice coming out of the snail was thick, hoarse, and dry. It was the voice of one of the warlord pirates, Crocodile. Basically. Despite still maintaining a confident facade, some, like Luffy, would notice a nervous feeling coming from her. Why didn't you kill them? He didn't look angry. In fact, he seemed almost uninterested. Honestly, I don't believe I would be able to beat them in a battle. Miss All Sunday said with honesty was completely sincere. She was never a born fighter, to begin with, and she also had enough life experience to know who was dangerous, and she counted at least 3 people who were a threat here. The captain, the swordsman, and the cook who was drooling after her. Anyway, their destination is Little Garden. On the other side of the conversation, the man nodded, getting her point. For now, you will be responsible for communication. Send some agents to Little Garden, Mr.3 and Miss Goldenweek. Miss All Sunday almost widened her eyes hearing the orders. The Crocodile was taking this situation more seriously than she imagined, sending Mr.3 directly and with reinforcements still. Understood. I will contact them now. There was no further reply, and the call was disconnected. The dark-haired looked out the window, thinking about that little crew and the fate that awaited them, but strangely, she didn't feel like they would be defeated. She didn't know if this was good or not. Monkey D. Dragon. The sound of wind passing through the buildings echoed in his ears, a hoodie hiding his face, red marks on the left side of his cheek, his feet passing through people begging in the streets for food. They were starving. Each of them had sunk cheeks, almost making a small hole in their cheeks. The skin around their eyeballs looked nearly gone, as their arms were as thin as a stick. Dragon ordered his man to help anyone who wasn't already dead, but he himself had someone to meet here. Are you sure about this? Sabo asked by his side respectfully. He believed Dragon would have a significant role to bring the new dawn, but after what he read in the newspaper about what Ace had done, inside, he was happy for his brother, but knew with that single move. He had marked a big red mark on his back. A bigger one than he already had by being a Whitebeard commander. He was already drawing attention by being the second commander of Whitebeard pirates, but Sabo wondered what Ace was even doing in Sabati. Clearly, he would stay close to Whitebeard. He wondered what could have happened to make Ace leave the ship. Don't worry, Sabo, I would never do anything that could endanger a revolution, Dragon answered with a stern tone. Soon they reached a house. Sabo walked forward as he knocked on the door. The door opened. Sabo peeked his head inside but couldn't see any danger. It's safe. Walking inside, Dragon removed his hood covering his face. His eyes met with someone he had tried to avoid for a long time now. The man hadn't changed in the slightest, still the same rock-head man. It has been a long time, Dragon. Indeed, father. Chapter 21. Wild Night. Hello, Driner here. If you'd like to become a patron and get access to these chapters earlier, just head on over to Patreon and search Driner. www.patreon.com/Driner. The next 5 chapters are already available for patrons. Chapter 22, Little Garden. Chapter 23, Giants and Luffy's Anger. Chapter 24, Drum Kingdom. Chapter 25, Chopper and the Crazy Lady. And Chapter 26, Dr. Chopper and Unikama are already available for patrons. Night Lemon. Luffy lifted her off of the ground, and she giggled as her legs were thrashing around. Luffy's grip never wavered though as he crossed the distance to their bed and tossed Nami onto it. She squealed as her body came into contact with the soft bed, but that was quickly cut off by Luffy's mouth, as he covered her body with his, and latched his mouth onto hers. Her legs parted for him, and he settled in between, although his cock rested on her stomach, rather than entering her just yet. As their body moved in unison, Luffy's cock rubbed against her smooth skin, and he groaned into her mouth. He was already so close to finishing because of Nami's wonderful mouth and hands that had worked on his cock earlier, and he recognized that he wouldn't last long once he entered her. He knew that, because of her explosive orgasm a couple of minutes ago, she wasn't going to come again that soon. Fuck it, Luffy thought. She's been teasing me for the past hour and I've been needing to come for the majority of that. Luffy lifted his body off of hers and pushed Nami's legs wider apart. He saw just how wet she was, and he couldn't wait any longer. Luffy's hand curled around his cock and lined it up to her entrance. Nami was looking on eagerly, and the back of her head hit the bed when Luffy thrust into her deeply. Oh gods, Luffy. She moaned loudly, feeling his thick cock stretching her wonderfully. Her lips were parted, and her eyes were scrunched closed as Luffy slammed into her fast and hard. Ew, fuck. Her cries of pleasure were no doubt heard by the others. Luffy was fucking her just as she wanted it. One of his hands was wrapped around her ankle, making sure her legs were spread wide for him, so he could be as deep inside of her as possible, whilst the other hand fondled the tip. He pulled his cock almost entirely out of her, leaving only the tip in her cunt, before slamming back into her, filling her up entirely with his cock. Don't stop, don't fucking stop. I don't plan to, he replied gruffly, but if Luffy was to blame anything for an early finish, it would be Nami's mouth and hands. Her warm and wet cunt was heavenly, and with each thrust, Luffy felt a little closer to his long-awaited release. Oh gods, you feel so good, she panted. She arched her back when Luffy's cock reached a spot deep within her, and her arched body was met with Luffy's as he leaned down to kiss her. His breath ghosting against her lips before he closed the space and their lips connected again. Luffy pushed her legs even wider apart, looking down at her hairless cunt as he thrust wildly into her. From the look on his face, and the fact she knew him so well, Nami knew that Luffy was extremely close. It seems I was too good pleasuring him, she thought with amusement. However, I know he has a lot more to come. We're nowhere near done. You know what I want, Nami told him between kisses. Give it to me. After one final thrust and loud groan, Luffy slid out of her cunt and moved quickly, so that his knees were either side of her, and his rock-hard cock rested on her tits. Nami grabbed his cock with both of her dainty hands, and tugged him closer to her. Her soft hands glided down his cock with ease as her mouth, and her cunt had lubricated it. She lifted her head and spat on his cock, making it even more slippery, before she rested her head back on the pillow, and watched as she stroked his cock with such a quickness, that the squelching sounds were both loud and recurrent. Nami, yes, he mumbled as he threw his head back in pleasure. Her small hands were doing wondrous things to him, and he couldn't hold off his release for much longer. Fuck Nami, I'm going to. Come for me, Luff, Nami hummed. I want it, you know I want it. Fuck, Luffy groaned and replaced her hands with one of his. He pumped his cock quickly, grunting deeply each time until a final loud grunt signaled his release. Luffy felt his balls tighten before his seed erupted from him. The first spurt landed on her cheek, his warm, sticky seed covering the skin from just below her eyes to her jaw. The next shot ejected onto her forehead, followed by a number of ropes of his seed that landed on her mouth, chin and her tits. Luffy breathed heavily after finally finishing his orgasm. He looked down at her and smirked at seeing the image of his lover covered in his seed. Like what you see? Nami asked as her tongue swiped a bit of his seed from her lips. Oh, you know I do, Luffy replied, his smirk getting wider. Sometimes, I feel his words don't do you justice. Is that so? You did say my mouth was dirty. Filthy was the word I use, I believe, Luffy said, correcting her. Nami felt filthy, being covered in Luffy's seed, but as always with Luffy, she felt filthy in the best way. What else are you going to do to me, my captain? A great number of things, Luffy replied as he clutched her hair and lifted her head. Suck, he ordered. Nami's lips wrapped around his cock and her tongue darted out to lick any remnants of his seed from the tip of his cock. Some of his seed, which was on her lips, mixed with her own arousal on his cock as well as her spit. Nami slipped down his entire cock, all the way to the base, and she felt his cock begin to harden again in her mouth, after it had begun to soften due to his release. As soon as her lips had enveloped his cock, Luffy knew that it wouldn't be long until he was fully hard again. The sight of her with my seed all over her face, gods. Luffy pulled her head up and down with a little more force, and his hips bucked towards her, causing his cock to get deeper in her mouth. Her moan vibrated through his body, and he sighed in contentment as she sucked on his cock. When he thrusted his cock into her mouth with a greater urgency, Nami relaxed her throat in order to not gag. The sounds of his cock fucking her mouth filled the room until it mixed with her own moans, because she was bobbing her head on his cock at the same time as he fucked her mouth. His cock was slick with her spit, and strands of saliva dripped down her chin as she sucked his cock. After a couple of minutes, Luffy abruptly pulled out of her mouth, and received a whine from Nami. Clean yourself. Luffy settled beside her, and watched Nami intently, while slowly stroking his cock. Her fingers scooped up his coom from her face and sucked it from her fingers, before doing the same to the coom that had landed on her tits. She swallowed his seed and licked her plump lips to make sure she got it all. When she turned her head towards Luffy, she didn't hesitate at all to grab his face in her hands and kiss him passionately. His hands rested on her slender waist before moving down to caress her well-rounded and curvy hips. They both tasted their own releases on the other's tongue, especially when Nami deepened the kiss. Her hand slid up his handsome face, and she threaded her fingers through his pretty hair, whilst their tongues danced. When their lips parted, Luffy turned both himself and Nami on their sides, so that his chest was pressed up against her back. His teeth lightly grazed the skin on her neck, and Nami instinctively squirmed a little, but Luffy wrapped a hand around her to steady her. However, her little movements brought her cunt into contact with his cock. She brought her hand down between her legs where Luffy's cock rested and wrapped her fingers around the long, thick length. She guided his cock through her wet folds, and she felt his hot breath quicken against her ear. She pressed the tip against her engorged clit, and she moaned out his name. Rubbing his cock against her clit felt wonderful for Nami. Although, nothing compares to Luffy's mouth on it. Needing to feel more, Luffy grabbed Nami's wrist and guided her hand, which was still wrapped around his cock, into her. Her slick walls enveloped his cock like a sheath, and he buried his face in between her neck and shoulder, when his entire cock was encased by her hot cunt. With one of his arms still draped around her, Luffy pulled her body closer, so that there was nothing between them. Their slick skin merged together, and Nami began to slowly gyrate her hips against his own. "Come on, Luffy," Nami said, urging him on. "Fuck me." Luffy needed no further encouragement because instead of slow, shallow thrusts, he began to fuck her faster and harder. He placed kisses to her shoulder blade, up her collarbone until he reached her neck. Nami moved her head to the side to open up her neck to him, giving him greater access to it. Nami whimpered when she felt Luffy's teeth bite down lightly on her neck, before he soothed the skin with his skilled tongue. He then sucked on that particular bit of skin, no doubt leaving a mark. Luffy looked down to where they were connected, and not for the first time thought that Nami had a magnificent arse. Each time he entered her cunt, her arse shook, because of the position the two of them were in, and Luffy would be content for the rest of his days, if he could just spend it in the bedroom with Nami. Nami noticed that he had stopped kissing her neck, so she twisted her head around to see what exactly he was doing. What she found amused her to no end. Nami knew that Luffy was fascinated with her arse, and she caught him staring on a number of occasions. Not that I can talk, because I've been caught staring at him on a number of occasions. She watched as his eyes fixated on her round butt with an intensity that would have had her weak at the knees, had she been standing. "Like what you see?" Nami asked, causing Luffy to snap out of his reverie, and also to still his movements within her. "Like you even have to ask," Luffy replied, smiling at her before grabbing a handful of her arse with his free hand. Nami leaned into his touch and welcomed his hand on her butt. Not wanting to stop their coupling, Nami pushed herself onto his cock, taking almost all of him inside of her, and making both of them moan simultaneously. She pushed herself off of him, so that only the tip of his member remained inside of her, before she slammed herself down on his cock. "Gods, Nami!" Luffy exclaimed, his fingers digging into the flesh of her arse. "You like that, honey?" Nami asked with a mischievous smile. Her tight walls squeezed around his cock and Luffy gasped at the feeling. "That's a reminder, don't you fucking dare stop fucking me." Her head had swiveled back around, and Luffy smiled against her shoulder. Luffy lifted the leg closest to him up, spreading Nami legs, and giving himself a fantastic view of her bare, wet cunt, as his cock slid into it. With his arm hooked around her thigh, thus lifting her leg up in the air, Luffy's was able to get deeper inside of her due to the new angle, much to Nami's delight. Yes, Luffy. Keep going just like that." The speed of his cock sliding in and out of her cunt gradually kept getting quicker, which also made Nami's moans more frequent and louder. His balls slapped against her arse, and from the slight tremble that he felt in the thigh that he held, Luffy knew Nami was getting close to her climax. The arm that was wrapped around her middle relaxed its grip, and his fingers trailed down her body towards her waiting cunt, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. His fingers on her body had always had that effect on her, no matter the time, place or situation. He drew patterns on the soft, smooth skin of her flat stomach, as he slowly got closer and closer to his intended target. The sound that came out of her mouth whilst he was doing that was a mixture of a giggle and a strangled moan. His fingers ghosted over the smooth and hairless skin just above her cunt, and Nami could barely contain the anticipation. "Please," she begged. Thankfully for Nami, Luffy didn't make her wait long, because as soon as his fingers ghosted over her clit, they dropped and lightly pinched it, making Nami squirm whilst being pounded by Luffy's cock. Her eyes were closed as she felt her orgasm get closer each time Luffy's cock entered her, which it was doing so at a rapid rate now. Luffy kissed her jaw and her cheek before saying, "Open your eyes." Nami did as he asked and looked into his deep dark eyes. "I want to see your eyes." Luffy's fingers were rubbing her clit and Nami was staring intently at the actions of both his fingers and his cock. She was shaking, because everything he did felt so good, and she was so close to her climax, that she was begging him to make her cum. "Please, oh god, please, Luffy. Please make me cum. Make me fucking cum. Cum for me," Luffy said in a gruff voice. His voice sent her over the edge and her body seized before shaking violently. "Oh fuck. Oh gods, yes, fuck yes Luffy," she cried. Her cunt clenched around his cock as her orgasm swept over her. Luffy kept rubbing her cunt in slow circular motions, whilst his cock made shallow thrusts into her to prolong her pleasure. When her body eventually stopped trembling, Luffy felt her relax into his embrace. They stayed like that for a few moments, their heavy breathing gradually evening out. "That's the second of many orgasms you're going to have," Luffy said confidently. Nami smirked at him, knowing just how great Luffy was at pleasuring her. Luffy placed a small pack on the side of her face before untangling himself from her body and removing his cock from her cunt. Nami whined when she felt his large thick cock leave her. She felt empty when he wasn't inside of her, but within a couple of seconds, she had an adequate replacement. Luffy's mouth latched onto her cunt, enjoying the taste of her juices on his tongue. The taste and smell of her cunt would remain on his lips for hours, and it was something that delighted him. Luffy's tongue licked between her folds before dropping down to her thighs to collect her sweet essence that was dripping down her legs. Nami let him lick up her inner thighs and into her cunt as she just laid on the bed, sprawled out, anticipating what position her captain would take her in next. "Ew, are you going to fuck my arse next?" Nami asked excitedly. Luffy licked across the patch of skin between her cunt and her arse. He knew that bit of skin was particularly sensitive, and he held her arse firmly when she began squirming. Nami's eyes followed the ripples of muscle on his forearm up to his biceps, as he held onto her arse, whilst alternating between licking her cunt and licking her arse. His muscles were defined and not just on his arms, because as her eyes roamed the rest of the body that she was so familiar with, she saw he was muscular everywhere. Her brown eyes returned her gaze to his face, which was buried in her arse. Right where he should be. Something about watching him in that position had her panting. She moved her legs further apart, allowing him to get deeper inside of her. Luffy's hands spread across her arse cheeks, pushing them apart so his tongue and face could get easier access. Luffy spent a number of minutes between her arse cheeks, licking her cunt and arse. When he finally got up from between her legs, Nami nearly collapsed to the floor in a heap. His tongue is unparalleled. He stood behind her, and rubbed his cock between the lips of her cunt, and against her arsehole, but he made sure not to enter it. The strands of saliva dripped down her arse and cunt. His mouth had done a wonderful job on her, but Nami was ready for more, and Luffy was always up to the task to give it to her. "You ready, Nami?" "Most definitely," she moaned. She tried pushing her arse backwards towards Luffy to get him to slip inside her, but it didn't quite work. Her eyes were filled with lust, love and desire. Luffy climbed on the bed and pulled Nami with him by her arm. He lay on his back, with his head resting on the pillows. "Ride my cock," Luffy ordered. Nami smirked at him as she crawled on her hands and knees towards Luffy, until her body was hovering over his. His big hard cock was pressed up against her stomach whilst her tits ghosted over his chest. She leaned her head down and pressed her lips against the hard muscles of his chest. She kissed her way up, pressing her lips against his throat before capturing his bottom lip between her own lips. Luffy's hands rested on her hips as he let her kiss them all over his body. Her hands snaked between their bodies, and she curled her fingers around the base of his cock. She guided it towards her cunt, and she was so wet that his cock easily slipped into her warm and wet cunt. Nami slowly lowered herself on him, allowing herself to feel every inch of him as she took more of him in her cunt. She placed her hands on his shoulders, steadying herself for each time she lowered herself onto his cock. She was finally fully seated on his cock, filling her up utterly and completely. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his, and their breaths mingled with each other. Her eyes were closed, but she could feel Luffy's black eyes on her. Nami's eyelids fluttered open, and she began to rock her body against his, whilst keeping her forehead pressed against his. Their eyes never left each other as they both began moving in rhythm. They were still pressed together, stomach, chest, and forehead. The gaze never broke as Nami began slamming her hips down harder. Love comes in at the eyes. Each time Nami pushed herself down on his cock, Luffy helped her by pushing her arse down as well. He had a great view of where they joined, which was slick from Nami's arousal and cum. The wet and sticky skin came together continuously, making slapping sounds that filled the room along with both of their moans. "Fuck, fuck, 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 fuck," Nami chanted. Luffy lifted one hand from her arse, and brought it to her tits. He squeezed one, before twisting the pink nipple. "Yes, fuck yes." Not wanting to neglect the other nipple, Luffy gave Nami a long and passionate kiss, before lowering his head to the nipple in question. It was hard from her arousal, and Luffy immediately wrapped his lips around it. Nami moaned softly and threaded her fingers through his dark hair, and held him against her tit. Nami clenched her cunt around Luffy's cock, which made Luffy grunt against her tit, before he bit down on her nipple. Nami's smirk vanished and was replaced with a look that was a mixture of pain and pleasure. His tongue soothed her pink nipple, continuously glancing against her hardened bud, which brought her closer to her impending orgasm. "Luffy," she cried, forcing Luffy to switch to the other nipple, because it got too much for her. Had she just allowed Luffy to continue to lick, suck and bite down on her tits, she knew she would climax, but she wanted to prolong their coupling for as long as possible, whilst also experiencing the most powerful orgasm possible, so that meant holding off for the time being. Nami pressed her hands against his chest, reluctantly pushing him off of her tits, and back down to bed whilst she leaned back. Luffy moved his hands to her upper thighs and pushed them apart and watched as his cock slid in and out of Nami's cunt. Her hairless cunt engulfed his cock each time she descended on it, and each time, Nami felt his cock hit the back of her cunt, her womb, because she was taking all of it inside of her. Her tits bounced up and down with increased frequency as their pace became frantic. She squeezed her soft tits whilst bouncing up and down on his cock, finding the dual sensations nearly overwhelming. Her eyes were shut, and her lips parted as Luffy held her thighs firmly to keep her in place, and began to thrust up into her with reckless abandon. His length disappeared inside of her as he buried himself to the hilt, but he immediately pulled out before thrusting up into her again. "Erg, Luffy, don't stop, erg, don't stop fucking me." His rough fucking was bringing her closer to her orgasm, and Luffy wanted to cum with her at the same time. His balls were slapping against her large arse, and his grunts were getting louder as he neared to his own completion. Fuck fuck. Luffy grunted when he felt her walls begin to contract around his cock. She was tight and ever so wet. Nami wanted nothing more than to cum all over him, and then feel his seed filling her up. Opening her eyes, Nami met his eyes again. "I love you, Luffy," she said, giving him a kiss of the lips. Pulling away, Luffy smiled before kissing her nose. "I love you too, Nami." Lemon ends. Underwater. While all this happened, somewhere else a man with a white hat, a sword on his shoulder, the man was growing annoying of the stupid delay, deciding to see what the problem was. Standing up, he opened the door leading to the main room of the submarine. He was suddenly approached by one of his crewmates. Well, usually a crewmate meant either a man or a woman. In this captain's case, his crewmate was a polar bear who stopped in front of him, breathing heavily, sweat rolling down before dropping down on the metal floor. The captain was about to ask what the problem was when his friend looked up at him again, no longer tired. "Captain, we have received a response," he said through his heavy breathing, clearly still tired. The captain said nothing but grabbed the letter. On top of it was written, "The Legacy of D." Chapter 22, Little Garden. Chapter 23, Giants and Luffy's Anger. Chapter 24, Drum Kingdom. Chapter 25, Chopper and the Crazy Lady. Chapter 26, Dr. Chopper, and Unicama. And Chapter 27, A Night of Passion, are already available for patrons. Luffy. The ship was smoothly sailing towards Little Garden. The crew didn't know what to expect on the next island they were sailing towards. Miss All Sunday had warned them that it was a dangerous island. Even Vivi's words about the island weren't exactly uplifting. "Vivi, what do you know about Little Garden?" Nami suddenly asked as they were eating breakfast. Luffy was busy shoving his face with meat, but was paying attention to her answer. Sanji was preparing some spaghetti covered with spicy. Usopp wanted to know more about this mysterious island, while Najiko was writing something in a red book of hers. "Can't say much, I have never been there, but I have read and even heard from people that no one ever returned from that place," Vivi gravely said. Usopp paled slightly. He wanted to suggest that perhaps they should change direction, but knowing Luffy, he knew his plead would fall on deaf ears. Well, Usopp was clearly disturbed, but the others didn't seem to care, especially Luffy. He swallowed a huge chunk of meat before standing up. "Well, that's where we are going, and Princess Vivi, since you will be with us until Alabasta is safe, you will train with the rest of us," Luffy stated firmly, not wanting to hear a no for an answer. Vivi shuddered slightly at the thought of training. She had seen with her own eyes what they called training, and that was a nightmare, to say the least. Eventually, she reluctantly nodded her head, and Luffy smiled brightly. "It's decided then. Once you're done eating, we will start," Luffy exclaimed with a raised fist. Nami giggled at the enthusiasm of her lover. He always took things a bit too lightly, while Vivi was already regretting her decision. Soon the crew finished their breakfast and walked outside. Luffy didn't waste time and explained everything about hockey to Vivi, who was quite surprised to hear it. She wondered why her kingdom hadn't already known about such a thing as hockey. It would have been quite beneficial, especially if every soldier of the kingdom knew about hockey. Starting with observation hockey, instead of Luffy sending voltage at the princess, Nami decided to take charge. Vivi started by meditating of all things. Nami was slowly circling around her, like a wolf hunting her prey, a staff in her hand preparing to strike the princess, but not hard enough actually to hurt her. Vivi felt nervous. She knew the navigator wasn't someone who took pleasure in causing harm, but the innocent grin she sent towards Vivi before the latter closed her eyes wasn't exactly reassuring. The princess suddenly winced in pain when a strike hit her shoulder. Before rubbing the part where it hurt, she tried to open her eyes, but she felt a hand blocking her eyes. "No opening your eyes until you manage to dodge at least one attack," Nami ordered her before pulling her hand away. The princess could tell from her tone that she was enjoying this torture session. Vivi wanted to say something, to protest, when another strike hit her elbow. "Eyes closed," Nami ordered with a higher tone. Vivi knew she was in a world of trouble, and she felt that the navigator was quite enjoying what she was doing. On the other side of the ship, Luffy had covered his eyes with a blindfold, moving his head around while Zoro and Sanji desperately tried to land a hit. Thus far, they had successfully landed 4 hits, but they both knew Luffy could have perhaps dodged them, if he was more serious at the time. Usopp was busy doing push-ups, sit-ups, and drinking plenty of juice. Najiko was meditating with Vivi. She was using her observation haki to dodge Nami's attack. While not at the same level as her sister, she was able to avoid several of her attacks. Najiko had felt that Nami's attacks didn't really hurt anymore. Her skin would usually turn red after getting hit. She wondered if her sister was going easier on her, or she was getting stronger and more durable. Najiko hoped it was the latter. The Straw Hat crew spent the whole day like that, training and resting only once or twice. Near dusk, Luffy decided to train Nami. "Alright, Nami," Luffy called her, stretching out his arms and legs and preparing for the fight. Nami stood 10 feet away from her lover captain. She nodded reluctantly, before transforming her arms into wings with scales. They looked made of gold, and her wings looked like diamonds made of gold attached together, creating a wing shining brightly from the light of the sun. Her legs just turned to gold but didn't transform into anything. The red fire was dancing around her wings, shining brighter than the sun in the sky. Everyone around could feel the heat coming from Nami. It wasn't bothering anyone, more like a calming fire. Sanji had golden hearts in his eyes, drilling from his mouth like a dog. Zoro rolled his eyes at his stupidity. Nami tried to transform further, knowing from Luffy's explanation that her devil fruit was nothing to take lightly. She had just scratched the tip of the iceberg. Seeing that her body wasn't transforming further, her eyes went to her captain, preparing to fight. Luffy noticed a new feature. Her eyes now had changed color. Her eyes had turned from her deep brown to red like blood. Her pupil looked smaller, while her eye color had expanded, almost covering the entire eye. "Ready when you are," Luffy said as Nami rushed at him by jumping high in the sky, moving her arms, sending a wind wave towards Luffy, who stood in his place, not moving. Vivi gasped, recognizing that move from before. The last time Nami used that, she killed the unluckiest, and now she was using the same move against her captain. "Luffy, get away," she shouted in concern, but her warning fell on deaf ears, as the attack hit Luffy straight in the chest, but didn't do the slightest bit of damage. Vivi sighed in relief seeing the captain wasn't harmed. Still, it was short-lived when Nami rushed towards Luffy from above, her golden leg making contact with Luffy's arm, before the captain smirked. "That one, Nami," he complimented before moving her leg away, followed closely by a fist in the stomach which sent her crashing against the wooden wall of the ship. "You shitty captain, how dare you attack Nami?" Sanji didn't finish his words, when Luffy gave him a glare that made him stop. The Straw Hat captain had noticed something, when his fists made contact. Nami stood up, and to the surprise of everyone, her stomach had turned gold with scales. But that wasn't everything. Zoro noticed that her stomach almost looked like armor. "I see." Nami knew she didn't have time to dodge me, but instead moved her golden form from her left arm to her stomach, to act as armor, Luffy thought, noticing that Nami's arm had turned to normal. Nami was breathing heavily. She felt good to figure out this new technique, but she disliked that it went to the cost of making her arm useless. She wondered if there was a way to use her armor, but without the need to turn one of her arms back to normal. "You did good, Nami. It seems you're slowly progressing," Luffy complimented with a smile. Nami felt her cheek blush. Nezuko felt good for her sister. The day went on with Luffy fighting Zoro, Sanji, and Nami simultaneously. Usopp was to train Nezuko in Vivi's observation hockey. Several days later, the crew saw the unknown island slowly appearing in front of them. Smoker. It had been almost 3 weeks since Straw Hat Luffy had escaped from his grasp. Smoker had wasted no time requesting a new captain to come and take his place, while he chased the Straw Hat. Much to his annoyance, he couldn't really leave Log Town until the captain arrived, which took 2 weeks. After his arrival, Smoker prepared a small crew, including Tashigi, who surprisingly looked more eager than him to start this journey. Smoker didn't really pay her attention. His mind was already full of the information that apparently Dragon, the revolutionary, was the son of the hero of the Marine, and if that wasn't enough, his son was someone who claimed where Gold Roger had been executed, that he would become the king of the pirates. Smoker had seen that grin before, the same grin the Pirate King had moments before his death. Smoker wondered if there was any connection but soon dropped the idea. It made no sense. For a while, Smoker wondered if he should tell anyone about Dragon's full name, but decided otherwise. It is not that like that piece of information would change anything. Smoker looked at the wanted poster of Dragon, and unlike his son, in the poster only wrote Dragon with no mention of his full name. Smoker knew that perhaps Admiral Sengoku had perhaps pulled a few strings here and there for that to happen. As he smoked his cigarettes, his mind went to Monkey D. Luffy. While he had waited in Log Town for the new captain, Smoker had done a bit of digging to see what crimes this pirate had done thus far, even sending some marines to some of the towns that he had been. Smoker had been quite surprised to hear the report that the pirate had not done anything terrible, but apparently somehow good. First Captain Morgan, who apparently was feared by everyone in the town, while Smoker would have preferred if the pirate had left the corrupted marine captain alive, so he could beat him into a pulp. Smoker didn't shed tears for him. Next was the town terrorized by Buggy the Clown. Same story, the same pirates. Smoker couldn't help but think that this pirate had a good head on his shoulders, despite having the pirate's flag. He could have become an excellent marine. Smoker found himself thinking before the door of his office opened. Smoker moved the newspaper away from his face, to see who dared to walk in without knocking, but he knew one that would do that without hesitating. "How many times do I have to teach you this lesson, young lady?" Smoker grumbled with annoyance, but he was already used to her. In a way, he liked her carefree attitude. It was an excellent reminder not to take everything too seriously. "Captain Smoker, we are getting closer to the red line," she informed him, completely ignoring the captain's words. Smoker pulled the newspaper into the desk in front of him. "I have noticed you look excited. Any reason in particular?" Smoker asked with curiosity, wondering what was going through her head, especially since she had started training like a madwoman, wanting to get stronger according to her. While Smoker fully supported her desire, he knew something was missing, something he didn't know yet. Tashigi was startled by his question before her eyes found her captain again. "He's there, Captain. I still need to beat him," Tashigi said with precise determination in her eyes and voice. "He? Urano Zoro." Smoker cocked an eyebrow. This was news to him since when his student had taken an interest in a guy, in a pirate nonetheless. "Is he your secret boyfriend?" Smoker asked bluntly. Tashigi's face went red like a tomato. "He's not my boyfriend," she screamed with shark teeth towards him, who was more confused now. "You don't need to scream. It makes sense now that you're so eager to catch up with the Straw Hat Pirates, but falling in love with a pirate is not a good idea, but love is blind after all." Smoker teased with a little smile, much to Tashigi's horror, who kept denying that she had any feelings for the filthy pirate. Straw Hat crew. Zoro suddenly sneezed, wondering if someone was talking about him, before rubbing his eyes, the sun's light telling him that it was time to wake the fuck up. The crew was getting closer and closer to Little Garden. Luffy was bouncing up and down, excited to see what this second island had. Since he started his journey, Luffy had one adventure after another, and he wondered what this island would bring. From a distance, the island looked pretty normal to Nami, who started wondering what was so dangerous about this particular island. She glanced at her crew and noticed that only Usopp and Vivi were nervous about what they would counter on this new island. "Princess Vivi, what exactly do you know about this place?" Luffy asked, turning around to face her. While he was sure he could face whatever lived on this island, he didn't want to underestimate this place. "Not much, Luffy. As I said, no one has come out of this place alive. Not much is known, except that it is very dangerous," Vivi said. She had read books about this place when she was little, but all of them were just filled with wild theories. Luffy simply nodded before turning to Usopp. "See, what is in front of us," he ordered. His gunman didn't need to be told twice before climbing up to the crow's nest of the ship. Using binoculars, he looked around the island. One thing he noticed immediately was the sheer size of literally everything around the island. "Everything is gigantic. Oh crap, I can see a large tiger," Usopp screamed with tears. He really didn't want to stop in this place, let alone set foot on it and explore, but knowing his captain, his words would only make him more excited for the new adventure. Hearing about a giant tiger caused Luffy's eyes to turn to meat, drooling from his mouth at the thought of eating a beast like that. Nami giggled at her captain's antics, while Zoro was wondering if there was any beast on that island, powerful enough to be a good enough fight. Soon they sailed deeper into the island. Usopp was still looking around, not that it was that much necessary. Sanji was smoking a cigarette, looking at everything with curiosity. Majiko had walked over to the bow of the ship, close to Luffy, looking at the different plants. She wondered if any of them could be good for making any kind of medicine. Suddenly they heard a growl around them. Now that they were there, the crew was wondering why this place was even called Little Garden. Everything here was massive. Even the leaves of the trees looked bigger than a human. Hearing movements to their right, Luffy saw a tiger looking at them with a hungry expression on his face. Usopp hailed at the dangerous predator, but before Luffy could torch him with thunder, something jumped on the tiger. They could hardly see through the many trees around them. When the tiger came out again, but this time, his body was lying on the grass, with a massive gash across his stomach, making everyone wonder what could have caused something like this to a dangerous animal such as him. Their answers quickly came in the form of a bird. The bird flew from the trees, with his claws holding the entire tiger. At first, it looked like a normal bird, but giving it a second look, everyone noticed the sharp teeth on his beak, not to mention it was quite large for a bird. "He's carrying the tiger," Usopp all but screamed in both amazement and fear. A whistle was heard from Luffy, who was looking at the bird, using his hand on his forehead to block the sun from his eyes and see clearly. "What kind of bird is that?" Sanji wondered out loud. He had never seen one before, not even in the books he had read when he was little. "A flying lizard." Luffy shouted in awe. He wondered what it tasted like, probably like chicken. Suddenly a loud sound echoed throughout the jungle, and many birds suddenly flew away from the sudden noise, even shaking the river they were sailing along with the ship. Usopp almost fell from the crow's nest, if it wasn't for him holding tightly on the railing of the nest. "I hope it wasn't a volcanic eruption. Red rocks might fall from the sky and sink us," Nichiko said with fear seeping into her voice, peering around to see whether an eruption's debris might start pouring down on their heads. "Wait, I think I have read about this kind of island before," Nami said with a finger on her chin. Everyone's attention turned to her as she rushed to the ship's library, soon walking out holding a book in her hand. Soon she found what she was looking for. "I knew it, we are on an ancient island. It's untouched by time, so much that animals that were thought extinct might still exist on this island." Usopp gasped at the information. Fear started to creep in like a wild sea wave. "Ancient island, are you saying there are dinosaurs on this island?" Usopp all but shouted, looking pleadingly at Nami for denying something as frightening as that. Nami simply shook her head. In a way, she would most likely freak out at the thought of being on such a dangerous island. But she had a captain to protect her, not to mention she knew that now she could fight herself, to protect people she considered family. Usopp was about to tell Luffy to change direction probably, but Nami spoke before he could. Don't worry, Usopp, if anything threatens our ship, we are more than prepared for it, Nami said with an encouraging smile. That's right, Luffy shouted before putting his arm around her waist, holding her closer to him. Nami quite liked his hand around her. Before pushing herself against his chest, Luffy immediately felt her breasts against his chest, as she held him close in purpose for him to feel her assets. Sanji was growling loudly, like an animal, biting his cigarette in half in the process. Zoro was unfazed by what his captain was doing, but seeing the pervert like that, with a look of pure despair and sadness, made it more than worth it. Everyone, we are here to get supplies as well. Sanji, I want to try some of that dinosaur meat. That is a priority, Luffy exclaimed, looking at his chef still holding Nami close, much to the delight of Nichiko, who giggled. The navigator hummed to herself, led it to someone like Luffy, stating that having dinosaur meat for dinner was more important than everything else in their situation. Yeah, that wouldn't be a problem, Sanji said tiredly. He might as well let out his frustration by kicking every dinosaur on his way. Luffy, are you sure about this? Didn't you see what happened to that tiger, that bird, or dragon, whatever it was, grabbed him as if he was nothing, Usopp cried out, pointing at the place where the tiger had been. The only thing left was the grass mixed with blood. Nah, I have seen far worse animals back at home. Sometimes Grandpa would purposely lead us to dangerous parts of the forest, just to be in front of the most dangerous animal our island could offer, Luffy explained with a melancholy smile on his face. Remembering his grandpa literally throwing him to the mouth of a sea creature as if he was some snack. Vivi shuddered slightly at the thought of that kind of training, frowning, wondering what kind of grandpa does that to his nephew. Luffy jumped first, followed by Vivi, who knew that staying with the captain was the safest she could get, not to mention she quite liked his company. Turning to look at the rest of his crew. Who wants to come? Luffy grinned broadly as he gazed at his Nakama. I might as well, I can't let you alone with a defenseless princess. Who knows what you will do to Her, Nami teased, making Vivi blush before looking away, knowing what her friend was saying. I'll stay here and protect the ship. Nichiko offered as she sat down lazily in a chair, holding a book in her hand. I'm not going to sit around and wait. Zoro stretched and yawned. He followed Luffy, Nami, and Vivi off the ship with a yawn. I'm going for a stroll. Wait a second, Zoro. The swordsman came to a halt as Sanji called out. We need to attempt to restock our food supplies. Bring whatever tasty you find out in the wild back here. Even better then, Zoro said, putting an unsheathed sword over his shoulder with a grin. I will bring a big animal that you can never kill. What did you say? Sanji shouted before slamming his leg on the ground, creating a small crater. Do you really think you can hunt down an animal bigger than mine? Sanji challenged as he pointed a finger at Zoro, whose smirk grew. Of course, with a grin on his face, Zoro stood there. Then it's a challenge between us, Sanji proclaimed with a fist raised in the air before running in a direction, while Zoro ran in the exact opposite direction. Seeing her captain and sister walking away, Nichiko let out a sigh. It seems to be just the two of us now. Nichiko chuckled as she sat back in her lounge chair. Usopp gulped, knowing they were all alone on a dangerous island. As they walked through the forest, the trees were so numerous in some parts that there were more trees than ground to walk. Carriers suddenly quacked loudly before hiding behind Vivi and Nami. They suddenly heard the ground shaking. Despite the tall trees around them, they could clearly see the tall neck of a dinosaur eating leaves from a nearby tree. Luffy gazes at it with amazement, his eyes suddenly turning to stars, rushing towards it like a kid in a kindergarten. Nami chuckled in amusement, already used to her captain, while Vivi, on the other hand, was horrified seeing what Luffy was doing. Luffy, be careful. Who knows what it will do? She shouted, her eyes white as a plate, seeing Luffy on top of the dinosaur's head, bouncing up and down, as if he was riding the giant creature. Calm down, princess, don't worry about Luffy, he can handle a dinosaur, Nami said, nudging her friend. Vivi relaxed slightly, maybe she was overreacting a little bit, she had already seen how strong these people were, she should have more trust in them. Luffy suddenly jumped very high in the air, when the dinosaur jerked his head up, trying to make him trip, but both Luffy and Nami felt the upcoming attack. Nami suddenly turned her right arm into gold, her eyes turning red in the process, while pushing Vivi behind her with her left hand. Luffy appeared in front of Nami as he carefully looked at their new guest. The giant dinosaur's head was severed from its neck in a single strike in a blaze of steel. Vivi gasped at the sight, her knees suddenly felt weak, almost falling on her knees. Her duck was in no better state. Nami narrowed her eyes at the giant in front of them. Jaja. Today I got an excellent one. As he laid his blade over his shoulder, the giant chuckled. He had a lengthy black beard that hung down to his navel. He was dressed in a combat helmet, tan trousers, and leather boots with a belly warmer. He was dressed in a dark purple cape. The enormous longsword with a stray blade that rested on his shoulder overshadowed the going merry totally. Wow, you're a giant. Luffy shouted, eyeing him up and down, not having the feeling he was dangerous. Nami relaxed, knowing her captain wouldn't be so cheerful in front of a possible enemy. Do you want to join my crew? Vivi face-palmed while Nami shook her head in amusement. Despite hearing him with her ears, Vivi couldn't quite believe she just heard Luffy asking a giant who was larger than going married to join his crew. Jaja. My name is Dory. I'm a giant, I'm the greatest fighter of Elbaf. He burst out laughing before looking at the boy with the straw hat, already knowing he was the one in charge of this little group. How about you join me? Let's have a feast. I haven't had guests for a long time. Now, Dory exclaimed with another burst of laughter. Usopp and Nezuko. At first, this island looked peaceful. Nezuko had been busy reading a book with Usopp standing on guard with a gun, only for a giant to come out of the trees, greeting them with the most terrifying grin they had ever seen. Do you have anything to drink? Rum? Perhaps some booze? Little folks, can you hear me? Usopp and Nezuko were shocked when the big bearded behemoth questioned them. Well, Nezuko, you're the doctor of the crew, how should we proceed? Usopp said softly to Nezuko, his gaze never leaving the giant. Why would a doctor know how to deal with him? Nezuko asked with a grunt, same as Usopp, not looking away. Well, if you want to drink we have barrels ready for you, Nezuko said with the biggest smile she could muster. That's your genius plan, doctor. Usopp interrogated her, his eyes still fixed on the giant. You have a better idea. Nezuko retorted, a glare from the corner of her eye directed towards Usopp. Baba. You're such a witty bunch of people. The chubby giant guffawed. He wore a dark red shirt with white fur ruffs on the top and bottom hem and a large, blonde beard that flared out from his chin. He wore different leather armor components, burnt orange pants with vertical black stripes, and a navy blue cloak, and his legs were covered by burnt orange trousers with vertical black stripes. He had a big smile on his lips and a red horned helmet on his head. Gabber. When the giant bellowed loudly, Usopp and Nezuko almost screamed in fright. They both turned around to see a big tyrannosaurus gnawing at the giant's rump. The giant's eyes were obscured by his helmet as he twisted his head. The monster whirled around in an almost imperceptible movement, and his gigantic axe sliced the Tyrannosaurus's head off in a flash. Both Usopp and Nezuko screamed at how easily he killed that dinosaur. In celebration of his victory, the giant hoisted his axe. Behold, tiny people, I am Elbaf's most powerful fighter. Broggy. Broggy's voice reverberated across the forest like thunder. In his left hand, he held the Tyrannosaur's beheaded head. We've got lots of meat, and you've got rum. Broggy greeted the two of them with a broad smile. Let's eat a feast together. Gabba. Chapter 23. Giants and Luffy's Anger. Chapter 24, Drum Kingdom. Chapter 25, Chopper and the Crazy Lady. Chapter 26, Dr. Chopper and Unicama. Chapter 27, A Night of Passion. And Chapter 28, Portas Dias, are already available for patrons. Luffy and Dory were busy eating to their heart's content, and Nami and Vivi were simply busy watching them. They were in some kind of competition, which both were clearly enjoying. Vivi wondered where that amount of meat was even going. At the end of the day, Luffy was human. Right. In her mind, he shouldn't be able to eat more than the giant, yet, in front of her eyes, she could see Luffy biting a massive chunk of meat, swallowing down immediately, not bothering to chew on it, before grabbing another bone with meat around. The aroma of the meat was quite pleasant, followed with booze, green fruits, and vegetables. Still, it seemed they were too focused on eating as much as possible, especially Luffy. The giggle escaped from Nami. Seeing her captain like this was always amusing, but despite their competition, none of them tried to take food from their plates, something Vivi immensely appreciated. Her companion Karoo was hiding behind her, using her as some kind of shield, afraid that at this mental state, neither the giant nor Luffy would notice that he wasn't food. Dory laughed out loud before swallowing more meat. He had to admit he was quite surprised by the little men. It had been a long time since they had visitors, the last time a ship arrived on their little island. But everywhere they died before either Dory or Broggy could talk with them, all they found was their ship completely deserted. The ship itself was heavily damaged in critical areas essential to sail in the first place. With that thought out of the way, Dory swallowed before following it with some good booze. This booze is amazing, little pirates. It has been some time since I have tasted booze of this quality, he said with another laugh. Looking down at the ladies who weren't exactly hungry and the little duck who paled when his giant eyes made contact with his, hiding more behind the lady with blue hair. I have seen that kind of duck before. They come from Alabasta. What is he doing here? Dory asked, confused, pointing at the duck with his giant finger. It had been a long time since he had seen other animals that didn't live in Little Garden. Oh, well, Vivi is the princess of Alabasta, and Karoo is her companion, the Captain Straw Hat explained, after swallowing more food, his eyes turning to look up at the giant who started coughing when he heard that. Vivi took a step back, wondering if the giant had anything against her, but Nami grabbed her hand, ensuring there was nothing wrong here. The princess wondered how she knew. Stopping his coughing, he wiped off the wine from his lips, before surprisingly bowing his head respectfully towards the princess. It's quite something to meet royalty. The last time I met royalty was back at home, but that was a long time ago. Don't be afraid of me. I won't hurt you, and neither will Broggy, Dory informed her with a grin, easing the worries of the princess, especially the poor duck behind her who almost fell to his knees, the color on his face returning. What are you two doing here? Luffy finally asked. His stomach was full, so now he could get to know his new friend a little better. The giant laughed at the question, amused. Believe it or not, we are not exactly sure. Me and Broggy have been here for a century by now, he announced, earning a gasp from the princess, the duck, and the navigator. They were quite shocked to hear that they had been here for a century. Luffy simply whistled in surprise, his way of showing that he was surprised. Taking back her composure, Vivi straightens up, wanting to ask the million-berry question. Why would you be here for a century? Are you stuck here? Vivi asked, her voice seeping with curiosity, almost convinced that they couldn't leave the island because they lacked a good ship to sail away. The giant shook his head, crumbling her theory. The two of their straw hats were quite curious, except Luffy, who narrowed his eyes slightly, feeling that someone was far away from them. He could feel 4 of them, and 2 of them were familiar. Are they really here to annoy us? Again? Luffy wondered, thinking that perhaps he should force them to come out, or just wait for them to make their move first. Nah, we are not stuck. In Elbaf, where I come from, there's an old custom that if 2 giants have some kind of dispute with each other, neither of them refuses to back down. In that case, we leave it to our god. They fight until the one who's right wins, he said before laughing out loud again. But we have been at this for a century now, he laughed, taking a drink from the barrel with booze. A century? Vivi whispered, completely shocked. She couldn't comprehend what kind of hatred could cause someone to fight someone else for a century. Nami was shocked as well, but for a completely different reason. A century. Don't you think that's a bit too long? Nami asked sarcastically at the end. She didn't know much about giants. Perhaps their lifespan was much longer than theirs. A century is nothing to us, little lady. We giants can live for 3 centuries, Dory answered, his mouth smelling of booze, pulling down the barrel after emptying it, a constant grin on his face. Why? Vivi suddenly asked out loud, looking down at the grass before her eyes looking up at the giant, hoping she could somehow help them with just words. Luffy frowned slightly, knowing what she was probably thinking. Viv, what makes you hate each other so much? Sure is not something to make it worth it. Right? Vivi asked. The level of her voice grew with each word she uttered. Nami walked up to her before placing a comforting hand on her shoulder, knowing for a princess like her, talking things through was a much better version rather than fighting. Well, that was true. Not every problem in life could be solved by simply saying some words. Arlong, for example, wouldn't simply leave them alone if they just talked. Monsters like him understood only pain and violence. Dory blinked at her words as if he didn't hear correctly, his smile still on his face, understanding where the princess was coming from. Hate? I don't hate him, he's my oldest friend. We have been friends for a very long time, he stated before laughing again, much to the shock of the princess. Now things made even less sense to her. She couldn't comprehend what made them fight. She would somehow understand if it was simple hatred, but they were both old friends, according to him. What kind of dispute would make it worth fighting each other for a century? Vivi asked, still wanting to understand their reasons for fighting for so long. Dory lost his smile for the first time since they met him. Nami tensed slightly, wondering if Vivi had offended him or their customs. We don't really know. We have been at this for so long that we had forgotten what the dispute was all about, Dory answered before a bright grin was on his face again. Nami relaxed, while Luffy seemed to be entirely focused elsewhere. Vivi didn't seem to want to give up on her attempt to make them stop through words. She opened her mouth, ready to say something else. Vivi, enough. This is not something you can stop by simply saying some words. They have been at this for a century now. You can't say anything that would make them even consider it, Luffy stated with a firm tone, almost commanding her to not speak of this issue again. Vivi turned to look at Luffy, and was ready to argue when they heard the loud cry of a dinosaur far away. Everyone turned to look at the direction before the cry suddenly stopped. Dory cocked an eyebrow at that. He knew it couldn't be Broggy. He wouldn't get this close unless it were their time to fight, and if he were simply hunting, he would do it on his own territory. That's just Zoro, my crewmate, don't worry about it. He and my ship's chef are in a competition on who can bring the largest prey on the ship, Luffy explained, knowing Sanji was also nearby. Still, unlike Zoro, who was going around in circles without direction, Sanji was actually going somewhere, much to Luffy's interest, knowing where he was going. Dory's eyes twitched slightly, and his face suddenly brightened up before punching the side of his head, before laughing yet again. Now, I remember why Broggy and I have been fighting. When we first arrived here, we both hunt down prey. Long story short, the dispute was who hunted the bigger prey, he revealed with another laughter, holding his stomach with his hands. Vivi was even more shocked now that she knew why they had been fighting for so long. At first, she thought perhaps it was because of some issue that involved their families, but to hear they were at this for so long simply because of who hunted the bigger prey. They're crazy, the princess concluded, earning a giggle from Nami. The navigator didn't know what the dispute had been, but she wasn't exactly surprised. Since she joined Luffy, she had come to understand that certain things made no sense whatsoever. Suddenly the ground started shaking again, and they all saw the volcano erupting again. Dory stood up, grabbed his sword and shield, making his way towards their fighting place. What is happening now? Vivi asked out loud, looking at the giant who kept walking towards the volcano. The erupting of that volcano is the signal of the start of our fight. Every time it erupts, we fight. It doesn't matter if it is twice a day or once a month, or once a year, Dory revealed as he walked towards his destination, each footstep shaking the ground beneath him, making almost every animal run away in fear. From far away, Zoro just looked at the giant with an arched eyebrow before returning to his business. It didn't matter to him what the giant was doing, as long as it didn't involve him or his crew. Nijiko. The duo left to guard the ship could only gasp, seeing the two giants exchanging blow after blow, but the most mesmerized one seemed to be Usopp, whose mouth was hanging open, looking at them with admiration. Both still exchanging blows, but none of them actually landed. It was either their shields or their helmet that blocked the blow, but not once did their weapon injure the other giant. Don't you want to go home? Dory asked as he swung his sword towards his friend. The other dodged the deadly attack, before bringing his axe down, only to be blocked by his shield, both of them grinning at each other as their blood was pumping through their bodies in a way that only happens when they fought. All the more reason to defeat you, Broggy replied with a taunting smirk before attacking again. Their weapons made contact, causing a shock wave to be felt around them, and many trees around started to fall from sudden cuts around them. Usopp and Nijiko gasped. Despite being so far away, they still felt the shock wave, but thankfully they weren't injured. They're both crazy, Nijiko stated in both amazement and fear. She had seen how powerful their captain was, but looking at these giants, wondering how their crew could go on. Grand Line was full of powerful people and creatures like them. For a long time, she had been convinced that Arlong was one of the strongest creatures on the planet. These giants made him look like an ant under her feet. How can we ever become so strong? How can I? But she quickly shook away that thought. They would get stronger, and she would become the strongest female pirate on the sea. This is nothing but amazing. To them, this fight is more important than life itself. Is everything to them, Usopp stated with a bright smile, and not actually showing fear in his eyes, something Nijiko was quite taken aback. She understood that much. After all, they had been in this fight for a century. Fight after fight, blow after blow, not once giving up. In a way, they have their own flags, proudly showing it to the whole world to see. This is what my dream is. This is a fight between men, between warriors. This is what I envision myself to be. The great warrior of the sea, someone who can look death straight in the eye and fight, not back down like a coward, but fight until the end, Usopp announced loudly with his hands raised, tears rolling down his cheek as he passionately said each word with all his heart. Nijiko looked at Usopp, completely mesmerized. For the very first, he didn't look like a coward at the first sign of a fight, but the one who stood proudly, with no fear in his eyes. Luffy. Dory soon returned from the battle, and it seemed to have gone the same way it had gone the last perhaps thousandth time. Dory sat down, breathing heavily, his fingers aching. He was just about to drink when Luffy decided he couldn't wait any longer. Stop, he shouted, causing lightning bolts all around the sky. Nami and Vivi were on their feet, wondering what was happening to make Luffy serious all of a sudden. But the thunder was also an alarm to the rest of the crew, that something wasn't right. Zoro, from far away, dropped the dead beast he was carrying over his shoulder. Hearing the thunder, he knew his captain needed his help. Sanji was busy drinking tea in a house somewhere, a cigarette in his mouth. He inhaled on it just as a transponder snail started ringing. The chef smirked as he grabbed the snail. Hello, there. Luffy. Back at Luffy, Dory was looking at the little pirate captain in confusion, but wary as well. From that thunder alone, he knew Luffy wasn't someone to take lightly. What is it, Straw Hat Captain? If someone else is on this island, I feel 4 of their presences, and that booze is poisoned, Luffy declared with a new cold look that Dory saw for the first time. But what he heard made his blood boil. Rising to his feet, he roared in anger. He dares to do that. I will show them the might of warriors of Elbaf. Dory screamed at the top of his lung, his weapon high in the air, his voice alone causing a small shockwave. Vivi stumbled to her feet, but Nami was quick to support her with an arm around her waist. Did you two have bounties back in the day? Luffy asked with a firm tone, already knowing the reason why someone would target them. Dory simply nodded. Luffy decided to just deal with this problem as soon as possible. Later, Dory and Broggy met again where they had fought for a century, but this time Dory raised his hands. Broggy, my brother, it seems this time we can't fight. Someone on this island tried to poison my booze, so that he could collect our bounties, he explained. The other giant's face went red with anger at the very thought of someone going between their battle. What? He roared in anger. Who dares to interrupt our fight? We will both show them the full might of Elbaf, Broggy roared, earning a nod from his friend. You're right, brother. First whatever he was about to say was interrupted by an approaching man who, in their eyes, desperately needed new clothes, and, most importantly, a new hairstyle. The one he had was horrendous. The man was a black-haired man wearing a blue and white vertical striped shirt, and his hair looked like a ridiculous number 3 with a bit of fire at the top. "Who the hell are you?" Bruggy asked, with a threatening look on his face, aiming his weapon at the intruder, who didn't look fazed by their threat. Instead, he giggled. "Your prison," he shouted with a smirk, ready to throw waves of wax at them, to imprison them both, but before he could even attack, a sudden kick engulfed and lightning hit him in the face, sending him crashing against a large tree. The tree itself fell down from the force. Mr. 3 was lying unconscious, blood leaking out of his mouth and ears, and the bones around his face were broken. Luffy stood as Mr. 3 was knocked unconscious by a single kick. He didn't even need to look up to know that Miss Valentine was falling at his location, but Luffy didn't even move an inch to dodge her attempt to crush him. Miss Valentine grinned in triumph, seeing that the captain of Straw Hats did not attempt to dodge her, thinking she was going to catch him off guard, but before she could reach him, a sudden flash of light blocked her eyes. It was so bright that she closed her eyes, and the warmth caused her skin to scream in pain despite not making contact with it. The sudden flash of light was soon revealed to be Nami. Her body changed. With an aimed kick right at her face, she hit Miss Valentine. His eyes were still closed due to the amount of light right in front of her. Now, a normal kick wouldn't be too damaging, but the moment Nami used her devil fruit, her legs and arms would look like gold, because they turned to gold, which in itself is one of the heaviest metals in the world. A kick like that could easily break the bones of someone unprepared, not to mention her body would spread heat the moment she turned her body into gold. The more her body turned to gold, the more heat her body produced. Miss Valentine hit the earth so hard that it fell like a small meteor. The debris flew everywhere. A small crater formed where she was, not moving anymore. Nami landed right beside Luffy, giving him a quick wink. Suddenly another person tried to attack the pirates from behind, who was none other than Mr. 5, who had a small bullet between his index fingers, aiming at the navigator. He prepared to kill her when a certain swordsman showed up right in front of him. He didn't even have time to register what was happening before Zoro attacked. Two-sword style. The man was thrown into the air with 2 new wounds across his chest before falling back to the ground. "Good job, Zoro," Luffy complimented his teammate, who smiled. Nami wondered what Luffy would say to her, but Luffy instead swooped her in his arms, before giving her a quick kiss on the lips. Zoro just looked the other way, pretending he couldn't see them. The 3 were soon joined by the giants, who saw that the fight was over before it even began. They knew the Straw Hat Boy was good, but this was beyond their expectations. "You're good, kid, but is it just me, or did you use Haki?" Bruggy questioned with a raised eyebrow. It had been a long time since any of them had seen any human use Haki. Everyone else who had arrived before them was never good enough to use Haki. Luffy turned to them before nodding his head, his fist turning black just to show them. Both giants grinned before raising their own fists, and much to the surprise of everyone except Luffy, their fists turned black with Haki. "Impressive," Zoro commented, knowing the secret agents stood no chance against the giants, even if they didn't intervene. Soon the agents were tightened behind trees with rope one by Yusuf. The giants were keeping an eye on them, just in case they woke up. The little girl in appearance gave up after Luffy warned her to come out. She looked young, but Luffy and the giants could tell that something was off with her. They discussed what they should do. The giants suggested that they would send them off somewhere. "Perhaps the time has come for us to leave this place as well," Bruggy suddenly said, much to the surprise of everyone. His friends soon agreed with him. It had been 100 years after all. Shortly someone else approached. "Sanji, where were you?" Nami asked, seeing the chef of their ship walking towards them. The fun was already over. "I found this in their little home," Sanji simply said, carrying an eternal pose that led to Alabasta. "Is an eternal pose. This will lead us directly to Alabasta," Vivi exclaimed, holding the item, as if it was a treasure. The others smiled at her. Relieved that they didn't need to stay on this island that much longer. Sanji and Zoro were carrying the animals they killed inside the ship. While they were doing that, both giants looked at them with new looks before both of their eyes widened, laughing loudly. The Island Eater was later slain by Luffy, who used a giant lightning strike in the shape of a dragon, bringing his hand down. The strike hit the Sea King, causing a massive hole in the center of his body. Vivi's eyes were white as plates. "Is he even human?" she exclaimed, not believing her own eyes. She knew Luffy was strong, but this was beyond anything she had ever expected. The massive attack caught even the giants off guard. When Luffy told them he could deal with the Sea King, they thought he was only joking, but it seemed the pirate had the power to back it up. "Set sail." As the sails of the Going Merry were dropped and caught the wind, Luffy pointed straight forward. Little Garden was left behind as the ship sailed away. As he turned to wave farewell to the 2 giants, Luffy brightened up. "Dory. Bruggy. It was fantastic meeting you." To the 2 waving giants, Luffy screamed back. "Take the fresh Sea King as a farewell gift." Luffy had overheard the 2 giants discussing Sea King meat, knowing how much they missed the flavor. He was well aware of their desire to taste Sea King meat once again. "Jaja. Bruggy, what intriguing individuals have been born in the 100 years we've been imprisoned here." Dory chuckled as he looked at the fresh Sea King meat. "Jai baba baba baba. Yes, Dory, there are some extremely intriguing things that we've missed. Broggy and his pal both burst out laughing. Going merry. It was an interesting trip, Luffy said. Everyone except Nichiko was eating dinner from Zoro's prey. Almost everyone nodded in agreement, except Vivi, who didn't look like she wanted to repeat that adventure. Shush, I hope Alabasta is as interesting as Little Garden, Vivi, Luffy said, shoving more meat into his mouth. Vivi giggled at him. Well, we don't really have giants and sea kings, but we do have great food, Vivi answered with a smile, knowing what Luffy liked the most to hear. Luffy's eyes suddenly turned to stars, shining more than a fire hearing about the food. Now he couldn't wait until they arrived in Alabasta. To Alabasta, we go, he shouted with meat in his mouth, making everyone except Nami laugh, who was looking at the door that led inside the room. Vivi, why isn't Nichiko coming? Nami suddenly asked, turning towards the princess. She and Nichiko were the last to be in the women's quarters after Nami left to join the others. Vivi remembered that Nichiko said she could go on ahead, she needed to check something. I don't know, she was supposed only to check something, Vivi answered, not thinking something bad was happening. Nichiko. Rolling her shirt up, she looked anxiously at the big red mark, her skin swelling. She could already feel that something was wrong, her breathing heavy, her throat drier than the deserts of Alabasta, and her eyes were red and burning. There's nothing to worry about. Chapter 24. Drum Kingdom Chapter 25, Chopper and the Crazy Lady, Chapter 26, Dr. Chopper, and Unakama, Chapter 27, A Night of Passion, Chapter 28, Porta's the Ace, and Chapter 29, Ace, Whitebeard and Kaido, are already available for patrons. Going merry. How is she? Luffy asked, concerned. Standing close to Nichiko was Nami, who was waiting to see her temperature. She was worried sick, but kept a brave face in front of her crew and sister. This reminded Nami of her childhood in a way. Back then, it was Nichiko, the one who always put on a brave face, and saved her from trouble. Vivi was leaning against the wall, holding a newspaper in her hands, looking at it worriedly. It took all her willpower, not to tear it apart. Her eyes almost shed tears as her mind read the title of the newspaper over and over again. Usopp was outside with Zoro making sure nothing was in front of them. Nami had checked their direction just a moment ago, to ensure they weren't going to sink the ship when she wasn't looking. Usopp was using binoculars, while Zoro was cleaning his swords. They weren't exactly dirty with blood. He just wanted to force himself to do something in this situation. He hated that he couldn't help in this situation. All he could do was watch. Sanji was in the kitchen. Before going there, he said he would prepare something to help Nichiko. Nami told him to make soup with all kinds of vegetables. The chef had simply nodded at her, giving Nichiko a quick glance, before leaving the room. Luffy kept a strong face, not showing any weakness. He would check on his Nakama every time he could, but that's all he could for now. The captain clenched his teeth in anger. He was the captain, and yet he could do nothing but watch. He was no doctor. He didn't know anything when it came to sickness or wounds. Leaving out a tired sigh, he looked at Nami, undoubtedly worried even more than him. The captain was about to ask how Nichiko was doing, when the navigator pulled out the thermometer. Looking at the temperature, Nami gasped, her heart beating in her throat like a hammer. She knew her sister's temperature was high, but this was beyond what she had thought. 104 temperature, Nami exclaimed, frowning. Vivi gasped at what she heard, her nails digging into the newspaper. Luffy, on the other hand, walked over to his Nakama, kneeling in front of her bed, putting his hand on her sweating forehead. He started accumulating cold water on his palm, making sure to cool her head. Well, it wouldn't do much, it was better than nothing. Nami allowed herself to smile, seeing her captain so caring towards her sister. She always knew her captain had a big heart, but this was beyond what she had thought, and the navigator knew her captain wasn't faking it. She could see in his eyes that he was truthfully worried for her. Pulling his hand away, Luffy was about to check on Sanji, seeing just how much longer it would take to prepare his soup, when a cough was heard from Nichiko. Nichiko, how are you feeling? Nami asked pleadingly, holding her hand with hers. The blue-haired barely opened half of her eyes, her vision all blurry. The first thing she noticed was orange hair. Slowly, her vision got better, and she only then saw that it was Nami. How are you feeling? Luffy asked, kneeling in front of her. Nichiko glanced at him before focusing on her sister again. She tried to remember what happened, but couldn't. Her head felt like the whole ship was on top of her. Her throat felt dry, her skin was hurting, her eyes felt heavy, almost as if they would fall off at any moment. Her lips felt drier than a desert. Water. Luffy was quick to offer a glass full of water. Grabbing the glass, he put it close to her lips, before slowly allowing her to drink. Despite feeling fresh, every drop of water felt like a knife piercing her skin inside her throat, but she ignored all that. Soon Luffy moved the glass away before again wetting her forehead and her face. Nichiko felt better already before her eyes found her sister's eyes again. What happened? Nami stood up. Nichiko still hadn't joined them to eat dinner. Luffy stopped eating as he had noticed something was off. The navigator excused herself as she left the restroom, reaching the women's quarters. She knocked on the door, waiting for an answer, not hearing anything. Nichiko, are you there? Nami asked warmly, again not hearing anything. Fear started to creep in. Opening the door, she soon found Nijiko lying on the ground. Nijiko, Nami screamed before rushing over to her sister. 2 days later, Nami was taking care of Nijiko. Luffy was leaning against the wall, and they had already decided to find a doctor as soon as possible. Nami had thought that Vivi might have an objection, knowing it would take longer for them to reach Alabasta now. But the princess had simply said that Nijiko needed their help. Luffy heard the voice of Vivi approaching them, and he could tell she was in distress. The door opened, revealing a pale-looking Vivi clutching a newspaper in her right hand. What is it? Nami asked, confused. Her eyes looked at the newspaper, wondering if there was any news from Alabasta. Vivi walked inside before spreading the newspaper on a desk in the middle right of the room. Luffy walked up to her, reading the title. Betrayal. Over 300,000 soldiers have betrayed the king to join the revolution. The situation on Alabasta escalated. Luffy's eyes widened slightly at the sheer number of soldiers that had decided to join the revolution. He knew many soldiers had already died when they decided to change sides, and many more would die when they brought the war to the king. This was one of the worst possible news for Vivi. Sobbing, Luffy looked at the princess who was crying, her tears dripping down on the newspaper title, holding her mouth with her right hand. Vivi, Luffy said softly, putting an arm around her shoulder as she buried her head in his chest. I'm really sorry, Luffy apologized. He had no reason to, but he felt the need to say it. The princess shook her head against his chest, her cries muffled by his shirt. No, it is not your fault, that bastard crocodile. Vivi glared furiously at the newspaper. How much she wished someone like that warlord would just die. People like him only brought more pain and suffering to achieve their goals, not caring how far they needed to go. Luffy glanced at Vivi before his eyes moved to Nijiko. Their sudden course change would delay Vivi's arrival in Alabasta. With that in mind, if you want to change direction, no, Vivi quickly interjected him. With fire in her eyes, all the tears suddenly disappeared. The pain in her face he saw a moment ago now replaced with the look of a princess warrior. We are still going to Drum Island. We need to heal Nijiko first, Vivi spoke, smiling at her captain before turning at Nami, who gave her a grateful look before turning to look at her sister. We are sailing towards Drum Island. There, we will find a doctor to help you. Nami recapped everything that had happened since she got sick. Nijiko instinctively looked at Vivi, who smiled at her. Nijiko felt guilt building up in her. If only she had been more careful, they wouldn't be in this situation. I'm really sorry everyone. If only I Haven. Her words were shut down by Vivi shaking her head in denial. Don't worry, Nijiko, you my friend in a coma. If you get sick, we will go through hell and back to heal you. Alabasta can wait, Princess Vivi stated with a sincere tone. Everyone smiled at her, appreciating her gesture. The door opened, revealing Sanji holding 2 plates with one arm, walking towards Nijiko. Good to see you awake, Sanji stated with hard eyes, putting the plates close to Nijiko. Nami grabbed a spoon, filling it with soup before helping her. Nijiko felt embarrassed by everything. She really hoped she could get better as soon as possible. Luffy decided to walk outside for a moment, thinking the fresh air would do him good. Opening the door, he glanced back at his nakama. I hope you get better soon, Nijiko, Luffy said towards the girl who, despite her temperature, blushed, something only Nami noticed. Cold, it's very cold, Yusa complained before sneezing loudly. He was wearing a heavy coat to cover himself in hopes of getting warm, but it seemed not even that was enough to warm him. Zoro was just looking in the front. Unlike Usopp, he wasn't shivering. The gunman didn't know if Zoro really didn't feel the cold somehow, or he was just pretending that he wasn't cold. Whatever it was better than his situation. Can we just arrive a bit faster? Usopp asked no one in particular, seeing only endless sea on the horizon. Zoro just shrugged his shoulder with a groan. Sighing, Usopp used the binoculars again to see. As he looked around, his eyes suddenly noticed something strange on the ocean. Looking closely, his eyes widened behind the binoculars, seeing what could be described as a man standing on the surface of the water. Zoro, take a look at this, Usopp said, handing him the binoculars. The swordsman just arched an eyebrow, before looking in the direction where Usopp was pointing. It took only a second to see the same man. The hell? Zoro exclaimed. He has seen many strange things since he joined Luffy, but this was new. At first, he wondered if this was some weird devil fruit, but he quickly remembered the sea hates devil fruit users. Are we both dreaming, perhaps? Usopp asked, looking at Zoro before turning his attention to the man standing on water as if it was solid ground. The ship was sailing closer to the man. Don't know. I'm definitely not drunk. I haven't touched beer since Nijiko got sick, Zoro said before hearing a door opening from behind them. Luffy walked towards them, standing beside Zoro and Usopp, who glanced at their captain before moving their attention back to the man. What's going on here? Luffy asked, immediately noticing the man. The ship was much closer now, and everyone could see him without needing binoculars. He can stand on water. Is this a devil fruit? Usopp spoke first, still trying to wrap his head around the idea of a man being able to stand on water, but what Luffy said next cleared everything. He's not standing on water. I can detect multiple voices below the surface. It must be some kind of underwater ship or submarine. Stand on your guard and wait for my order, Luffy stated with a firm tone, his eyes narrowed at what could be below the strange man. Zoro simply nodded his head, his hands on the hilt of his swords. Despite feeling nervous, Yusuf swallowed and gathered whatever courage he had, gripping his gun, ready to fire. He didn't want to be a coward. Soon the ship stopped in front of the man who was clearly shivering due to the cold temperature. The individual in question was dressed in a green-blue checkered jester outfit with purple lining at the ends of the sleeves. His slacks were a dark green color. He was also wearing a light brown bow and an arrow quiver, as well as a white winter cloak with purple lining tied across his chest. He looked to have a continuously melancholy expression on his face, which was rendered almost funny by his wavy lips. Quite a cold day, wouldn't you say so, the man said, rubbing his hands against each other, trying to warm them. The only answer he got from the pirate crew was a simple shrug from the swordsman. Not really, the cold never bothered me, Luffy said, knowing this cold temperature was nothing to him. His devil fruit made him immune to cold and warm temperatures, but that didn't mean he couldn't get frozen or burned. The man looked genuinely surprised to hear the young man state the cold temperature didn't bother him. Quite a nice ship you got there. How many people are in your little group? The man asked with interest, before licking his lips, which sent red flags. Why does it matter to you? Now I would appreciate it if you and your little group below the sea moved out of the way, Luffy ordered firmly, the man's eyes whitened before shouting. Let's do this. Suddenly the water moved harshly around going merry, causing the ship to rock back and forth. Inside the ship, Nami lost her patience, wondering what was going to make this ship move like this. Barely making it to the door, Vivi had already fallen on the floor due to losing her balance and waiting until the ship stopped moving around. Her companion was trying to keep Mijiko on the bed, not wanting her to fall off the bed in this condition. The ship that caused the water to erupt was plainly a ship with a gourd-like look and a massive mass protruding from the top. The strange ship's metal shell parted to expose a circular, wooden body with various clanking and clanging noises. Hundreds of soldiers, all dressed in the same uniform, peered down at them from the other ship. Sanji slammed the kitchen door open, glaring at everyone. What is going on here? He shouted before noticing the many guns pointed at them. Sanji just glanced at them knowing they were nothing but small fish. Even Zeph would easily kick them to oblivion. What the heck is going on here? Who are you, people? When the sounds of rifles cocking reached Nami's ears, her enraged rant came to an end. Her eyes went wild at them. Her sister was in critical condition, and they didn't have time to waste with little fish like them. Go away, or I will burn you all to crisp, Nami promised with a tone that clearly indicated that she wasn't joking around. The burst of loud laughter was heard by who everyone knew immediately was apparently the captain of these clowns. His hair was dark violet, and he had a tin-plate cylinder-shaped jaw. He was clad in tin-plate armor and a hooded cloak fashioned of what seemed to be a hairy hippo. The chubby guy wore thick brown gloves as well. His lower half was covered by a pair of purple and orange woolen shorts, with a brown belt around his waist and heavy short boots on his feet. He was also chewing a hefty chunk of flesh off a blade, that he then ate after biting it in half. It hurts just by looking at it, Yusuf screamed in cringe, seeing the other man eating a blade before he ate the whole knife, chewing it as if it was delicious and not a piece of metal. Everyone quickly realized that it was some devil fruit power. But no one except Zoro, Sanji, and Nami noticed the dark clouds accumulating above the ship before several thunder strikes hit the ocean around them. The Captain Wapple of the pirate ship simply ignored the thunderstorm as he gazed at the crew in front of him. They didn't look much, perhaps just rookies. This must be his lucky day. Only 5, there must be more, he said, eyeing the ship. He was still a bit hungry. Perhaps the ship and the male members of the pirate crew would do for now. It's just 8 of us. Now would you kindly leave us alone? We're in a hurry here, Luffy spoke as lighting danced around his fingertips, his eyes covered by his straw hat. Zoro was patiently waiting for the captain's order, ready to cut them down like flies. Sanji simply put a cigarette in his mouth, inhaling it, ready to kick everyone's ass. Nami was losing her patience. Why wasn't Luffy just giving the order to kill these idiots? Her sister was sick. Her fingertips slowly started imitating red fire, her skin slowly turning to gold. The captain of the other pirate ship ignored the straw hat boy, his finger on his teeth, cleaning them. Do you have a log post towards Drum Island? He asked, looking at each one. He didn't even bother to wait for an answer, before giving an order. My men take everything valuable from this ship, including that woman, and if you find any like her, keep them alive, he shouted, grinning at Nami, who didn't look frightened by what he said, which started to piss him off. Sighing, Luffy cracked his knuckles. Before we kill all of you, I have one question. Do you have any doctors on your ship? Luffy asked, eyeing each member. Everyone he saw looked nothing like a doctor, especially the captain, who looked like a pig wearing armor. Wapple didn't expect that question. He had expected and wanted for them to start begging for their pointless lives, not that he would actually spare them. But knowing he had a chance to show how mighty he was compared to them. Of course we have. I have the best doctors from the Drum Kingdom, the best of the best. They're inside the ship, Wupple boasted with a burst of laughter, not noticing the deadpan look of every straw hat except Luffy, who cleared his throat, raising his hand, which was engulfed in lightning. Very well. Guys, kill everyone except the doctors, Luffy ordered. Zoro smirked before unsheathing his swords. 20 men that had surrounded him didn't even have time to react before Zoro cut them down. Sanji wasn't far behind as he kicked 17 of them, crushing their skulls with his feet. Nami smirked before both of her arms turned to gold. 14 men who had surrounded her pulled the triggers of their guns, but she had already jumped above them, glaring at them, making all of them freeze in fear. Hellfire, Nami shouted, moving her wings, sending a wave of fire at them, who tried to run before being engulfed by the flames. The temperature of the flames turned all of them to ash in seconds. Issa quickly aimed precisely at their heads, killing 9 of them almost immediately. Wupple was horrified, seeing his men fall like insects. How dare you fight back, he shouted angrily. His eye noticed one of them had his back turned to him. He smirked before trying to kill the one with the long nose, but he didn't even take a single step before Luffy lowered his hand engulfed in lightning, resulting in a lightning bolt hitting Wupple right in the chest. King Wupple. Captain. The ones still alive screamed in horror, seeing their king with a smoking hole on his chest. The armor around his chest, near the hole, had started melting like ice. His cloth had caught ablaze, smoke coming out from his chest and mouth. Falling underwater, dead. Luffy didn't stop as he jumped at the enemy ship, surrounded by at least 50 men, his eyes analyzing them. Using his observation haki, Luffy noticed at least 20 people below the deck, and he could tell they were very weak to be fighters of the ship. Luffy soon concluded they must be the doctors the idiot captain mentioned. Kill him. Take revenge for our king. No mercy. They left out war cries as 50 men ran towards Luffy, knowing they could overrun him with numbers. Simply raising his hand, he created a lightning field around him, making everyone that was 10 meters close get electrocuted with 100k voltage. More than 30 men fell on the wooden floor dead, their eyes white as smoke was coming out of their mouths. Please show us mercy, the rest begged, falling on their knees in front of Luffy. His face didn't change in the slightest. He didn't care that they were begging for mercy. They all were in a big hurry to threaten his ship in Nakama. Where are the doctors? Luffy demanded with a dark look, his face making them pale even more. To all of them, Luffy was no ordinary pirate, but the devil himself, who was here to make sure they paid for their sins. Below the deck, we have 20 doctors, the best of the best, one answered immediately, his voice shaky, hoping that the pirate captain would spare them, still on his knees, and so were everyone else. Luffy narrowed his eyes at them before deciding just to get the doctors. Seeing the door that possible led below the deck, Luffy walked forward, past the pirates who were still on their knees, seeing the pirate captain with his back turned on them. 7 of them rose to their feet immediately with a war cry, with knives on their hands. Luffy didn't move as the knives penetrated his skin. The pirates smiled in satisfaction. At least they got their revenge for what happened to their king. But their smirks turned to looks of horror, as they noticed the body where their knives had struck had turned to dark clouds. Before they could even process the danger they were in, Luffy murmured under his breath. Idiots with that, the electricity spread everywhere around him, killing every last pirate left. Seeing all of them fall one by one didn't give Luffy satisfaction, but this was a pirate's life. The moment he decided to put the flag on his ship, he had signed up for everything that a pirate's life would give him. Adventure, danger, risk of death, risk of being rotten in prison somewhere, risk of betrayal, everything. Luffy, I understand you want to be a pirate, but always remember the life of the pirate is not all laughter and games. The time will come when you have to make hard decisions as a captain. I hope you are ready when that day comes. Shank's words ringed in his ears like bells, deciding to ignore that thought for now. Luffy went to the room where the doctors were supposed to be, kicking the door open. Inside were 20 men wearing different outfits than the rest of their crew. Wearing transparent gloves. Who are you? Where's King Wupple? What did you do to the rest of the crew? Luffy ignored them as he took a step forward, making all of them take a step back. Some stumble and fall to the floor. Your king is dead, and so is the rest of your crew. You are doctors, right? Luffy asked with an icy tone. The room itself was getting colder with his presence. The doctors' eyes widened at what they heard. Some were relieved to hear that, and some weren't sure how to feel now that their king was dead. One of them, despite being scared, took a step forward. Yes, sir, we are all doctors. We are from the Drum Kingdom, the doctor informed him, knowing there must be a reason the pirate hadn't killed them yet. Good, I have a sick Nakama. Your job is to cure her. Refuse, and I will sink your ship with you on it, Luffy promised, his tone alone showing he wasn't making an empty threat. The doctors gulped at the ultimatum before nodding, ready to help the pirate captain. Back at Going Merry, the crew had already dealt with all of them. Nami was waiting for Luffy to come out of the enemy ship. Zoro was cleaning his swords, but they could tell he was keeping an eye on the enemy ship. Usopp was reloading his guns, making sure to be ready if he needed to fight again. The gunman couldn't help but feel pride for himself. In his eyes, he was getting stronger and braver. He could imagine it right now. The face Kaya would make when he would tell her about all the adventures he had with his pirate crew. His thoughts stopped when Luffy came out of the ship followed by 20 men. One glance was enough to tell that all of them were doctors. Follow me, the others. We need to keep sailing towards Drum Island. Luffy ordered his crew. The bodies left were soon thrown overboard. Yusuf had started cleaning the blood. Sanji was in the kitchen preparing food for the newcomers, knowing they might be hungry later. Luffy, are you okay? Vivi asked, seeing her friend walk inside the room. The Straw Hat gave her a reassuring smile before stepping inside, followed by 20 people. Vivi was confused, but knowing Luffy, she knew there must be a reason why these people were here. There she is, Nami simply said towards Nichiko, who was sleeping. The doctors were quick to check on her. Nami was anxious. She hoped they would be able to help her. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Knowing it was Luffy, she leaned back, resting her head on his shoulder. Soon the doctors were finished, and the one who looked to be in charge turned to look at the captain. We can't tell what's her sickness. Her symptoms are very similar to a common cold, but we can't tell what exactly she has. The doctor spoke, his face getting paler as he spoke. The rest weren't better, starting to shake when they saw the captain's face turn cold like ice. We can give her something to help her, but it won't cure her, only give her more time, one was quick to add, fearing the captain would kill them where they stood. Nami grabbed Luffy's hand tightly, hoping to ease his anger. Even Princess Vivi could tell Luffy was angry. The leader soon thought of something to save them from the captain's wrath. You said in the deck you were sailing towards Drum Island. If you go there fast enough, you can save her. There's a doctor there who can help her, Kuriha. She's the best doctor in the Drum Kingdom. If anyone can save your Nakama is her, he stated, hoping what he said would help them. Luffy somehow sighed in relief. There was still hope to help Nichiko. Very well, take care of her. We will soon reach Drum Island, Luffy ordered. The doctors sighed in relief, the color of their faces finally coming back. Nami relaxed, looking at her sister, hoping she would survive. Later, Vivi was standing on the bow of the ship, near the figurehead of Going Merry, thinking of her home. She was worried, knowing this change, of course, would delay her arrival in Alabasta. But she didn't regret it. Nichiko needed help, and she would be a horrible person to deny her help. They had already saved her countless times. If it weren't for them, she would already be dead by now. Her companion stood close to her, smiling. She pets his head, looking at the future with hope. We will soon return home, and Crocodile won't be a problem anymore. That's right, a voice spoke behind her. Turning around, the princess saw the captain walking towards her before putting a hand on her shoulder, hoping to ease her worries. Don't worry, princess. As soon as Nichiko is cured, we will sail to Alabasta. I will personally deal with Crocodile and free your country, Luffy promised. Vivi couldn't help but blush at his words. Looking away, hoping he wouldn't notice, she put her hand over his. Thank you, Luffy. Fun question. Are you hyped for movie Red? Also, if you are, comment it below, and what if you want to see on this channel, also comment that below and make sure to like and subscribe. It helps boost my YouTube channel. With that out of the way, let's start up again. LOL Chapter 25. Chopper and the Crazy Lady. Hundreds of fir trees flanked the river. The Straw Hats were sailing up to reach the island's heart. The mountains were colossal in size. They were all cylindrical, with a flat plateau on top. In certain spots, the huge peaks burst through the clouds, and each mountain had to be at least a couple of kilometers tall. The Drum Rockies were a massive and magnificent sight to see. Are we going the right way? Luffy asked the head doctor as he looked forward. He could feel several new voices as the ship sailed forward. He knew there was a possibility that they might need to fight, but all the Straw Hat captain could think now was getting Nichiko to a doctor. Yes, Captain sir, we should arrive very soon, the head doctor replied, standing close to the captain, who had a serious look. Nami was looking forward with concern, while Zoro was cleaning his swords. Do you think these people will accept pirates? Zoro suddenly asked. The moment he said those words, several guns were aimed at them. Pirates, turn your ship around. You're not welcome in this place. The crew on deck heard a booming voice calling out to them. Armed, angry-looking guys gazed at them from the banks around the lake. And that answers it, Zoro murmured under his breath. We are going nowhere, Nami spoke firmly as she gazed at the people who were aiming guns at them. She wondered if she should just fight, but knew she shouldn't do it out of nowhere without Luffy's permission. But she hoped they wouldn't dare to touch Nichiko. We need a doctor for my sister, Nami quickly added, hoping it would make them believe that they weren't here to harm them. But it seemed the mention of Dr. Kuriha only made them warier. There are no doctors available to help you. Knowing things could escalate quickly, Luffy walked forward, standing in front of his crew. We are not here to hurt anyone. We only need Dr. Kuriha. We need her help. One of our crewmates is very sick. Luffy spoke firmly towards the people with guns, knowing this would draw all their attention towards him. How did you find out about the witch? When asked, more like screaming as almost all of the weapons were pointed toward Luffy. They informed me. Luffy pointed to the doctors who were trying to hide. They suggested Dr. Kuriha may be able to help me with my Nakama. Please bring her here. I'll pay her. That's CSO 20. Exclaims a guy who screamed angrily. They're with Wapple. With that said, every man suddenly started aiming their guns at each one of the straw hats, their hands shaking slightly, but they needed to protect their home from pirates like them. Their fingers were dangerously close to the trigger of their respective weapons. Seeing the situation escalating quickly, Zoro prepared to use his swords to protect his crew and the captain from the upcoming bullets. Sanji prepared to fight using his legs to break their weapons and stop the bullets. Due to her observation haki, Nami could see the attack coming. Her body was quickly engulfed in red fire, especially her arms, that turned to gold. If they dared to harm her sister or her crew, she would make them pay. Yusa prepared his rifle to shot back, but it seemed that was completely unnecessary due to Luffy, causing an enormous lightning bolt to echo around them like a war cry, causing every man that had aimed their guns at the pirate crew to freeze in fear, their ears booming like bells in their heads, warning them. Every part of their body telling them not to attack the pirate crew, especially the captain. Luffy's eyes had gone from warm to ice cold, his straw hat covering his eyes, making him more menacing. We are here only to cure our crewmate. If you want to throw your lives away, then step forward. Luffy finished with a voice that sounded so threatening that it made even his own crew feel a chill on their bodies. The others were shaking like leaves. One soon stopped shaking before raising his hand in surrender. Very well, he said. The enormous guy gulped hard. With slick black hair and a goatee, he was a tall and intimidating guy. He was dressed in a long, white fur-lined green tunic with armor plates. He donned heavy boots in a green and white fur-lined cap with ear flaps to protect himself from the island's extreme cold. He was armed with an extra-large shovel, which he carried in a scabbard on his back. Come with me to the village, and I'll show you the way. Thank you, Luffy quickly said before turning to his crew. Come on, we need to get her to Dr. Kariha as soon as possible, Luffy ordered. The crew didn't need to be told twice. As the doctors started moving her, she was covered with several blankets to keep her warm from the cold. Nami was walking close to her, keeping an eye on her, despite knowing she could do absolutely nothing to help her sister. The men with guns stepped away, some with fear that whatever sickness she had could get to them, while some hoped for her to get better soon. The snow was thick, very thick, making it hard to walk. Everyone could feel the cold. Luffy just brushed it off. For some reason, it didn't bother him as much as he thought. He didn't know why and didn't care to know. The guy helping them soon introduced himself as Dalton. Who exactly was this Swapple? Never thought a leader of a country would turn into a pirate. Luffy asked curiously, remembering the stupid people who attacked them. This place was always known for the good doctors. People came from far away to get healed, and the king was a good man. It was an honor to serve him, the man explained with a puff of his chest. But then his face changed to a grim one, remembering when everything changed for the worse. When Wapple became king, it didn't take long for everyone to see what kind of king he was. He requested that all 20 of the country's greatest doctors join him permanently, and any who refused were executed on the spot. All of this was done in order for him to have a grip on the nation, and force everyone to rely on him and his whims for medical care. No one took what the man said well, but Vivi was literally boiling. She was a princess. When her father would eventually step down, she would make sure to become the best ruler Alabasta ever had. This country was attacked by 5 pirates, who almost destroyed this place. They had incredible strength. We never stood a chance. One of them especially was different from the others. His whole body was covered in darkness, and his eyes were terrifying. One moment he was a normal person, laughing and making jokes. The next he was the devil himself. The man finished with a shudder. The straw hats except Luffy suddenly felt a shiver through their entire bodies. So he ran away like a coward, Nami said with anger. She was no ruler, but even she understood the importance of ruling and sacrificing for the greater good of your people, and not running away like a coward with your tails between your legs. That coward never even attempted to fight. He just raced to the water with his tail between his legs. He abandoned us all to preserve his own skin. With a gloomy expression on his face, Dalton crushed out his words. The bastard to princess could no longer keep herself in control anymore. She knew from her father that there were people who were terrible kings, bad rulers who cared little about their own people, only if they could sit their ass on the throne. All they cared was to play their little game of thrones, who would rule and who would die, but thinking that someone like Wapple would simply abandon his country like this made her blood boil. Hey, Vivi, the bastard is gone, Nami reminded her, trying to ease her anger. The princess was usually cheerful and always positively looked at things, but the words Dalton was saying made her lose it. You meet him, right? Dalton asked as he pointed at the doctors walking behind them, carrying Nichiko, who was breathing heavily. Dalton didn't really need an answer. The doctors Wapple took with him were here, but he wondered what happened to the bastard. Sanji left out a mocking chuckle at the thought of the man who called himself king. He tried to take our ship, and everything we had, so we did what any normal pirate would do in that situation. We killed his crew and him, except the doctors, Luffy said casually, as if it was no big deal. To the Straw Hats this was just another Tuesday. Dalton gasped at what the captain pirate just said before his eyes went to the doctors, waiting for them to confirm it. They simply nodded their heads. No point in lying, and it was not as if any of them had any kind of empathy towards the dead king. Dalton wondered how they could have done it. Whipple had strong people with him, but the giant thunderbolt from the captain back when he threatened them was still a little too fresh in his mind, so he didn't ask how they did it. He decided to ask only one question. How did Whipple die? Dalton asked with no remorse or any kind of sign to show that he felt bad for what happened, more surprised than anything else. I launched a lightning bolt at him, making a big hole on his chest, Luffy simply said. He would never show mercy against people who dared to harm his crew or threaten them, no exceptions. Then you have our heartfelt gratitude. Dalton spoke with a bow of his head towards Luffy. When the pirates approached their kingdom, they thought they were doomed, but instead, they got the best news they could have ever gotten. Get the word out to everyone on the island. Whipple is no longer alive, and we are free. The crew soon reached the town of Bighorn, which was closer to the massive Drum Rockies. As they made their way, they encountered hiking bears. Usopp was the first to spot them, hoping they weren't dangerous, but Dalton quickly eased his fear, saying they were harmless if you bowed to them. And much to the crew's surprise, the bear gave them a nod after they bowed. Arriving at the town, the crew soon saw the way Dalton was looked with respect by the citizens, especially the way everyone greeted him, some even bowing respectfully to him. Vivi couldn't help but grin as they strolled through town, seeing how well Dalton was valued. She wondered if Dalton could rule the kingdom now that Whipple was dead. The island would need a new leader, and who better than someone everyone respected. Arriving at Dalton's house, the crew quickly walked inside, followed by at least 5 doctors. The others decided to stay outside, since Dalton's house was already crowded with just a pirate crew, not counting the 5 doctors. Dalton quickly started a fire with Luffy's help, who used his devil fruit to suck the water from the wood, so it could burn faster and easier. It was one of the abilities of the storm fruit, but Luffy could do it only to small things, not big things like trees or living beings. I'm sorry about the fire. I wasn't really expecting visitors, Dalton apologized, removing his coat and hanging it on a chair. Don't worry about it, Nami dismissed him with a wave of her hand, looking worriedly at her sister. Check on her, Dalton quickly added, pointing towards the blue-haired girl who was breathing heavily. The navigator quickly nodded, before checking her temperature with a thermometer. 155. This is bad. She gasped, her eyes widening in fear for her sister. Her face quickly returned to normal. There was no need to panic. Don't panic, she told herself repeatedly. The doctor would soon take care of her. She's my sister. She will get through this, as if nothing ever happened, Nami said, stroking her blue hair, just like how their mother used to do when they were little. Her face was all red, her breathing was heavy, feeling her throat burning like fire, and her whole body felt weak. What is she suffering from? Can't you heal her? Dalton asked, looking at the 5 doctors who were inside. The one in the front shook his head with a grim look on his face. We don't know what she has. We tried everything, but nothing works. The only hope left for her is Dr. Kariha, the main doctor spoke. Then you are in the right place. Dr. Kariha can heal any sickness. Your friend will be better in no time, Dalton said with an uplifting tone, hoping it would help. What are we waiting for then? Tell me where she is. I will get her to Dr. Kariha in no time, Luffy said firmly towards Dalton. His face became grim at what the pirate asked, knowing it wouldn't be so simple. It's up there. Dalton groaned and pointed out the window to the Drum Rocky's biggest peak. Did you see the castle? He asked them. Whipple had lived there, before fleeing the nation, and his father had lived there before him. Dr. Kariha took up residence when Whipple departed. We'll need her to come down then. This is an emergency, so call her. Sanji spoke out as he gazed up at the mountain before returning his gaze to Dalton. It's not as easy as that. With a shake of his head, Dalton expressed his dissatisfaction with the situation. I'm worried we won't be able to reach her. Why the hell not? Luffy asked, but more like shouting. He was slowly losing his patience. She comes down only once in a while to check for patients. If anyone is sick and needs her help, whoever she heals is forced to pay her. That's why everyone calls her witch, Dalton explained with a grave tone. Geez, no wonder everyone calls her witch, Yusa commented. Never heard of this kind of doctor before. Yes, and not mentioning that she's 139 years old, Dalton added, causing the whole pirate crew to gasp in shock. What the hell do people eat here to make them live this long? Sanji asked, perplexed. He had heard of people living a long life, almost reaching 100 years old, but this doctor was on steroids to live that long. Meanwhile, Luffy wondered how his grandpa would react to meeting someone even older than him. He usually always boasted to them that he was older, and because of that, they needed to respect him for whatever reason. Is there any way to get to her? Luffy asked, his voice sounding a bit desperate. If the worst came to worse, he would climb the mountain with his bare hands if he had to. I don't know, but I've heard tales. According to what I've heard, she'll ride a sled down the mountain on moonlight evenings. People claim to have seen it, and they always report that a bizarre beast accompanies her. I'm not going to let her suffer another day. We'll have to bring the Chico to the doctor, if we can't get the doctor to come to us. Luffy said categorically. Guys, go get some rope for me. If I have to climb this stupid mountain, I'll get her up there. You'll never make it up that mountain. It's 10 kilometers tall. Dalton lifted his voice, to be heard over the crew's murmuring. There's a path up the mountain, but we don't have the power to go there. Which path are you talking about? Luffy and Dalton locked gazes. And what precisely do you mean by powered? The castle plateau has a lift that carries visitors to the peak, but Wapol didn't want people to visit, since almost everyone was complaining to him, some for a good reason, and some were just reminding him how much of a shitty king he was. Going as far as to tell him that his father would be ashamed of what he became, Dalton said with a sigh. When he left, he took out the batteries. We can't charge the damn lift. He quickly added with a grim face. But with my devil fruit, I can directly power it. Luffy said as his whole arm was covered in lightning. This earned a smile from the large man, who quickly nodded his head. I think you can, with a confident grin, Dalton nodded to the captain. When Wapol departed, the lift was left at the foot of the ropeway. We fixed what we could, but it would never work without a new battery. But if you can get the engine to function, you shouldn't have any problems. Dalton, show us where this lift is. As he gazed at Nichiko, Luffy asked. Sure, please follow me. Dalton got to his feet, and the gang dashed back out into the snow. Nichiko had dozed off again as her stretcher was wheeled across town, and the ISO-20's physicians continued to struggle to keep her stable. They didn't have to wait long to get to the lift. The ropeway was just outside of Bighorn, and the lift was still resting on the platform. Luffy was shown the engine by Dalton, and the Straw Hat captain began to work. He raised his hand up, and a bolt of lightning struck his arm, engulfing it in lightning before putting it on the engine. Luffy gradually increased the power until the lift started to move, and the engine whirred to life. Now that he understood how much electricity to provide the machine, he instantly cut the power. Let's get going. We don't want to keep Nichiko waiting any longer than necessary. Nami rushed the ISO-20, as well as the rest of the Straw Hats and Dalton, aboard the elevator. Luffy restarted the motor after everyone was aboard, and Nichiko was safely secured. The elevator started to move again with a buzzing sound. They gradually ascended the ropeway, rising higher and higher into the air until they were far over the trees. The cold landscape spread out under the lift, but the Straw Hats were too preoccupied to notice. As it followed the ropeway, the lift resumed its ascent. As the gusts became stronger, the lift swayed back and forth. Everyone was doing all they could to keep Nichiko and themselves in check. The lift eventually climbed above the clouds and winds. The party exhaled a sigh of relief as they approached the peak. As they approached the peak's platform, Luffy reduced the motor's power, and Dalton applied the brake. The brakes were secured with a lever flick, and the passengers could descend onto the summit plateau. Nichiko, we're nearly there. As they carried the sleeping woman's stretcher inside the castle, Luffy murmured to her. Many folks were perplexed as to why the enormous entrance door was closed. However, no one really questioned it. Everyone was focused on bringing Nichiko to Dr. Kariha as soon as possible. How is she going to hear us? Luffy asked Dalton, who turned to look at Luffy before looking at the enormous gate in front of them. We can just knock. It might take a while, but she will eventually hear us, he said, turning to walk towards the door, and suddenly hearing numerous thunders around him, as if a thunderstorm suddenly engulfed them. Knowing the lightning and the thunderstorm might not be enough, Luffy took a deep breath. Get over here, you old witch, Luffy shouted at the top of his lungs, causing the weather to change slightly, snowing more than usual, which was quite something hard to achieve for a place like the Drum Kingdom. Crazy old witch. What was tea that a strange reindeer spoke with a shaken voice. It seems that the castle has a guest, damn it. I knew I should have worn better clothes. An older lady responded. What should we do? The reindeer asked, still with a shaken voice. Of course, we go there and see what all the fuss is about. You know we always welcome our guests with open arms. Dr. Kariha guffawed as she drew a bottle of liquor from a sled bag. It's possible that someone has delivered a patient to us. Chopper, let's go. Yes, Doctorine. Chopper said as he sped over the snow, the sleigh trailing behind him. The lightning calmed down a short time later. None of them knew that Chopper's life would soon change forever. Chapter 26. Dr. Chopper, and Unicoma. Chapter 27, A Night of Passion. Chapter 28, Port as the Ace. Chapter 29, Ace, Whitebeard and Kaido. Chapter 30, A Wanted Thee. And Chapter 31, My name is Dracul Mihik, the Night Blade, and I have never known defeat. Mihik probably. Kariha and Chopper were walking through the castle, towards the main double door that led inside the castle. Both knew something was urgent. To hear someone scream, calling her old witch was both amusing and insulting. Chopper had returned to his normal form, to look less dangerous, despite knowing they would most likely avoid him. There was only one person who ever saw him as just Chopper, or maybe two now. It has been years now that Dr. Kariha was taking care of Chopper, and even learning from her. Despite having a heart of steel, Chopper still knew she was a good person. Now, as they got closer, they both felt the sudden tension around the air. It was suffocating, at least for Chopper, who wasn't used to this kind of feeling. At that point, he was starting to get scared at the thought of who was behind the door. He could just by smelling the air around him, know there were many people behind the door. Dr. Ina, there are over 20 people behind the door, Chopper informed her, keeping his eyes on the door. While Chopper was afraid of whoever was behind the big door, Kuriha wasn't intimidated in the slightest. While she knew at least one of them behind the door was very powerful, she knew people came to her so she could heal someone, not actually to fight. Not mentioning Kuriha had lived many years, she was at that age that she didn't really fear death or anyone. Don't worry, Chopper, now let's greet our special guests, Kuriha said with a snarky tone before walking forward. Chopper quickly followed her behind. Opening the door, Kuriha quickly recognized 20 of them almost immediately. The way her gaze fell upon those that abandoned their people to serve that king made all 20 doctors look down in shame. Where's Pigwopple? Kuriha quickly noticed the boy with the straw hat. She could tell just by looking at him that the person in charge of this little group was him. Then, her eyes fell upon the sick person, which was held by the 20 doctors on a carrying bed. Her doctor instinct quickly kicked in, seeing her face. Let me check on her, Kuriha promptly said as she walked over to the girl. She didn't know the crew, but figured they could introduce each other later. Luffy did not attempt to stop her as Kuriha quickly checked on Nijiko. The village told him that she was old, and the lady in front of them perfectly fitted her description. It only took a few seconds before she stood up, turning to the small strange tanuki. Bring her inside. Chopper gather antibiotics needed for Kestis disease, Kuriha ordered. Soon, Nijiko was carried inside by the doctors. Luffy noticed how the 20 doctors paled when they heard the name of whatever sickness Nijiko had. Luffy knew whatever it was a bad sickness. Just the way Nijiko was right now was enough to tell him that much. Soon, Nijiko was put in a bed, and Kuriha quickly started treating her, mixing some drugs with water using a spoon. The strange tanuki named Chopper soon returned with a syringe, holding several pills and bottles. Can you save her? Luffy asked with cautious hope in his voice. Nami pursed her lips into a thin line, looking at Nijiko, praying her sister would survive. Yes, don't worry. You bought her just at the right moment. If you hadn't come here for 2 more days, then she would be dead by now, Kuriha explained as she filled the syringe with liquid. The Straw Hat crew were both relieved and paled at what the doctor just said, especially Nami, who sighed in relief, hearing her sister would survive. Suddenly, she felt as if a huge weight was suddenly removed, allowing her to breathe again without the dread that Nijiko wouldn't survive. Nami glanced at her sister. The doctor, whoever she was, started injecting the syringe into her arm. Her sister barely reacted except with a slight wince, but it ended soon. Taking a bottle, she poured a bit of alcohol on the small wound left by the injection. Thank you for helping her, Luffy said, bowing his head at her. No need for that, young man. It is my job as a doctor to help people. You should also thank these so-called doctors. They were with you. I can tell they helped her, Kuriha said, pointing at the 20 doctors who straightened up when her attention turned to them. Almost like soldiers ordered by their commander. Yeah, they did, Luffy quickly confirmed with a nod. Kuriha chuckled slightly before deciding to ask something that she had asked herself since seeing them again on Drum Island, and not in the company of that so-called king. Now, please enlighten me, where is King Wapol? She asked with a sneer when she said his name before drinking whiskey, washing away the bad taste his name left in her mouth. At the bottom of the ocean, Luffy answered with a serious and dark look. To think someone as worthless as that man was actually a king. Luffy knew Vivi was 10 times the ruler he could ever hope to be. Kakakakaka, so the pig finally bites the dust, she said, laughing before raising her whiskey bottle in the air with her arm. Did you hear that, Hirulik? It seems we are finally free, she shouted to the sky with a melancholy look on her face, but laughing at the same time. The Straw Hat crew didn't know who this Hirulik was, but seeing the way the doctors looked down when his name was mentioned, it must mean he was a good man. Now that she's out of the danger, tell me how exactly she got this sickness. Kuriha asked curiously as she scooted out a chair before sitting down. Turning the chair around to face the crew who were still standing, behind Kuriha was a large table with multiple different drinks. You can sit down. No need to stand up like Karis, Kuriha said, putting her elbows behind her on the desk, supporting herself, the whiskey bottle in her hand. She took a quick sip from it. The pirate crew had already sat down. The orange girl, who Kuriha quickly realized was the navigator of this crew due to the log pose on her wrist. The one with a long nose was probably a mechanic or something like that. The blonde one was most likely the chef of the ship due to his clean hands, and not mentioning he smelled of different vegetables, and all sort of different dishes. That must mean he was the chef. For her many years, she had seen many different pirate crews, even the crew of someone like Goldie Roger. Kuriha still remembered the rookie. When she met him, he was only a rookie, someone who was still trying to make a name for himself. Looking at the captain now, she had recognized the straw hat right away. It was a symbol. Roger, despite having that hat for quite some time. His flag was never a skull with a straw hat. The 20 doctors tried to find a place to sit as well, but Kuriha turned to them with a glare. What do you think you're doing? Go to the village and check if everyone is alright. You have already wasted enough time being in the crew with that king, Kuriha ordered with a stern tone. The doctors, one by one, quickly bowed their heads before doing exactly what she was ordering them to do. Luffy was quite surprised by her tone. It reminded him of his grandpa. His voice alone could make anyone do what he ordered them to do, except, of course, being Luffy, Ace, and Sabo. Where does she get that sickness? Kuriha asked again, looking at Luffy again, who leaned ahead from his chair. She got sick like a day after we left Little Garden, Luffy answered. Kuriha grimaced at that. Wow, you guys are very lucky. The government for a long time had tried to destroy the insect that causes this sickness. Of course, this world is large, and they never fully killed every last one. And you just happened to visit one of few islands in the world that had Kesha still around, she explained. The crew didn't think this was actually luck, especially Nami. To think, out of all the islands in the world, this one had that bug, almost killing one of them. Chopper soon returned with a towel soaked. Kuriha smiled at him before putting the towel on her forehead to cool her down. The towel had several pieces of ice inside that Chopper got outside. Standing up, she turned at the pirate crew. Very well, now that the danger is out of the way. Who are you, people? Kuriha asked, eyeing each one. Luffy stepped forward. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, this is my crew, and we are the Straw Hat Pirates, he said, pointing towards his crew as he introduced them one by one. Kuriha's eyes twitched slightly when she heard the name D on the young boy's name. He's a D then, that's quite surprising. It has been a long time since I met one, she thought with a melancholy look on her face, but she quickly turned her face to a happy one with a devil smirk. I see, you're quite young to be pirates, but so are many others. Even the king of the pirates started from somewhere, she said, grabbing a bottle of whiskey, drinking it directly from the bottle, not bothering with pouring it on a small glass. She was no novice. Luffy smiled brightly at her, already liking her, though he noticed her subtle reaction at hearing his name. The captain quickly figured it must be because of his D on his name. Luffy didn't really know what it meant, but he figured he would find out eventually. He knew Ace had a D on his name as well, and according to the old man doctor with Laboon, Roger's real name was Goldie Roger. Yes, and I'm going to become the king of the pirates, Luffy exclaimed with his fists raised in the air with a smile. Chopper's jaw hit the floor when he heard that. He knew just by looking at them that they were crazy, but this was beyond what he had originally thought. Kakakaka, you're quite an interesting young man, but now we must talk about the payment, she said with a sneaky smirk, while rubbing her hands together. Anything you want. Luffy quickly said with complete sincerity. This woman saved his nakama. He was ready to give her whatever she wanted. It didn't matter the price. Kuriha quickly checked the reaction of the rest of the crew, seeing them with folded arms and just waiting for her to speak the price. She knew they must be pretty close, which was a perfect thing for every pirate crew. Now for the ultimate test, to see if this crew really thought the same as their captain. No matter what crew it was, no matter how strong they were or their will or determination they had, if they didn't listen and respect their captain, that crew was doomed to fall like many others before them. I want 45% of your treasure, she demanded, grinning. The captain had no visible reaction at the price, and neither did the rest of the crew. Deal, Luffy quickly said, stretching out his arm for her to shake hands. Kuriha looked at his eyes. She knew a pirate like him would go far. Just how far that remains to be seen. Deal, Kuriha said before they both shook hands. The rest of the crew didn't protest or try to talk her down for a lower price. In her mind, this crew nailed everything down. With that out of the way, the crew turned to look at Chopper. Seeing how he helped and how Dr. Kuriha entrusted him with helping to heal Najiko, they knew he must be a doctor. Okay, Chopper, I'm leaving to prepare something. You take care of our patient and guests, Kuriha said with a smirk, standing up. Of course, Dr. Ina, I will take care of her. Chopper accepted the job without a hint of doubt in his voice. Kuriha had a sly smirk before leaving the room. Chopper was quick to change the cold towel on Najiko's head, helping to keep her temperature steady. Despite taking medicine, it would take some time before she was fully healed and ready to leave. As he was doing his job, Luffy's eyes started to spark like stars in the night sky, something his crew noticed right away. Even Vivi figured immediately what was going through Luffy's head at this moment. Here we go, Nami murmured with an amused smile. Who are you? You must be Tanuki. You're also a doctor. That is super cool, Luffy exclaimed, smiling, walking forward, standing close to Najiko's bed, and looking at Chopper, who was mixing a few ingredients on a bowl. Welcome to the crew, Nami murmured under her breath, knowing Chopper's fate was sealed in stone, and no matter what he did or said wouldn't change Luffy's mind, if not convince him even more. What? I'm no Tanuki, you moron. I'm a reindeer. Chopper shouted back with shark teeth, but the blush on his face showed that he enjoyed not being looked down. Wow, you're awesome. How about joining my crew? Luffy asked, the sparks on his eyes shining more, looking like a face with diamonds on his eyes. Jay, join your crew. Have you lost your mind? Can't you see I'm ugly? I'm a reindeer. I have a blue nose, and just look at me. I'm a monster, Chopper screamed, but his dancing around as he said that completely contradicted it. He was clearly happy that Luffy was complimenting him. Nah, you're not ugly. You have quite a bright personality, not to mention how willingly you helped us. You're a beautiful Tanuki, Luffy stated with a shake of his head, denying what Chopper said about himself. I'm no Tanuki, you idiot, Chopper retorted back, but with a big smile on his face, his body dancing around at the compliment. You must be a good doctor if Dr. Kariha entrusted you with our Nakama. Luffy asked, but more like a statement. Chopper rubbed his head in embarrassment. It was quite a new thing to be praised by someone that wasn't Kariha or his father. Well, Kariha has been teaching me since she started taking care of me. Before that, it was my father, Dr. Hiralik, who found me and took care of me, Chopper said with a sudden sad smile on his face as he remembered his father. The crow perked up at the name, mentioned again by Chopper this time. Who was he? Vivi asked kindly, walking over to Chopper before putting a comforting hand on his shoulder, hoping to ease his sadness. Chopper appreciates it, feeling better already. He was a doctor, he found me alone, I needed help, and he took me in, he taught me about medicine, Chopper said with a growing smile. He must have been a good doctor. Yusuf stated from what he heard up until now, that he must have been a good man. Well, Chopper suddenly said, rubbing his head, not exactly sure how to say this. This caused Nami to raise an eyebrow, noticing the hesitation. Well, Dr. Ina said his treatment was questionable. They work sometimes but not always, Chopper explained, not wanting his father to look like a bad man or some kind of thief in front of the new people. Soon, Chopper found himself telling them about his life with Dr. Hiralik. By the end, everyone was quite saddened by the sad story. Luffy was about to ask Chopper again to join his crew when they heard a loud cough. Turning their necks so fast, Chopper was surprised they didn't snap their own necks. Nichiko, how are you feeling? Nichiko-san. They shouted before with big smiles, hearts in Sanji's case, walking up to her. Nami grabbed her hand, just looking at her. The navigator could see her sister was getting better. How are you feeling, Nichiko? Luffy asked, smiling at her, happy that she was better. I'm feeling better, she answered before looking around, not recognizing the place they were in. Her eyes turned to look at her sister. Where are we? She asked, confused. Nami quickly told her where they were after listening to every word. Nichiko quickly noticed Chopper, who was half hiding behind a chair. Wow, you cute. What's your name? Nichiko asked, looking at the cute Tanuki. The compliment had the desired reaction. Chopper started dancing around with a big smile. Name's Chopper, good to see you awake, Chopper said before checking on her again, asking a few questions about how she was feeling, and if she was feeling dizzy. How long should I stay here? Nichiko asked, already feeling much better, but knowing she still wasn't able to stand up and walk around. Despite feeling better, she felt tired, and her legs felt numb. 1 more week at least. Dr. Inu won't allow you to take a step outside of this castle until you're healed, Chopper informed her. Vivi bit her lower lip at the new information, but knowing Nichiko needed it to get better, she quickly accepted it. Luffy, on the other hand, was thinking of ways to convince the old doctor to allow Nichiko to leave after 3 days. After 3 days. Join my crew, Luffy shouted yet again, for like the 100th time since coming here, chasing Chopper around, the poor Tanuki running around for his life, sometimes calling for Kariha's help, who would just laugh in amusement. Nami was with her sister and Vivi, drinking tea, looking over the window that showed Luffy chasing Chopper. The navigator had asked Sanji for some tea, and the chef was more than happy to serve them. They could hear the commotion outside. It was late morning, the moment they had eaten breakfast. Luffy had started chasing Chopper around, asking for him to join his crew. Zoro was training alone, doing push-ups with several weights around his body, not getting involved with his captain. Usopp was back at Going Merry, saying he needed to check on something and make sure the ship was ready to leave. The crew had quickly decided to leave on the 4th day. Nichiko could already walk around on her 3rd day. Now, she was slowly gaining her energy back. She still felt a bit tired, but it was better than just lying in a bed until she got bored to death. Back at Luffy, Chopper was on his knees. His breath labored. He felt that he had just run for hours without stopping. Behind him, the captain was just grinning like an idiot. Join my crew, Chopper, Luffy asked yet again, but at this point sounded more like an order. I see Cat. Dr. Ina needs me, Chopper said, trying to convince him. He wasn't sure who he was trying to convince at this point. Luffy sat beside him with an understanding look on his face. Tell me, is there anything you want to achieve? He asked with sparks in his eyes. Chopper looked at him, surprised. He hadn't thought the pirate captain would be interested in his dream. Before looking forward again, the village below them, the sea beyond, the weather was quite warm today. Yes, I have a dream, Chopper confirmed. Luffy's eyes turned to stars hearing him say that. My dream is to be able to cure every disease of this world, Chopper admitted with a new fire in his eyes. Something Luffy saw for the first time, that convinced him even more that Chopper was the perfect doctor for his crew. He immediately stood up, his fists raised in the air, his straw hat falling on the snow. Then it settled. You're a new Nakama, sail with us, Chopper, we will travel the whole world, and one day you will achieve your dream, Luffy shouted at the sky before grabbing the straw hat and putting it on Chopper's head. Chopper felt his eyes welling. He nodded. Yes, I will be your doctor, he declared, both smiling and crying at the same time, not noticing Kariha looking at him with a smile on her face. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. Did you hear that, Hiralik? It seems our little Chopper is becoming a big boy, she murmured with a chuckle, ready to set her goodbye plan in motion. Later. No way in hell, Kuriha yelled at Luffy, who was telling her that they needed to leave. The captain tried to tell her that Vivi's homeland was in a civil war, and that she needed to get there as soon as possible, but it seemed all his words fell on deaf ears. I don't care if the end of the world is coming. My rules are that I don't discharge my patients, unless they are healed or dead. Nijiko is clearly neither of those, so she will stay here. Kuriha finished already making up her mind, noticing that Chopper was eavesdropping from behind the door, but sadly for him, he hadn't accounted on his antlers sticking out, basically screaming, "Come on, I'm here." Luffy wasn't ready to give up yet. He had already told his crew to prepare everything. They were just waiting for him, and Chopper, Usopp, was already on the ship, preparing to leave soon. Chopper will be with us. He can take care of us. He's a good doctor, Luffy stated, hoping that would fix the problem, but that seemed to do the opposite when Kuriha glared at the place Chopper was hiding, making Tanuki feel a shiver on his small body. Is he now? She spoke darkly, taking Luffy by surprise, since he could tell she was faking it, despite the acting being on top. Come here, Chopper, Kuriha screamed, suddenly holding a battle axe out of nowhere in her hands. Both Luffy and Chopper screamed as she started chasing them like a maniac. The rest of the crew was waiting. Sanji was wondering what was taking so long when they both heard shouts of terror coming from the double door. Zoro arched an eyebrow when the door was slammed open by Luffy, followed closely by Chopper, who had turned into reindeer, running faster as Kuriha was chasing and throwing axes that seemed were coming out of nowhere. We are leaving now, Luffy ordered. The crew didn't waste time and started using the lift to go down. Soon they reached the ship they were preparing to sail away. As they removed the ship's anchor, Going Merry started gaining speed. Hey, what's that? From the top of the mountain, Usopp spotted something burning and shouted out. The tallest point on which the castle was built. Everyone shifted their gaze to the peak of the mountain. As a series of explosions erupted over the castle, Chopper began to sob, and lovely pink snow began to fall. Dr. Ina. Chopper sobbed as he witnessed his father's wish for Sakura to blossom on their winter island come true. The towering, cylindrical drum Rockies resembled cherry trees in full bloom, which everyone marveled at. It's stunning, Vivi shouted, her face beaming. Amazing. Usopp cheered loudly at the sight. That's a beautiful sight. Who knew the witch could think of something like this? Zoro chuckled as he remembered his days of training as a little boy. I have to be honest, this could be one of the most beautiful sights I have ever seen. While taking a puff of his cigarette, Sanji smiled up at the scene. Everywhere you go, you help people, Luffy. I couldn't ask for a better captain. As their hands clasped and their fingers interlocked, Nami grinned at Luffy. Shishi. Luffy laughed as he watched the pink snowfall. Nami quickly clasped his face before kissing him on the lips. The captain returned to passion, his arm around her waist, bringing her closer. Kuriha 2 hours later. The old witch was standing at the top of the mountain. The ship had disappeared from the horizon by now, but she kept looking where the ship had been. Thinking of her circus son, hoping him the best of luck. He's a big boy now, what do you think, Hiruluk? She murmured before drinking from her bottle. Hearing footsteps, she glanced from the corner of her eye to see Dalton walking toward her with a bunch of posters. What is it? She asked the big man curiously. Dalton searched a bit until he grabbed a specific poster, giving it to Kuriha, who chuckled. 70 million berries, not bad. The kid reminds me of him, he will become a great pirate. Kuriha said, remembering a rookie a long time ago. I will turn this world upside down. Who? Dalton asked, looking at her with curiosity. Boldy Roger. Lemon. In the next chapter you guys know what that means. Chapter 27. A Night of Passion. Chapter 28, Portas the Ace. Chapter 29, Ace, Whitebeard and Kaido. Chapter 30, A Wanted D. Chapter 31, A Night of Love. And Chapter 32, Going Merry, was sailing smoothly towards Alabasta. It had been a week since they left Drum Island. Nijiko had returned back to normal, much to the relief of the whole crew. When Chopper finally announced that Nijiko was cured and didn't need antibiotics anymore, everyone cheered. At that moment, Zoro pulled his favorite bottle with booze, filling a glass for everyone except Chopper, who, according to everyone, was still little. Rising it up in the air, quickly followed by everyone else. For Nijiko, Luffy cheered, soon followed by everyone else who drank. Even Sanji didn't deny the drink, even though he wasn't much into any kind of alcoholic drink. Usopp started coughing like crazy, feeling like his mouth was on fire. That night they celebrated, much to Nijiko's embarrassment, but still, it warmed her heart to see them like this. Lemon. Night. Luffy slammed Nami against the wall, his lips finding hers, who eagerly returned the kiss with pleasure, moaning on the kiss as Luffy squeezed her breasts through her shirt. It was his favorite part, despite his hand not being able to handle her breasts. Suddenly she pulled away, much to Luffy's disappointment. Luffy, I have a surprise for you. She whispered seductively, her hot breath sending shivers on Luffy's body. The cocked an eyebrow. It wasn't normal for Nami to suddenly stop whenever they would start their sexual activity, usually. She was the persistent one, not wanting to stop until she was fully satisfied, which usually meant until she passed out from their lovemaking. What? Luffy asked, slowly kissing her collarbone, a slow and sloppy kiss, adding his own electricity with his devil fruit that was always a turn-on for his navigator. It took all her willpower to not moan in pleasure. Her pussy was wet, she wanted his cock inside her, but she had promised Nichiko. You can come out. Nami called out. Luffy stopped his activity to see Nichiko walking out of the corner, wearing only her blue top that did a poor job at covering her breasts. Her panties hugged her curves very nicely, especially her plump ass, while Nami had bigger breasts. But Nichiko's ass was one that could crush his cock. Nichiko? Luffy said, surprised seeing her here. The Straw Hat Captain wasn't blind to the little look she sent him, but wondered if Nami would be okay with this. Understanding what she wanted, but he wanted to know if Nami was alright with this. She wants to be with us, Luff. Will you accept her? Nami asked, pointing at a clearly nervous-looking Nichiko. His eyes were set looking at the wooden floor, rather than her captain or sister. Luffy smiled warmly at her. That seemed to do the trick, since her eyes left it to look at her captain, who moved over to her, his hands around her waist, bringing her closer. Just the way he touched her naked skin sent shivers on Nichiko's core. Do you want this? Luffy asked, wanting to know if for sure, only for Nichiko to slam her lips on his. Luffy quickly returned the gesture as her arms crossed around his neck. Luffy's fingers moved down to her ass, bigger than his palms, as he squeezed her smooth flesh, earning a loud moan from Nichiko, who felt her pussy was on fire. Nami removed some of her clothes, her fingers on her moist pussy, as her captain was kissing her sister, his right hand squeezing her ass cheeks, the other on her breasts, his fingers rubbing her nipples, driving the blue-haired woman crazy. Thankfully almost all her moans were silenced by Luffy. He spins around, and walks her back towards the bed. When her knees hit the edge, she moves to pull him down, eager to finish what they started. However, Luffy stops her and steps back, seemingly wanting this slower pace. He deftly removes his tight-fitted shirt, revealing the most glorious set of abs Nichiko has ever seen. Her mouth waters as she imagines tracing her tongue along with the dips and grooves. Next, he moves to unbuckle his belt, and Nichiko's breath hitches when Luffy unsheathes his hard and throbbing cock from his trousers, stroking himself in hand. Oh? Luffy, she whispers, almost too quiet to hear. Will that fit? Luffy walks back to her, his cock leaking pre-cum from the tip and bobbing between his legs, and stands in front of her. He takes one hand and rests it lightly on her hip, while the other cups her face, his thumb gently strokes her cheek. Don't worry, Nichiko. We'll take it slow. I'll take care of you. I promise I won't hurt you. Nichiko knows that he is talking about more than just sex. When he leans down to kiss her, it's unlike their first, which was full of passion and frenzy. This time, it's soft, slow, tender. Gently, he pushes her down on the bed, and as she moves back towards the pillows, he follows on his hands and knees, like a wolf stalking its prey. When her head hits the pillow, his lips once again find hers. He pulls away only to kiss along her jaw, nosing his way to her ear to nip and nuzzle on a lobe. She lifts her shoulders slightly when she feels his hand reach to remove her bra. He then lowers his head to kiss along her collarbones and down her chest, lavishing her breasts on the way. Nichiko is panting as he makes his way down her body, his tongue dipping into her navel, before he settles between her thighs. His fingers are tracing the edge of her panties when he looks back up at her, silently asking for permission. Nichiko nods, whispering yes, please. Nichiko throws her head back, and her eyes slam shut when his face disappears between her thighs. She reaches her hand down to cart her fingers through his black hair. She feels the vibrations of his growl on her cunt as she tugs on his locks, encouraging him while trying to get him where she wants him the most. She is keening as he licks, sucks, and teases her, adding his fingers to his sinful ministrations. He's yes right there, Luffy, right there, eat my pussy. Nichiko comes hard with his name on her lips when he latches onto her clit, a white light exploding behind her eyes. He doesn't let up though, instead, he continues to work her through her climax. One of her hands rests lazily on her pillow next to her head and the other on her heaving chest, as she tries to slow the erratic beating of her heart. She tries to control her breathing when she feels him moving up the bed, his lips never leaving her body, leaving a trail of wet kisses. When his lips crash against her own, she moans, feeling the evidence of her arousal on his lips, and tasting herself on his tongue. Luffy finds the hand that is resting beside her head, and slips his palm over hers before intertwining their fingers. He squeezes lightly, letting her know he is there. Nami was fingering herself, her mouth moaning the name her captain, waiting for her turn soon. Nichiko spreads her legs wider, giving him room to settle, and she can feel him hot and ready against her thigh. He continues to tease her, though she can feel him trying to hold back and control himself. He kisses along her neck, his tongue darting out to lick and suck on her pulse point beneath her ear. He runs his cock through her folds, coating himself in her juices, all but avoiding where she wants him the most. Please, Luffy, she begs, her cunt clenching around nothing. I need you inside me. Fuck, Luffy groans into her ear, clearly affected by her pleas. Deciding to end the mutual torment, Luffy reaches down to grab his cock and aligns it with her aching entrance. Nejico's back arches as he slowly slides his cock home, the brief sting from his sighs giving way to delicious pleasure as he gives her time to adjust. As Luffy starts to thrust into her, with slow and rhythmic strokes, Nejico feels his hot breath at her ear. "Fuck, Nejico, you are so tight and wet. Such a good girl taking my cock so well." Nejico whimpers, confluttering at his praise. No doubt sensing her reaction, Luffy continues, albeit with a tinge of smugness dripping from his words. You like it when I call you a good girl, Nejico." Nejico can only nod and mumble a strained yes, as she finds she really does like being Luffy's good girl. Especially when he is fucking her like this. Nejico moves her hands from his biceps, running them down his back, so she can grab and squeeze his plump arse cheeks, signaling him to go faster. "Fuck," Luffy growls as he gets the hint and begins to pick up his pace, his strokes growing increasingly rough as his hips grind against hers, fucking her deeper into the mattress. "Yes, yes, yes, more, more." Harder, she screamed in pure bliss. With the hand that is not still entwined with hers, he reaches down and hooks her thigh over his elbow, opening her up for his thrusts, and reaching a spot deeper inside of her. The room is silent, except for the lewd slaps of their skin, the shallow panting of their breath and Nami's fingers playing with her pussy, her other hand squeezing her breasts. Nejico can feel the tension building at the base of her spine. "Please, Luffy," she whines to let him know she's close. Luffy untangles their clasped hands, to reach between her legs and rub her clit to help her along. 1, 2, 3, and she comes again. "Luffy," she cries. The orgasm that ripples through her body is even more powerful than the first one he gave her. She can feel Luffy tense above her, a low growl emanating from his chest. No doubt he can feel her cunt pulsing round his thick cock, as he chases his own release. Nejico moves to wrap her other leg around his waist, rolling her hips to help him along, and seconds later she feels him still as he spills his hot seed inside of her. "Fuck yeah," he groans in her ear, as he continues to shallowly stroke himself, emptying himself completely. As they both waft down from their high, they lazily kiss one another, still not ready to separate. Luffy lowers Nejico's leg and rests his head in the crook of her neck as she slowly runs her hands up and down his spine, enjoying his weight on her. After a moment, Luffy rolls off Nejico. When she turns, she sees his eyes are closed, his lips are quirked in a soft smile, his body shines with sweat, and his hair is thoroughly tousled. From the looks of it, he feels the same way as she does. Sated, happy, and whole. Soon, Nejico fell asleep, with a big smile on her face. Luffy smirks before looking at an approaching Nami looking at him like a predator. Luffy's legs were moving before he even realized, and he quickly closed the space between him and Nami, wrapping his arms around her front, as he pushed his front into her back. Luffy grinded his cock into her ass, then slid his hands from her revealed stomach, up her crop top to her tits, squeezing them over top of her bra. Luffy heard Nami moan, "Oh, Luffy," and Luffy continued his pursuit, kissing her neck, then planting wet kisses below her ear, before Nami gripped his hair, turning their heads so their mouths could meet. They kissed filthily, their tongues dueling heavily, while Luffy continued to grind his now hard cock into Nami's backside, while she gripped his hand and slid it beneath her bra, so that his hand was gripping her bare tip. Nami pulled away from the kiss first, and then pulled her hands, so they gripped the table in front of her. Using that leverage, she pushed back into Luffy's grinding, and she then spoke, "Yeah, I see you miss me as much as I did." Luffy groaned at her words. Nami then reached around to palm Luffy's cock through his pants. Luffy stripped Nami of her bra, and then palmed her fleshy tits. Luffy was definitely an ass guy, but Nami's tits were the perfect handful, pink-tipped and perky. He loved squeezing and bring her pleasure through them. He then turned Nami around so they were facing each other. Both of them were shirtless, so Luffy reached around and lifted Nami up, then settled her onto the table behind her. He then sealed their torsos and lips together, feeling her chest pressed to his was wonderful. He missed her skin just simply touching his. Instead of the kiss being heated, it turned sweet, and Luffy recognized that they should slow for a few seconds. Nami had a hand in his hair, while the other settled on his abdomen. While Luffy had both hands around Nami's hips. Luffy pulled away from her lips, and seeing them bruised and swollen because of him, had a rush of warmth flowing through him. Luffy set his forehead to hers. "I love you, so much, Nami, it's hard to put into words how much I love you." Luffy pushed a hand into her hair. Luffy felt Nami's hand on his cheek. Her eyes reflected all of the love and feeling he was showing. "I am the same, Luffy. It is hard to explain how much you mean to me." She leaned forward to press a quick peck to his lips. She reached down to palm his cock. Nami then reached down, her hand sliding around the tip of his cock, and Luffy's eyes rolled into the back of his head. Nami continued to work his cock, her hand feeling incredible, the precum leaking out of him, giving it a nice slide against his soft skin. Luffy leaned forward and took Nami's nipple into his mouth, sucking, licking, and biting them both, while he palmed and pinched the other with his hand. Luffy held sliding her panties down. Both of them now completely naked, Luffy pounced. He opened up her legs, and then settled on his knees in front of her. Her pussy was dripping wet, and looking oh so inviting. Nami slid a hand into his hair, and then Luffy was diving in, licking from the bottom of her cunt to the top, then sliding a finger inside of her. Yes, right there. Keep doing that. Nami moaned loudly at his actions, and the grip in his hair turned slightly painful, but Luffy continued. He licked at her clit, pushing the fleshy pebble out of its hood. He kissed, then sucked at it, and he knew Nami loved it when he did that, and slid another finger in her at the same time, which he did. Nami's moan was rewarding and satisfying, and as he continued licking, he felt around her cunt for that one spot that always made her orgasm. Pumping his fingers in and out, he found the spot, and made sure to rub against it as he pumped back and forth. Within a few moments, Nami was groaning loudly. Oh, that's it right there, Luffy gonna cum. Luffy felt her pussy start to clench in need, and within a few seconds, Nami was orgasming, juices flowing into his mouth, onto his hand, and Luffy placed his tongue right over where she was spilling. Loving the taste of his liver as her cunt gushed onto his tongue. Eventually, Nami pushed him away due to overstimulation, but when Luffy rose to his feet, she pulled him to her, immediately plunging her tongue into his mouth, obviously tasting herself on his mouth. Is it filthy? I like tasting myself on your tongue. Luffy only nodded, made mute by Nami gripping his cock again. Luffy then decided that tonight was not a night for fast quick fucks against the table, or bed since Nichiko was sleeping. As fond he was of quickies with Nami, he really wanted to lay her out, and make her scream to the top of her lungs, so without warning, Luffy gripped her hips, and threw Nami over his shoulder. Luffy heard Nami gawk loudly. Luffy, what the fuck? Luffy only chuckled deeply, before giving her ass a swat over his shoulder. Nami moaned, so Luffy did it again, this time, gripping her ass as he laid a spank. Luffy tossed Nami down onto their bed. Nami immediately spread her legs, and Luffy settled in between them. Laying down on top of her, Luffy pressed kisses up her entire body, starting at her ankles, knees, thighs, cunt, hips, stomach, tits, collarbones, then he nibbled up her neck. Before reaching her full lips and pressing a soft kiss there. Luffy gripped his cock and ran the tip through her folds. She then wrapped her legs around him, pulling him closer. She used her hand to notch his cock against her cunt. Luffy then gripped the side of her face. Their eyes quickly met, and Luffy slowly slid the tip of his hard cock inside of his navigator's warm, wet pussy. Nami gripped his hair, bringing his face down to hers, so she could kiss him. Luffy then began his slow thrusting, giving Nami long deep plunges into her cunt, just the way she liked it. Oh, you feel so good, Nami. Her pussy was so wet, so warm, the velvet tunnel wrapped around his cock perfectly, so Luffy thrusted and thrusted, grinding his pelvis into her clit to try and make her cum again. Nami did not disappoint, and within a few more thrusts, Luffy felt her cunt clenching, the telltale signs of her coming release. Luffy reached a hand down to rub at her clit, and a chorus of filthy talk came spewing out of Nami's mouth. Yes, oh Luffy captain right there. Luffy continued to fuck Nami as she orgasmed, prolonging her release. Her pussy clenching in and out around him felt incredible, but they had not been fucking for long enough for him to find release. Suddenly, Luffy felt Nami's feet settle on his abdomen, pushing him away. Luffy sat back on his haunches, looking at his lover. She was breathing heavily, completely disheveled, looking rightfully fucked, but Luffy was still hard, and he knew she would not leave him hanging. Nami took her time though, so Luffy took the time to take her in, her chest, neck. Her cunt was so used and abused it was nearly red, the petals were wet and creamy, while a slight quiver ran through it. Luffy could not help himself and laid forward, licking a wet line along her pussy to collect all of her leftover cum. Nami moaned loudly, but did not push him away, so Luffy took that as permission to clean her up. Using his tongue, he traced around her core, and then followed the trail down her ass. He pushed her hips up slightly, and then licked along her skin, then planted a quick kiss onto her puckered hole. Nami gasped, which led into a moan encouraged him, so he licked across it, then ran his tongue over it again and again. He had done this a few times to his navigator, most times before he fucked her ass, but today he had no plans of doing that. He just knew it brought Nami immense pleasure, and after the view he had of her in her panties, her ass deserved an eating. Luffy went at it for a few moments, really pushing his tongue round his lover's hole, but she once again pushed him away, then sat up. You're ravenous tonight, Captain. Luffy felt his arousal going up. Always for you, Nami. Nami smiled, and they shared a kiss, but Nami gripped Luffy's still hard cock, lie on the bed, and let your navigator take care of you. Luffy smiled happily. He turned and lied back into the pillows. He spread his legs out, and Nami's grip on his cock did not relent. She started to steadily stroke him, before she went down on her stomach to take her cock between her lips. Luffy groaned loudly. Nami was incredible at giving head, her blowjobs often leaving him sputtering for minutes afterward, but tonight he really wished to cum inside of her cunt. Nami really hit him with it quickly, lathering his balls and cock with her tongue, before she took him deep down her throat. Her throat felt incredible, her tongue wrapping around his cock as she plunged up and down, but what really had Luffy aroused was the view he had, Nami brown eyes looking up at him, with his cock deep in her throat, leading to her orange hair splayed out across her back, which only enhanced the view of her plump ass, waving back and forth as she blew him. Oh, how Luffy loved her. Nami began speaking in between plunges. Feels good, Captain Z. Luffy moaned, then slid a hand into her hair. You like your navigator sucking on your cock? Luffy moaned again, and he could feel his release starting to build. She pulled off of him to suck on the tip. Plunging down again, Luffy felt his cock hit the back of her throat, and by sheer force of will, he prevented himself from coming. Pulling Nami off of him, who pouted slightly, Luffy squeezed the base of his cock to prevent the need to come. Nami frowned, but Luffy then urged her onto his cock, so she could ride him. Nami quickly figured out what he wanted, and straddled his hips. I love riding you, Luffy. Luffy reached down to grip his cock, and pushed upwards towards Nami. She adjusted his grip, then notched him against her cunt, and then slowly brought herself down onto him. Nami's breath hitched. Luffy had bottomed out inside of her, and she had not started to move yet, but she quickly shifted her hips, grinding on him to fuck him further. Want to cum so deep I'll struggle to pull out. Luffy added a finger to her clit. Nami moaned, and began to really fuck him, her hips pushing up and down on his cock, while Luffy worked her clit. Luffy pulled their torsos together. With one hand he cupped her ass, with the other he ran it across her lower stomach. Their eyes met. Luffy then added his own thrusts, and he felt his balls churning once again. Every time Luffy spoke, he felt Nami cunt clench slightly, showing how aroused she got. We will keep doing this until you can't even walk tomorrow, Luffy whispered in her ear. With those words Nami exploded, her cunt squeezing Luffy tightly. Luffy couldn't hold it anymore, and thrust it as far into Nami as he could, spraying his seed into her pussy, feeling the mixture of his and hers release settle around his cock inside of her. Luffy didn't pull out right away, letting his cock push his cum deeper into his lover's cunt. Nami settled on top of his chest, nuzzling into his neck, while their sweaty torsos slid together. One more time? Luffy asked. Nami giggled before resuming their activities. That night, they did it 3 more times, Nezuko waking up after the second, doing it with Luffy again before Nami started all over again. Well that is it for now, so I guess we are going to end this part, maybe part 3. So make sure to like and subscribe if you want more. With that out the way, see you guys later.